An elf girl slides him a single gold coin and basically tells bro, here's your chance to stop living on nightmare difficulty, but the rest is on you. The story goes down in the Farid Kingdom inside the labyrinth city of Artoria. This place is so cooked that dungeons literally spawn out of nowhere. So every wannabe main character and loot goblin adventurer pulls up here trying to test their gear and flex their stats. Meanwhile, in one crusty alley, Istolfa is sitting there looking absolutely nerfed by life itself, stomach growling like a boss monster. Bro is starving and has zero money to his name. As he gets up to figure something out, some local bums ask if he's going herb farming again. They joke about how he gets decent pocket money from it and wish him luck finding herbs before someone else already stole the whole spawn point. As Tolfa just stares at them like he's too tired for this NPC dialogue and keeps moving. The townspeople spot him and instantly start yapping. They call him Weeder Boy and clown him for constantly getting his money stolen. Even so, they admit he somehow survived after getting kicked out of his house because of poverty. The fact that he avoided slave traders already puts him above half the city population, which is honestly tragic. They say he's hardworking and stubborn for not completely crashing out after everything life threw at him. Leaving all that background chatter behind, Istolfa heads through the city and toward the outer gate. Buldegard recognizes him immediately and asks if he's heading out to gather herbs again. Istolfa admits that it's literally the only thing he can do right now, but the guard is surprisingly chill and tells him not to overdo it. Unfortunately, peace lasts about 3 seconds because Eelpuff bumps into this massive dude who acts like he got hit by a truck even though Eelpuff is the one eating pavement. The guy's buddy immediately goes full Twitter detective and tells him to check his wallet, while the big dude grabs Eelpuff by the collar acting like bro committed grand theft. Thankfully, the guard steps in and tells the newcomers to calm down before they get kicked out. Then the guard notices the bracelet on the bulky guy's arm and realizes he's a silver-class adventurer. The dude instantly gets smug, basically saying, actually, people like me are the reason this city survives, lil bro. Bro really hit him with a do you know who I am combo. The guard clearly cannot stand this man but still lets him through after asking what business they have there. The adventurer says he came to test his abilities in the famous labyrinth city. As Tolfa watches the silver bracelet like it's an endgame item drop and quietly tells himself that one day that's gonna be him. He heads deep into the area to gather herbs, but hunger is slowing him down hard. Even getting fruit is risky because the forest is crawling with monsters, and fighting bare-handed is basically asking for a speedrun to the afterlife. He keeps wishing he at least had a knife or some kind of tool. In his head, he knows that if he had a weapon, he could go deeper into the forest, maybe even into the dungeon itself. If he could fight monsters properly, maybe his whole life could finally change. While he's busy daydreaming about becoming less broke, someone quietly walks right up behind him. The second he notices, he nearly jumps out of his skin. The woman laughs and asks if she scared him. Istolfa immediately hits the "nah, I'm good" response, even though bro almost ascended from fear 2 seconds ago. Then he actually looks at her properly. Blue eyes, pale skin, long ears, insanely expensive gear. This woman is built like a premium DLC character compared to the random adventurers from earlier. She notices he can tell the difference between poisonous plants and real herbs, and comments that he's surprisingly skilled. As Tolfa explains that he bought the information from the guild, the girl says at least the guild people know their stuff even if they love money more than breathing oxygen. She points out that herbs sell for decent money, and as Tolfa explains, he has no family, no savings, and no backup plan. This is literally his only source of income, so even tiny amounts matter to him. The girl looks him over and basically says, okay, but why do you still look like life beat you with a frying pan? In the heat of the moment, Istolfa accidentally admits that people steal his money. The girl looks shocked, so he explains that he sleeps on the streets because he can't afford an inn. And every time he hides his savings, somebody steals it while he sleeps. The girl sighs and says humans are hopeless. She already heard the city was rough, but hearing the actual details makes it sound even more cooked. Istolfa tries to leave, but the girl asks for his name first. After he introduces himself, she tosses him something. He catches it and immediately starts panicking because bro is suddenly holding a gold coin worth 10,000 yen. His brain basically blue screens on the spot. The girl says it's compensation for interrupting his work plus payment for the information. Istolfa tries refusing because nobody in his life has ever been this generous without hidden DLC terms and conditions attached. The girl shuts that down instantly and tells him to just accept it. She says all she's giving him is a chance. Whether he wastes it or changes his life is completely up to him. Istolfa realizes this amount could actually get him a dagger, maybe even enough equipment to start fighting monsters properly. For the first time ever, bro sees a possible escape route from Poverty Simulator. The girl says she likes hard-working kids and tells him to keep pushing through. Istolfa becomes fully locked in after hearing this light elf Wonsan motivational speech. Calling her Wonsan embarrasses her though, so she tells him her name is Stella and says she hopes they meet again. As she walks away, Istolfa notices the golden bracelet on her arm. Gold-class adventurer, bro almost starts buffering from the realization. The determination hits him instantly because now he wants to reach that level someday too. His next stop is Fleet's armor shop. He's looking around when the owner suddenly grabs him, thinking he's trying to steal something. Once he realizes it's Istolfa, he lets go and jokes that he still looks like he got folded by life as usual. Then he laughs and asks if Istolfa is somehow here as an actual customer for once. The owner nearly glitches when Istolfa pulls out a gold coin and says he wants weapons because he's planning to become an adventurer. The owner praises him for somehow obtaining a gold coin but keeps it real by saying that amount is nowhere near enough for fancy armor. Istolfa says he doesn't care about quality and just wants whatever he can afford. The owner pats his head and promises he'll set him up properly. He also tells Istolfa to take a bath because bro smells like he's been fighting raccoons for XP. He even includes the shower fee in the bill and tells his daughter Kay to guide him there. Istolfa sniffs himself while the owner explains that taking care of yourself matters if you want to be an adventurer. Kay takes him to the bath area and apologizes because the water isn't hot. She gives him soap too and tells him to actually wash his hair properly because that thing is fighting for its life. Istolfa thanks her and starts cleaning himself up. While waiting outside, Kay quietly apologizes for not being able to help him before. She says her father always worried about him, so seeing him finally getting a chance makes her really happy. Then her father calls for her, so she leaves fresh clothes outside the door before heading away. Istolfa wants to answer but honestly doesn't even know what to say. Later, after the bath, Istolfa returns looking like a completely different person. The owner hands him an iron sword, adventurer clothes, shoes, a sturdy bag, and a belt. Then he casually says everything together costs exactly 10,000 yen, including food. Istolfa is stunned because bro expected one rusty spoon and maybe emotional support, not a whole starter pack. When he asks why the owner is helping him this much, the owner points outside toward the alley full of jobless adults wasting away. He explains that those grown men might be bigger than Istolfa, but none of them even have the courage to fight monsters or try changing their lives. They just rot there waiting for disaster. Then he asks Istolfa's age, and hearing that he's around 13 makes the owner even more serious. He says he can't save everyone because he's running a business, but he respects kids who are genuinely trying to rise above their situation instead of giving up. The owner tells him to eat the bread he prepared. The second Istolfa takes a bite, bro almost descends. After surviving off random weeds for so long, this tastes like a 5-star Michelin meal sponsored by the gods themselves. He starts crying while eating because it's the first time in forever that he actually feels human again. The owner gets surprised seeing him cry over bread and tells him to drink something too. Once Istolfa puts on the adventurer gear, he can barely believe how different he looks. The sword feels expensive, but the owner explains it's just a normal iron blade made with care. Still, to Istolfa, it might as well be Excalibur. The owner smiles and says he finally looks like a real adventurer now. Even Istolfa feels like he's looking at a completely different person. For the first time ever, bro realizes change might actually be possible. And at that moment, he knows he has to thank Stella someday. Geke tells Istolfa that once he becomes rich, he better not forget to promote their shop too. Bro instantly gets fired up and promises he will. But the owner cuts in and tells him not to feel pressured by her sales manager behavior. Geke really out here securing future sponsorships before the kid even kills his first slime. After saying his goodbyes, Istolfa leaves the shop, but his eyes drift toward the alley where the hooligans hang around. He realizes something important. The second he got money, people started treating him like an actual human being. That thought hits hard. If he wants to keep living like a decent person instead of a street NPC getting farmed for lunch money, then he needs a stable way to make money. And for that, he has to become a real adventurer, the kind who stacks cash and can someday stand in front of Stella without looking like life's chew toy. For all of that to happen, there's only one place left to go. The reason this city is called the Labyrinth City. The reason adventurers keep flooding into this place like it's a gacha banner with boosted rates. Right in the center of the city stands the dungeon itself. As Istolfa stares at it, he gulps hard because bro is basically looking at the entrance to either greatness or the world's fastest respawn screen. Suddenly, someone recognizes him as the Weeder Boy and pats him on the shoulder. Istolfa turns around and sees Nordy, who immediately asks if this is finally his dungeon debut. Istolfa proudly says yes. Nordy explains that dungeons are these mysterious caves that appear randomly out of nowhere. Nobody actually knows where they connect to. Maybe the edge of the world, maybe the realm of gods, maybe monster headquarters. Honestly, the lore devs forgot to drop patch notes on this one. What people do know is that the dungeon below them is packed with monsters, but also loaded with insanely valuable treasures and resources. That's why adventurers risk their lives going in there every day. After giving him the quick tutorial dialogue, Nordy wishes him luck and heads off. Istolfa walks toward the dungeon entrance and greets the guard stationed there. The guard instantly clocks him as a first-timer because his gear is basic as hell and looks like a starter bundle from a discount RPG. He warns Istolfa not to do anything reckless and reminds him to bring back a magical stone from the monsters, since those are usually found near their cores. Istolfa is surprised hearing about magical stones, but the guard explains that he's only telling him this as a freebie today because information normally costs money. Bro really got the beginner support package activated. As Istolfa steps inside, he keeps repeating the guard's words in his head even though he still has no clue what a magical stone actually looks like. Still, he knows he's already come this far, just a little further, and everything in his life might finally start changing. He He reaches the exit of the tunnel, and as his eyes adjust to the bright light, a massive open land spreads out before him. And just like that, the adventures of Astolfa officially begin. Bro finally loaded into the main game instead of surviving the tutorial arc. Everything literally starts because of one 10,000 gold coin. Stella, the famous adventurer who handed it to him, told him, "It's up to you what you do from here." And that line stays living rent-free in Astolfa's head. Now Bro is fully dreaming about becoming a top-class adventurer just like her. As he steps into the dungeon for the first time, Astolfa instantly gets hit with confusion damage. Because this place is massive. There's actual grass, open land, and somehow even a sun, even though he's supposed to be underground. Bro expected dark caves and skeletons, not Minecraft ultra-realistic shaders. That's when reality hits him. This really is the dungeon, the mysterious labyrinth nobody understands. Nobody knows what's truly hiding inside, and the information about the deeper areas costs so much money that Astolfa can't even afford to buy the guidebook DLC yet. Still, one thing is clear. Bro has no choice except moving forward. Astolfa starts running, but after a while he realizes the scenery barely changes no matter how far he goes. At this point he starts thinking he either lost direction or the dungeon devs copy-pasted the same field 50 times. Then finally, he notices someone in the distance. He thinks it might be another adventurer, but once he gets closer he realizes that thing is definitely not human. A goblin appears, thankfully it hasn't noticed him yet, so Astolfa realizes this is his chance to lock in. He rushes forward to attack, but the goblin reacts way faster than expected and smacks him back several feet. Bro instantly realizes he's getting boxed by the weakest monster in the game. That's actually terrifying. If he can't even beat a goblin, then his adventurer career is ending before the intro credits finish rolling. So he charges again. This time he dodges the goblin's attack and swings his sword properly. The goblin drops and Astolfa thinks the fight is over. Then he remembers the guard talking about magic stones, so he starts checking the goblin's chest like a confused loot goblin himself. Suddenly the goblin wakes back up. Bro almost gets jumped immediately, but an arrow flies in and saves him at the last second. Stella appears like she spawned in with perfect timing hacks. She tells him not to lower his guard because goblins are called beginner eliminators for a reason. Those little gremlins fight dirty. Astolfa is shocked to see her again, but Stella praises him for trying hard. He thanks her for saving him, but Stella says she volunteered to help because most people she saves end up complaining instead of being grateful. Bro really learns that some adventurers survive with negative IQ and maximum ego stats. Stella even says she's amazed she managed to deal with people like that this whole time because half of them barely stay alive after she leaves. Astolfa laughs and asks if she's exploring the dungeon too, but Stella says she actually came here to see him. Bro gets even more confused. Stella explains that she figured if he truly used the gold coin to change his future, then eventually he'd come to the dungeon. She looks him over and says he cleaned up way better than expected too. She thought he'd just buy some rusty secondhand sword, but instead he managed to get proper gear. Astolfa explains that the shop owner picked everything for him, and Stella says that's actually a good sign because it means he's been living honestly and carefully this whole time. Astolfa thinks that sounds weird considering he's been surviving on the streets like a side character in a depression montage, but Stella still calls that diligence. Suddenly, Astolfa notices the goblin corpse disappeared. Bro panics immediately and wonders if the thing got back up again, but Stella calmly explains it's just time up. Apparently monsters inside the dungeon don't leave corpses because the dungeon environment is completely different from the outside world. So if he wants the magic stone next time, he needs to grab it fast before the body disappears. Astolfa feels absolutely scammed by the tutorial experience, but Stella tells him it's normal since this is his first dungeon run. Even after embarrassing himself and getting carried by Stella like an NPC escort mission, he still thanks her and promises he'll do better next time. Then Bro immediately leaves before listening to anything else she tries to say. Stella watches him run off and quietly picks something up from the ground while saying there will be another chance later. After that, Astolfa keeps running until he finds another goblin. This time he remembers Stella's advice, charges in properly, and takes the goblin down in one clean strike. Bro finally gets his first legit kill. He immediately grabs the magic stone before the body disappears and stares at it curiously. He has no clue what this thing actually does, but since the guard mentioned it, he knows it's probably valuable. At this point, his entire financial strategy becomes collect shiny rocks and pray. He notices the goblin's body vanish exactly like Stella said. Then he realizes something else weird. The goblin didn't walk into view earlier. It literally felt like it just spawned in front of him out of nowhere. The weather is clear, the field is wide open, and yet these monsters somehow appear without warning. This dungeon really said, object permanence is optional. And speaking of things appearing out of nowhere, another goblin suddenly attacks him from behind. Astolfa barely blocks the strike with his sword and notices something horrifying. The goblin is carrying a dagger. Goblins normally don't use weapons like that, and now Bro realizes he's outmatched because he only has a basic sword. Instead of panicking though, Astolfa suddenly throws his sword straight at the goblin. The monster gets distracted long enough for him to rush in and punch it. Honestly, Bro just hit a goblin with the random nonsense combo and somehow it worked. The goblin falls, so Istolfa jumps on top of it and finishes it off using the goblin's own dagger. He thanks the heavens that goblins aren't exactly Mensa members. Then reality hits again. His sword is gone somewhere in the grass. Bro instantly starts stressing because Fleet is absolutely gonna roast him if he finds out the sword got lost 5 minutes after purchase. Still, having no weapon inside the dungeon is an even bigger issue. Istolfa looks at the dagger and realizes it's actually sharper than his sword anyway, which is already broken now. Since he has no money for repairs, keeping the dagger sounds like the smarter move. He closes his eyes and literally asks God for permission to keep the dagger like some desperate RPG protagonist. But the moment time up activates, both the goblin and the dagger disappear. Even worse, the magic stone vanishes too while he's busy yapping to himself. Bro fumbled the loot because he started monologuing. Completely exhausted, Istolfa drops to the ground. Then he notices something sparkling in the grass nearby. He walks over and finds another dagger, except this one looks completely different and even newer than the previous one. Now he starts wondering if God actually answered him personally with a legendary starter gift. Then he immediately rejects that idea because even he knows that sounds delusional. Instead, he comes up with another theory. Maybe if you don't take the magic stone before the monster disappears, the dungeon gives you a random item instead. The problem is testing that theory sounds insanely risky, especially since he still needs more money before he can afford proper dungeon information. Right now, he's barely standing on the line between person and street goblin victim, financially speaking. Still, he starts thinking that maybe the world isn't as cruel as he believed. In the end, he decides to look around for his sword a little more. After moving through the grass, he suddenly notices another adventurer standing nearby while casually holding his sword. Istolfa quickly starts the conversation, and the adventurer asks if the weapon belongs to him. Istolfa happily confirms it and asks if the guy has been standing there the whole time. The adventurer immediately understands what happened and asks if Istolfa thinks he just appeared like the monsters do. Istolfa asks if that's not the case, and the adventurer explains he's been there the whole time. According to him, the monsters don't magically spawn from nowhere either. This meadow only looks calm and peaceful. In reality, it's extremely dangerous. The wide visibility tricks people into thinking they can see everything, while the tall grass hides whatever's actually nearby. That's why this area is called Blindfold Meadow. Honestly, the dungeon naming committee cooked with that one. The adventurer then asks about the dagger Istolfa is holding. Istolfa explains it appeared after killing a goblin. The man tells him that goblin scouts usually drop daggers like that and that stores sell them for 30,000 yen. Bro almost flatlines hearing that 3 whole gold coins for 1 dagger. Istolfa is holding generational wealth in goblin form. The adventurer tells him not to overthink it and hands back his sword. Istolfa thanks him because losing the sword right after buying it would have been insanely tragic. The adventurer tells him to be more careful because not everyone is nice. Istolfa says that everyone he's met today has actually been kind to him. The adventurer pauses for a second and then says, "Then I'll be your first bad guy." Istolfa has absolutely zero time to process that sentence because suddenly his legs give out and he collapses to the ground. The adventurer calmly explains that he used a tranquilizer with instant effect. Thankfully, the side effects are light depending on the dosage. Then Bro casually reminds him that this is Blindfold Meadow, so strange things hiding in the grass shouldn't really surprise him anymore. The adventurer looks down at Istolfa with absolute disgust and reminds him that this place is called Blindfold Meadow for a reason. If weird stuff is hiding behind the tall grass, then nobody's gonna question it. Istolfa desperately tries to move his body, but the tranquilizer got Bro lagging in real life. His limbs are basically disconnected from the server. The adventurer casually picks up the dagger and examines it, saying it's an iron dagger with magic enchantment on it. Still, as far as magical weapons go, it's bottom-tier trash. Bro is basically raiding stolen loot like a marketplace reseller. He wonders if he can at least sell it for decent money, but Istolfa weakly tells him to give it back. The adventurer immediately says it belongs to him now and even threatens to stab Istolfa if he keeps whining. Bro really said your loot has been permanently reassigned. Terrified, Istolfa starts yelling for help, but the adventurer just laughs. He explains that this meadow is isolated so almost nobody can hear or see what happens here. Then he compares the whole situation to some tragic play called A Piteous Corpse Slayed by a Goblin. Bro is actually role-playing while committing robbery. That's a whole different level of joblessness. The guy says it's honestly unfortunate that Istolfa got a tiny bit of luck just to run into someone terrible like him right after. Istolfa feels completely helpless, but even then he still doesn't want to die. At this point, Bro is mentally screaming at every god in existence to send backup. Then suddenly the adventurer's arm drops onto the grass, straight up falls off. The man instantly starts shrieking in horror while blood goes everywhere, and Stella walks into the scene saying it really would have been tragic if Istolfa died in here and became goblin dinner. The adventurer is freaking out over his missing arm, but Stella casually says it's not even a major injury. Bro just got disassembled and she rated it minor damage. Istolfa calls out to her in relief, but Stella tells him to wait a second because she wants to clean things up first. The adventurer desperately crawls around looking for his arm while Stella slowly approaches him. Now suddenly this man wants help. Istolfa finds that hilarious because he was literally the one talking about how useless it is to call for help in Blindfold Meadow. The karma really speedran this man's downfall. Once Stolfa finishes handling business, she walks over to Astolfa and removes the paralysis effect. She asks if he can move properly now, and Astolfa confirms while shakily moving his body. The realization that he's still alive hits him all at once, and Bro immediately starts crying while thanking Stolfa. Stella hugs him to calm him down while he keeps sobbing into her clothes. Honestly, little dude genuinely thought he was about to get packed up permanently over a goblin dagger worth 3 gold coins. After he finally calms down a bit, Stella explains that she chased after him because she was worried, so she's glad she made it in time. Astolfa apologizes for running off earlier, but Stella says she doesn't mind. Instead, she suggests leaving the dungeon for now because even if he wants to keep exploring, taking a break first is smarter. Then she gently rubs his cheek and says she has something important to tell him once they're outside. Later, they arrive at an insanely fancy place outside the dungeon, and Astolfa is just staring around like Bro accidentally entered a 5-star hotel cutscene. After offering him some hot milk, Stella explains that this is the inn she's staying at. Since their conversation might take a while, she figured somewhere comfortable would be better. Then Stella casually places the cup down and asks Astolfa if he wants to become her husband. Bro's brain instantly blue screens. Astolfa has absolutely no clue how to process that sentence, so Stella clarifies that she means becoming an actual married couple. She explains that he's basically perfect in her eyes. Most people who survive the kind of life he had would have become bitter, twisted crash-outs by now. But somehow, even after everything, he never lost sight of his goals. He kept working hard, stayed determined, and never completely gave up. Stella says not everybody can do that, which means Astolfa passed her test. But Astolfa immediately panics and reminds her that he's literally 13 years old. Bro is fighting for his life, trying to dodge this marriage speedrun. He also says there have to be way better people out there than him. Stella admits that's probably true, but she says there's a very specific reason it has to be him. Then she stands up and creates a tiny flame in her hand using magic. She explains that elves are naturally gifted with massive magical power, which lets them casually do stuff like this. Out of all races, elves basically rolled max magic stats at character creation. The problem is they also got hit with a brutal nerf. Apparently elves can't have children with other elves because of their overwhelming magical power. That means they can only have children with races that have low magical power instead. Stella says the second she saw Astolfa, she realized his magic power was unusually low. Then she drops the bombshell. Bro has 0 magic, actual 0. Astolfa is stunned hearing this and asks for clarification, but Stella explains there's almost no chance he'll ever use magic properly. He'd probably struggle to even cast beginner-level spells like Little Fire. Hearing that completely crushes him because every adventurer needs magic to survive dungeons at higher levels. Finding out he's magically bankrupt feels absolutely fatal to his dreams, but Stella quickly tells him not to give up yet. She explains that when adventurers defeat monsters, their bodies absorb tiny amounts of magical power and become stronger. Normally, this strengthens the magic already inside someone, but because Astolfa has absolutely none to begin with, all that absorbed power would probably go straight into enhancing his physical abilities instead. Basically, Bro is accidentally built for a strength build. Astolfa slowly realizes that even without magic, he can still become powerful. Stella tells him that instead of trying to become some average all-rounder adventurer, he should focus entirely on one specialty. If he does that, becoming a top-class adventurer might actually stop being just a fantasy. Then Astolfa offers to personally teach him everything about becoming an adventurer. For Astolfa, this is basically like a level 1 player getting recruited by the top-ranked guild leader in the entire server. And Astolfa casually sweetens the deal by saying he'd also get a cute bride out of it too. Bro is fighting for his life in this conversation. She says she's made her offer, so now she wants his answer. Astolfa remembers how helpless he felt against that criminal earlier. If another guy like that attacks him while he's weak, then it's completely over for him. So first he needs strength. Real strength. He apologizes to Stella and admits he's not ready to think about romance or marriage because right now all he can focus on is becoming a proper adventurer. Still, he says he genuinely wants her to become his mentor. Stella thinks about it for a moment before agreeing. Apparently she interprets this as master and disciple arc first, romance route later. Astolfa is shocked she accepted so easily, but Stella reminds him that elves basically don't age normally, so she has all the time in the world. Plus, she says relationships sometimes naturally develop over time between a master and disciple. Bro completely ignores the terrifying implications behind that statement. Instead, he politely asks her to take care of him from now on. Stella officially announces that they're now master and disciple before introducing herself again properly. Astolfa excitedly greets her too, but Stella immediately says calling her master feels too distant. According to her, he could always just call her wife instead. Yeah, Bro is not surviving this elf woman. After settling all that, Stella says their next step is heading to the guild so they can officially register as a party. After that, they need to deal with Astolfa's broken sword. Astolfa immediately agrees because he still needs to apologize to Fleet for destroying the weapon basically 5 minutes after buying it. But Stella reveals that isn't actually what interests her. She's interested in the shop itself, and judging by that smile on her face, she's definitely plotting something. At the Adventurers Guild, Stella explains that Astolfo wants to officially create a party, even though Bro is still rocking beginner status. Stella tells him to show the magical stone he got earlier, and the guild worker instantly recognizes it as a goblin magic stone. The man asks if Astolfo really defeated the goblin himself, and once he confirms it, Stella immediately starts hyping him up like his personal PR manager. She tells the guild worker that Astolfo is already good enough to join a proper party. The guild buys the magic stone from him, and just like that, the Eltria branch officially recognizes Astolfo as an adventurer by giving him a bronze bracelet. The ranking system goes bronze, copper, iron, red copper, silver, gold, and finally pure gold. Basically, Bro just unlocked the tutorial survivor rank. The guild worker tells the other adventurers to welcome their new comrade, so everyone starts cheering and wishing him luck. Stella comments that this is what being an adventurer is like, pretty fun honestly. Astolfo gets emotional because for the first time in his life, people are acknowledging him as something other than weed-collecting side NPC. Bro bows his head and thanks everyone properly. Once they leave the guild, Astolfo asks Stella about the meaning behind their party name, Gladio. Stella explains it's an old elf word meaning the vast land. Apparently it matches the color of his hair and the soil of the land, so she thinks it fits perfectly. When Astolfo asks why she picked that name specifically, Stella casually says it's because she plans to raise him into a man capable of leading her someday. Bro just laughs nervously because this elf keeps dropping marriage foreshadowing every 5 minutes. But Astolfo says they're heading to the weapon shop now, and after that they'll return to the inn. Astolfo is surprised because that's all they're doing today, but Astolfo reminds him a ton already happened. According to her, Bro already speedran enough emotional damage and character development for one day. Even so, Astolfo can't stop thinking about becoming stronger. Now that he's officially recognized as an adventurer, he feels like he has to grind dungeons non-stop if he wants to survive. While he's lost in thought, someone suddenly calls his name. Astolfo looks up and sees Fleet, who's shocked to see him again this quickly. Apparently, Astolfo was so deep in his own anime protagonist monologue that he didn't even realize he'd already arrived at the shop. Fleet asks what he needs, but before Astolfo can answer, Stella introduces herself. Fleet immediately looks at her suspiciously, because Bro's racism against elves activates on sight. Stella happily says she's Astolfo's teacher now, and Fleet instantly refuses to believe any of this. He asks Astolfo if he's getting scammed by some random elf woman. Stella fires back by asking if he seriously thinks she has ulterior motives for helping him. Fleet straight up says he wouldn't trust a single word coming from an elf. He even asks if she's one of those newbie hunters targeting rookie adventurers. Stella claps back immediately and asks if Fleet intentionally gave Astolfo a decent weapon so other adventurers would target him too. At this point, the air between them is so toxic that Astolfo is just standing there buffering in confusion while his dad and mom fight. Stella then asks Astolfo to show Fleet the broken sword. The second Fleet sees the crack, he's horrified. He examines it carefully and says damage like this is really bad, then asks if Astolfo fought an enemy with a unique weapon. Astolfo apologizes for breaking the sword on literally day 1, but Fleet says the important thing is that he survived. Then Fleet explains something interesting. In order to repair this sword properly, Astolfo actually needs to keep fighting monsters. Stella agrees because the weapon is made from dungeon iron. Since Astolfo has no clue what that means, Stella explains it's a special metal taken from the dungeon itself. Yui says he collected broken dungeon weapons, melted them down, and reforged them. According to rumors, both dungeon monsters and dungeon weapons are created from the magical power inside the labyrinth. That's why monsters disappear after dying instead of leaving corpses. Adventurers become stronger by absorbing tiny bits of that magical power after battle. But Astolfo points out that this doesn't work the same for everyone. Weapons made from dungeon iron can actually grow stronger too. If you crush magic stones filled with magical energy and use them on the weapon, it gradually evolves just like a person leveling up. Because of that, when the sword fights dungeon monsters, it can slowly repair itself over time. Basically, Fleet accidentally gave Astolfo a weapon with built-in self-healing DLC. Astolfo thinks it sounds insanely cool and asks why Fleet gave him something this valuable. Fleet explains that regular weapons constantly need maintenance, and since Astolfo obviously can't afford repair fees every week, he figured this was the smarter option. He acts like it's no big deal, saying it used to be junk anyway, and that he chooses which customers deserve his gear. Joel Stella immediately realizes Fleet secretly has a soft spot and comments that dwarves are something else. Fleet instantly snaps back that he doesn't want to hear that from some arrogant elf creature. Bro really turned into a fantasy Twitter user the second she walked in. Fleet asks about Astolfo's plans next because going back into the dungeon with a cracked sword sounds insanely risky. Stella suggests selling the goblin dagger to buy proper armor instead. But Astolfo hesitates because that dagger feels like proof of all the effort he put in. Then Stella starts absolutely cooking him with facts. How she explains the dagger is specifically meant for magic users, because it doubles as a magic wand. Since Astolfo has 0 mana, keeping it is basically the equivalent of owning a gaming PC with no electricity. Even Fleet agrees with her, and says improving defense is more important right now anyway. He points at the broken sword and says he can already tell Astolfo fights recklessly. If he'd carried a shield, the sword probably wouldn't have ended up broken like this. Plus, armor expands the ways he can fight while helping him survive longer. Istolfa still can't decide, so Stella tells him that being an adventurer means thinking carefully before acting. He needs to constantly ask himself what he requires to become stronger and what decisions actually help him survive. In the end, she reminds him it's still his choice. Istolfa stares at the dagger for a long moment and finally realizes what he needs to do. Even though it hurts, Bro grits his teeth and decides to sell it for armor instead. After settling that matter, Fleet warns Istolfa to stay safe on the way back and tells him to ditch the elf ASAP because nothing good ever comes from dealing with elves. Stella immediately gets annoyed, so Istolfa asks the obvious question about whether elves and dwarves just naturally hate each other. Stella admits they instinctively clash, but she still compliments Fleet's craftsmanship after seeing the new armor. The hard leather set comes with shoulder guards, leg guards, and even a steel dagger bonus. She tells Istolfa the equipment looks good on him, and honestly, Bro finally looks like a real low-level RPG protagonist instead of a starving side quest victim. But suddenly, Istolfa feels chills run down his spine. He looks back toward the alley and notices the hooligans from before watching him. Stella tells him not to pay them too much attention because they won't attack directly right now, but she warns him to stay careful because they're definitely targeting him. Instantly, bad memories hit him. He remembers them stealing from him, beating him up, and treating him like trash. Another chill runs through his body because he knows if he gets careless even once, they'll take everything again. His gear, his money, his progress. He'll end up right back in that filthy alley struggling to survive every single day. That fear makes something click inside him. Istolfa tells Stella he wants to become stronger. Stella smiles proudly and says that's good, but training starts tomorrow. Istolfa immediately wants to argue because Bro's grindset mentality is going full Sigma mode, but Stella cuts him off before he can speak. She says she already knows what he's thinking. Specifically, that if he stops working hard even for a second, tomorrow might disappear. When Istolfa quietly admits she's right, Stolfa tells him his way of thinking makes sense, but it's still wrong. Then she hugs him and explains that he's sacrificing all his happiness today just for tomorrow's sake. But if someone spends every single day suffering only for the future, then eventually tomorrow never truly arrives. From everything she's heard, Istolfa barely rests at all. According to Stella, resting properly is also part of becoming stronger. Istolfa tries to object again, but Stella instantly shuts him down with teacher authority. Bro got hit with the because I said so special attack. Still, he realizes these are words coming from the person he wants to become like someday, so he accepts it. He promises himself he'll rest today and do his best tomorrow instead. Bro got the in. Stella yawns and says it's time to sleep. She's completely caught off guard when Istolfa just says goodnight and casually lies down on the floor in the corner. Stella walks over and asks what he's doing, and Bro innocently replies that he's preparing to sleep there. Then he even asks if he's bothering her by staying in the room. That sentence actually stuns Stella into silence for once. Then she immediately picks him up princess style while thinking this child is absolutely going to get sick if he sleeps on the floor. Before Istolfa can process anything, she tosses him onto the bed. Stella explains that the inn won't have a double room available until tomorrow, so he'll have to survive sleeping beside her for one night. Istolfa tries to protest, but the power of comfy elf energy is too overwhelming. Bro gets instantly defeated by soft blankets and emotional safety. As he lies there, he thinks about how insane today has been. Meeting Stella, entering the dungeon, almost dying, officially becoming an adventurer. Not everything went perfectly, but he knows one thing for sure. He's finally moving forward. Then he glances over and sees Stella sleeping peacefully beside him. Somehow, she already believes tomorrow and every day after that will push him even further ahead. The next morning, Istolfa stands in front of the guild again. The guard recognizes him immediately and praises him for already working so hard. Istolfa tells him to stay safe, but Istolfa gets confused when he realizes she isn't coming inside with him. Istolfa explains that if she follows him around and helps constantly, it'll only ruin his growth as an adventurer. Basically, Bro needs to stop relying on tutorial mode. She also says now that he understands how dangerous the dungeon really is, he probably won't do anything reckless anymore. Istolfa gulps nervously, but still shows determination, which makes Stella praise him like a proud teacher. She tells him she'll pray for his safe return, while he heads toward the dungeon once again. And this time, Bro is determined to keep moving forward no matter what waits ahead. Istolfa is back in Blindfold Meadow once again. At first glance, this place just looks like some peaceful grassland where you could frolic around touching flowers and listening to fantasy music. In reality though, this area is straight up built like a horror game because anything can be hiding behind the tall grass waiting to jump you for XP. But this time, Bro is locked in. He reminds himself not to let his guard down again, and right as he's thinking that, a goblin suddenly appears behind him. However, unlike before, Istolfa instantly realizes the goblin didn't just magically spawn. It moved from an invisible zone into the visible area. Bro is finally understanding the dungeon mechanics instead of getting farmed by them. The Hype immediately fights the goblin and takes it down in only a few moves. After the fight, he notices something important. Normal goblins aren't giving him nearly as much trouble anymore. Bro might actually be leveling up. Istolfa grabs the magic stone and remembers what Fleet explained about dungeon iron. Since Dungeon Iron absorbs magical power and repairs itself using crushed magic stones, Astolfo decides he has to prioritize fixing his sword first. It hurts a little wasting money rocks like this, but survival comes first. He crushes the stone with his sword and the cracked blade instantly repairs itself a bit. That's when he starts wondering if the size of the magic stone depends on the monster's strength. If stronger monsters drop bigger stones, then maybe he needs to fight tougher enemies eventually. But he immediately shakes those thoughts away, because bro refuses to get greedy and end up speedrunning his own funeral. For now, the plan is simple. Farm goblins safely and stack progress slowly. While walking through the meadow, Astolfo suddenly hears a loud sound nearby. He turns around and sees another person appear in the grass. Both of them stare at each other awkwardly, immediately wondering if the other guy is also an adventurer. But before they can properly introduce themselves, the newcomer suddenly yells for Astolfo to duck. Astolfo obeys instantly, and it literally saves his life because a fire spell flies right over his head. Bro almost got turned into barbecue because he hesitated for 1 second. He asks what the hell that was, and the newcomer quickly explains it's fire magic. Then he says there's no time to explain because a goblin magician just pulled up. The goblin looks absolutely furious, and Astolfo immediately notices something important. Every time the goblin swings its staff, it launches a fireball. Realizing this, he kicks the newcomer out of the way of another attack before both of them become medium rare. Astolfo decides the only option is defeating the goblin before it can swing the staff again. He rushes in and successfully stabs it. Then he quickly checks if the other boy is okay. Instead of thanking him though, the boy immediately calls him an idiot because there's still another goblin left. Right behind Astolfo, a fighter goblin with a giant axe suddenly attacks. The hit slams into his arm guard instead of his body, and Astolfo instantly screams because bro literally bought this armor yesterday. He refuses to let some goblin NPC scratch up his fresh gear already. Still, he quickly realizes his sword probably can't block an axe like that for long, so he asks the magician boy if he has any spells capable of defeating it. After a long pause, the guy basically goes, "Yeah, no." He explains he only knows basic magic right now, and his spells are too weak to damage the goblin. At best, they'll just annoy it even more. Astolfo immediately feels the pressure because he's basically carrying this entire fight while the wizard build is still in beta testing. The magician boy asks if Astolfo can even fight properly with a damaged sword, but Astolfo says he'll manage as long as he avoids getting hit by the axe. Then the boy asks the most important question. Can you beat it? Astolfo straight up says if he can't, then both of them are dead. Surprisingly, the magician boy actually giggles hearing that like bro just heard the funniest thing ever during a life or death battle. Then he comes up with a plan. He says he'll fire a magic spell at the goblin. It won't hurt the monster, but it should blind it long enough for Astolfo to attack. Astolfo hesitates hard because this guy appeared out of nowhere and already feels kinda suspicious. Bro's trust issues are at maximum settings after almost getting robbed and packed up yesterday. But there's no time left to overthink it, so he decides to gamble on this random magician kid. The magician fires a flash of flame magic that blinds the goblin. The monster immediately charges toward him in rage, and Astolfo uses that opening to attack from behind. He lands the hit successfully, and the goblin finally goes down. Both of them survive. Astolfo lets out a relieved sigh while the magician praises him for the teamwork. Then he apologizes for dragging him into danger before thanking him properly. Astolfo also thanks him for the support magic and politely asks if he can take the goblin's magic stone. The magician immediately says he can do whatever he wants, since he was the one who defeated it anyway. However, the goblin magician's corpse is already disappearing. Astolfo panics slightly and quickly stabs into the body before it vanishes completely. He pulls out a massive magic stone and instantly starts crushing it with his sword. The blade repairs itself until it looks practically brand new again. The magician instantly notices the sword is made from dungeon iron, but the second he mentions it, Astolfo immediately starts speedwalking away like bros trying to avoid another robbery side quest. Unfortunately, the magician grabs him before he escapes because he still doesn't even know Astolfo's name. After introducing himself, Astolfo learns the magician boy's name is Kyle. Kyle asks what Astolfo plans to do next, and Astolfo explains he wants to keep defeating goblins to earn money while growing stronger at the same time. Kyle immediately understands the grind mindset. He explains that Astolfo is absorbing magical power from defeated monsters to improve himself, so he suggests teaming up together to hunt goblins more efficiently. Astolfo stares at him suspiciously and reminds him that he's already part of another party. Kyle points out that Astolfo is literally alone right now, so temporarily teaming up here would make surviving way easier. Astolfo still hesitates, but Kyle basically starts begging at this point. He explains that he also came here to improve his magic skills, and after seeing the kinds of goblins hiding in this meadow, he doesn't feel safe alone anymore. Honestly, bro's confidence stats are in the negatives. Kyle keeps trying to convince him. He says they both want to become stronger anyway, and the partnership doesn't have to last forever. He just wants company until his magic becomes strong enough to fight properly on its own. Plus, having two people together is obviously safer than wandering blindfold meadow solo like a future obituary. Then Kyle drops the ultimate bait. He says Astolfo can keep all the rewards. At that point, the offer becomes dangerously tempting. Astolfo agrees, although deep down he still feels like he's somehow getting scammed emotionally. Kyle notices the hesitation immediately and promises he'll repay him someday once he becomes a great magician. According to him, Istolfa has absolutely nothing to lose here. Then Kyle reaches out his hand and says he'll be in Istolfa's care from now on. Istolfa shakes his hand while thinking one very important thing. This guy is definitely weird, but honestly, he doesn't seem like a bad person. The second time Istolfa enters the dungeon's first floor, the Blindfold Meadows, my guy instantly runs into a whole side quest. A magician named Kyle is out here getting jumped by monsters like bro loaded into the wrong lobby, so Istolfa helps him beat them. After surviving the NPC ambush together, they decide to team up. Istolfa thinks Kyle doesn't seem shady, although in a dungeon this cursed trusting people is basically gambling with your life savings. Istolfa asks why Kyle picked him in the first place because realistically, hiring some veteran adventurer would have made way more sense than trusting a rookie who still looks like he's figuring out the tutorial controls. Kyle says he can already handle small goblins himself, but instead of answering properly, he asks why Istolfa talks so formally when they're basically the same age. Bro was not trying to get called sir in the middle of goblin territory. Kyle tells him to chill and just talk casually because he isn't some employer. He's just Kyle right now, his temporary duo partner in this disaster run. Once the awkward introductions are over, Kyle asks if Istolfa bought any information about the dungeon floors. Istolfa basically hits him with the bro I'm broke response, so Kyle decides to explain things himself. Apparently the first floor mostly spawns normal goblins, although magician goblins and fighter goblins can appear too. Before Kyle can continue his TED Talk, Istolfa suddenly hears growling and sees a monster flying at them like it paid for premium aggression DLC. Istolfa shoves Kyle out of danger and asks if he's okay. Kyle survives the jump scare and tells him he's fine, then identifies the monster as a grass wolf. According to him, these things are absolute demons compared to goblins. 3 of them can apparently fold a fighter goblin with 0 difficulty. Goblins out here acting tough until the grass wolf squad pulls up. Kyle says they might survive if it's alone, but the second the wolf howls for backup, both of them realize the situation just became a ranked match against Sweats. Istolfa immediately suggests running because there is absolutely no universe where 2 underleveled dudes beat an entire wolf pack. Kyle agrees and fires some flame magic for distraction while they sprint away for dear life. Istolfa notices Kyle falling behind, so he grabs his hand and drags him along like a gym bro forcing his exhausted friend through cardio day. After finally escaping, Kyle is gasping for air and accusing Istolfa of trying to unalive him through excessive running. But Istolfa reminds him they'd literally be wolf food if they stayed there another 5 seconds. Kyle admits Istolfa basically saved his life because there's no way he could outrun those wolves alone. He says he can't die before reaching his goal, which makes Istolfa curious about why Kyle wants to become a grand magician so badly. After a little silence, Kyle finally opens up. He explains that he has no talent for physical combat or swordsmanship, but magic is the one thing he actually understands. Bro speedran magic theory like a gifted kid before the burnout arc hit. Kyle says he learned advanced spells in less than a year, but none of it matters because his mana pool is complete garbage. He understands how fire magic works, yet whenever he casts it, the result is basically congratulations, nothing happened. Imagine grinding all that knowledge just to produce a spicy air freshener instead of actual flames. Even his own family called him a fake magician, and that humiliation lives rent-free in his head. That's why he's determined to prove everybody wrong. Istolfa respects the grind set, although things get awkward when Kyle asks about his own reason for exploring the dungeon. Istolfa honestly doesn't know. He doesn't have some tragic backstory or legendary dream. Bro is just kind of vibing and surviving right now. Before he can think too hard about his existential crisis, another grass wolf suddenly attacks them because apparently these wolves have notifications turned on for their location. Istolfa saves Kyle again and asks if this is a different wolf, but Kyle says there are only around 10 on this floor, meaning the first one probably tracked them down. The wolf leaps at Istolfa, and even though he swings his sword, the thing dodges like it unlocked Ultra Instinct. On the next attack, it bites his leg, although thankfully, it only hits the armor. Kyle immediately blasts it away with magic and checks on him like a panicked teammate in a co-op game. The problem is that the wolf is way too fast to fight head-on. Istolfa can't read its movements at all, so he quickly comes up with a risky plan that depends on Kyle's magic. Kyle fires flames at the wolf while Istolfa charges straight at it. Earlier, he noticed the wolf instinctively feared fire magic, even weak fire magic, so he uses that hesitation to close the distance. Then he literally lets the wolf bite his armor so it gets stuck in place. Bro turned himself into live bait with 0 hesitation. Actual crash-out behavior. As expected, the wolf's fangs can't pierce the armor, so Istolfa tells Kyle to fire now. Kyle happily launches flame magic at the trapped wolf, and Istolfa finishes it with 1 clean strike. The 2 of them celebrate because they somehow survived another near-death encounter despite being the most underprepared duo imaginable. Kyle says they're getting stronger, while Istolfa realizes Fleet was right about armor expanding his attack options. My boy finally unlocked strategic thinking instead of just panic swinging. Kyle points out how absurdly unlucky they are for running into magician goblins, fighter goblins, and a rare monster all in one trip. Istolfa feels relieved hearing there shouldn't be anything stronger on this floor, only for Kyle to casually reveal there actually is. Apparently there's a floor guardian, basically the dungeon's final boss before the next area unlocks. Istolfa wants details, but Kyle immediately gatekeeps the information like it's paid DLC content and says he'll explain once they're actually strong enough. Before they leave, Kyle reminds Istolfa to grab the magic stone before it disappears. Istolfa almost forgets and gets insanely happy after picking it up because to him this isn't just loot, it's tomorrow's survival fund. Kyle looks genuinely surprised seeing someone so emotionally attached to one tiny rock, although honestly dungeon inflation probably goes crazy. Afterward, they keep farming goblins together pretty successfully. Kyle notices his mana is improving, although he still complains that his flames are weak compared to real high-ranking magicians who can one-shot goblins with basic fire spells. Istolfa mentions he's actually seen someone like that before. When Kyle asks who, he reveals it's an elf woman who's basically his mentor. Kyle instantly starts acting salty because elves are naturally cracked at magic. Bro wasn't even hiding the jealousy, man heard elf and immediately entered hater mode. Eventually, Istolfa suggests hunting a little more so they can keep leveling up. While walking though, he suddenly bumps into someone so hard that even Kyle gets startled. Standing before them is another adventurer asking if he's alright. And honestly, with the amount of chaos happening today, this dungeon really refuses to let these two breathe for even 1 minute. The adventurer asks if Istolfa is alright, and the guy also has a copper bracelet on his arm, meaning he's another rookie adventurer. Istolfa apologizes for bumping into him, but the dude acts super chill about it, saying the dungeon is a messy place anyway. Still, while talking, his eyes immediately lock onto Istolfa's weapon like a Discord mod spotting limited edition merch. Bro was staring at that sword a little too hard. Kind-hearted Istolfa, who still hasn't unlocked basic stranger danger instincts, honestly starts answering him, but Kyle instantly cuts in and says they don't need to share that information. The adventurer laughs awkwardly, saying Istolfa has an interesting friend before leaving. The second he's gone, Istolfa questions why Kyle acted so cold, but Kyle immediately tells him that guy was dangerous. Istolfa argues that the dude looked nice enough, but Kyle basically hits him with the bro villains don't walk around with evil background music lecture. According to him, the people acting overly friendly are usually the sketchiest ones. My guy said those were the eyes of somebody who scams for a living. Kyle explains that monsters aren't the only threat in the dungeon, and if Istolfa keeps trusting random people this easily, he's eventually gonna end up looted like an unattended Minecraft chest. That instantly reminds Istolfa about his awful experience before coming here, and he realizes Kyle is probably right. If Kyle wasn't around, he might have fallen for another shady person all over again. Bro finally understands his survival instincts are still running on factory settings. Seeing Istolfa looking depressed, Kyle says it's dangerous to stay in one spot after running into someone suspicious, so they should head back to the surface for now. There's just one tiny issue. Neither of them knows where the exit is. Istolfa panics and starts looking around, but Kyle explains they're in the Blindfold Meadows, meaning the entire place is basically one giant illusion map designed by a dungeon dev who genuinely hated players. All the grasslands around them are fake visuals, so the only way to navigate is remembering where you came from. Unfortunately, Kyle lost track of directions while sprinting away from wolves earlier like a man fleeing taxes. Istolfa also realizes he wasn't paying attention yesterday when Stella guided him outside. Bro got carried through the dungeon tutorial and forgot to memorize the route. Kyle thinks for a bit and says they have two options. First, they could find an orb dropped by scout goblins, which can teleport adventurers back to the surface instantly. The problem is scout goblins barely spawn, so relying on that is basically gambling with atrocious odds. The second option is walking to the outer wall of the dungeon. According to the info Kyle bought, the entire floor is shaped like a giant square, and the exits are somewhere near the corners. So if they reach a wall and follow it long enough, they should eventually find the way out. Istolfa asks if Kyle even has the stamina for that because the floor is insanely huge, but Kyle gets offended immediately. Bro took that personally, like he just got called weak in front of the guild GC. The two start moving toward the wall while also hunting for scout goblins. After killing another regular goblin, Istolfa complains that they only keep finding common mobs and asks if there's some way to track scout goblins specifically. Kyle says there's no easy method unless they stumble into one up close. Then Istolfa remembers how the grass wolves tracked them earlier by scent and wishes adventurers could do the same. Kyle actually says adventurers can track each other through mana signatures, although that method is useless for Istolfa because his mana levels are practically non-existent. Bro got hit with magical poverty allegations. Kyle notices Istolfa suddenly looking upset and points out that he always makes this intense "I have to succeed" expression. Istolfa denies it at first, but eventually admits he keeps thinking he needs to work harder. Fleet treated him kindly because he was a customer. Stella praised him for being diligent, and now he's terrified of disappointing everyone. He believes if he fails, he'll end up abandoned and miserable all over again. Istolfa quietly admits that he wants to become the version of himself people actually like, which is honestly kinda heartbreaking under all the dungeon chaos. Kyle listens carefully, then says Istolfa is way too hard on himself. Bro has been speedrunning emotional damage since chapter 1. He says ambition itself isn't bad because everybody wants something, but Istolfa is desperately rushing forward like he's terrified of stopping for even 1 second. Kyle warns that if he keeps forcing himself like this, he's eventually going to collapse under the pressure. Istolfa admits Stella already warned him about that too, but he genuinely doesn't know what he's supposed to do differently. That's when Kyle says something that completely catches him off guard. He tells Istolfa that this is literally what allies are for. At least when it comes to magic, Kyle is here to support him, so he doesn't have to carry everything alone. Bro basically said stop trying to solo queue your trauma. Istolfa looks shocked because nobody has ever told him something like that before. Kyle says he considers him a real ally and wants them to become actual friends, so Istolfa should depend on him more. Hearing someone openly say they care about him makes something heavy inside his chest finally start melting away. My guy is emotionally buffering in real time. After thanking Kyle, Istolfa says he also wants to know more about him, but Kyle instantly shuts that down. Bro really said nah, lore access denied. Istolfa complains because he literally just trauma dumped 5 seconds ago, but Kyle insists there's nothing interesting about him besides the future Grand Magician Kyle. Then he asks if Istolfa seriously can't be friends with someone unless he knows every detail about them. Istolfa quickly says that's not true, and admits he genuinely wants to be Kyle's friend. Kyle smiles and sticks out his fist, saying it's a friendship ritual. The two bump fists together, officially becoming dungeon homies. Honestly, after almost becoming wolf food together twice, the friendship arc was inevitable. Kyle then reminds him they still need to escape this cursed floor, sleep, and come back tomorrow for more grinding. He asks if Istolfa's ready for all that, but Istolfa says he should probably ask Stella first. Kyle immediately acts betrayed, joking that Istolfa is already ditching him right after they became friends. Eventually, they finally reach a massive wall, meaning they're close to either salvation or complete disaster. Kyle explains that while the exit should be somewhere along the wall, the entrance to the second floor is also nearby. If they accidentally find the Tor instead, they'll meet the floor guardian. Basically the dungeon's version of a you are not high enough level for this area warning. Kyle admits they'll need to fight the guardian eventually, but right now they'd probably get folded instantly. As they keep walking, they finally discover a huge dark doorway. The problem is they can't tell if it's the exit or the entrance to the second floor. If it's the correct path, there should be stairs leading upward. If it's the wrong one, then congratulations, they just queued into a boss fight. Suddenly, Istolfa notices movement behind them. Both of them panic and sprint toward the staircase inside the doorway, praying it's the exit. But when they reach it, their hearts immediately sink because the stairs only go downward. And standing before them is the floor guardian itself, already locked in and ready to throw hands. At that moment, the two realize they picked the wrong door way too late. The guardian goblin immediately rushes Istolfa like Bros has been waiting all day for someone to step into his aggro range. Kyle fires flame magic to distract it, but the goblin completely ignores it because this dude already figured out Kyle's fire spells are basically fantasy flashbangs with emotional support damage. On top of that, the Guardian's gear is made of steel, so fighting it with their current Walmart starter pack equipment is looking extremely cooked. Istolfa suggests running away, but Kyle says that's easier said than done, because the floor guardians are supposedly way faster than normal monsters. Still, Istolfa points out that since the goblin is guarding the entrance to the next floor, maybe it won't chase them too far away from its territory. Kyle realizes that actually makes sense, so the two instantly abandon all thoughts of heroism and start sprinting for their lives again. Truly the strongest strategy known to mankind. Thankfully, the Guardian stops chasing them after a while, although Kyle warns Istolfa not to lower his guard yet. The second he says that, an arrow suddenly flies at Istolfa out of nowhere. Fortunately, it bounces off without hurting him, but while they're distracted by the arrows, another goblin sneaks behind them and attacks. Istolfa barely blocks it in time and asks if it's another fighter goblin. Kyle quickly explains that the one with the bow is an archer goblin, while the sword user is a swordsman goblin. Apparently the swordsman type is even worse than fighter goblins because these little gremlins actually know sword techniques. Bro really queued up against goblin samurais right after escaping a dungeon boss. Worst luck imaginable. The swordsman goblin immediately pressures Istolfa with super fast attacks. Unlike the bulky fighter goblins, this thing moves quickly and keeps chaining attacks together, forcing Istolfa to focus entirely on defense just to survive. Kyle realizes he can't really help with magic either because his flames are weak and there's a decent chance he'll accidentally barbecue Istolfa instead. Friendly fire was absolutely enabled in this lobby. While Kyle's stressing over that, more arrows start flying toward him, although he manages to dodge them. Then he notices something weird. The archer goblin keeps missing shots and can't aim properly. After thinking for a moment, Kyle finally figures it out and tells Istolfa to keep the swordsman busy while he handles the archer himself. Istolfa is shocked because Kyle does not look like the hands-on combat type, but he's too busy fighting for his life to argue. Kyle realizes the archer goblin has the exact same problem he does. It can't freely attack while its teammate is moving around because there's a risk of hitting friendly targets. Basically, the goblin is suffering from terrible teammate positioning. Kyle decides to exploit that immediately. As the saying goes, early bird gets the worm, and this man straight up charges the goblin with his wand like he suddenly forgot he's supposed to be a magician. He smacks the archer goblin directly in the head while roasting it mid-fight, yelling that rushing shots like that will never hit anything. Bro turned into a toxic ranked teammate in real time. Once the goblin falls down, Kyle keeps beating it with the wand until the poor thing turns into fantasy ground beef. Even Istolfa pauses for a second because the scene is genuinely horrifying. The swordsman goblin also gets stunned watching this crash-out execution, which makes it lose focus for a split second. Istolfa instantly takes advantage and lands a hit, although the goblin still manages to punch him in the face before going down. After rubbing his cheek, Istolfa basically tells the goblin "nice try, lil bro," and finishes it with one clean strike. Kyle walks over saying he's done too. And honestly, the fact that Kyle just went full goblin blender mode with a stick is still insane. Istolfa thanks him because that distraction helped a ton, but Kyle acts smug and says everything went according to plan. My boy is acting like he just pulled off some 500 IQ chess move after brutally bonking a goblin to death. Istolfa admits he didn't expect Kyle to fight like that, but Kyle explains that sometimes hitting things directly is faster and more reliable than slowly chanting magic. Honestly valid. While joking around, they notice the archer goblin is already starting to disappear. Monsters vanish quicker than before, although they think they might still have time to collect the swordsman goblin's magic stone. But then Kyle notices something sparkling nearby. He calls Istolfa over, and together they find a strange black pearl. At first they think it's just another magic stone, but Kyle suddenly realizes it's actually a homecoming pearl. Both of them are shocked because according to all the dungeon information, only scout goblins are supposed to drop those, which means they just discovered brand new dungeon data. Bro accidentally unlocked patch notes before the devs even posted them. Kyle explains that if the information gets verified, adventurers can receive rewards and even have their names officially recorded. Istolfa immediately gets hyped because this is basically rookie adventurer jackpot RNG. Kyle says they went through absolute suffering today, but maybe they were lucky in the end. Istolfa admits that if he were alone, he would have mistaken the pearl for a normal magic stone, so Kyle is amazing for noticing it. Kyle clearly gets happy hearing the praise, although he tries acting cool and tells Istolfa to stop glazing him so much. Bro is internally smiling while pretending to be annoyed. Then Kyle says they should probably head back for now, although he jokingly asks if Istolfa wants to challenge the guardian goblin again. Both of them instantly agree they just get folded and have to run away again anyway. Kyle activates the homecoming pearl and tells Istolfa to stay close because it's his first time using one too. Istolfa feels a little disappointed they couldn't go deeper today, but honestly, he's still happy because he made an actual friend. He never realized adventuring with someone else could feel this exciting, and now he genuinely wants to keep exploring together tomorrow. Kyle asks the pearl to guide them back to the surface, and suddenly a blinding light surrounds them. The brightness is so intense they can't even open their eyes properly. When the light finally disappears, they find themselves safely back outside. One of the guards recognizes both Istolfa and the rich-looking kid from earlier, and immediately realizes they used a homecoming pearl. Istolfa gets insanely excited about making it back alive and starts shaking Kyle around happily, but Kyle suddenly says the whole world is spinning. Bro instantly thinks he got cursed and starts acting like his soul is leaving his body. The guard quickly explains that teleportation nausea is normal for first-time users of the pearl, and the sickness gets easier over time. Unfortunately, Kyle is getting absolutely violated by motion sickness. One second he's trying to stay composed, and the next he straight up throws up on the spot. Dungeon trip officially ended with my boy getting hit by magical car sickness. After surviving the dungeon without becoming goblin dinner, Istolfa and Kyle finally head back to the guild. The manager is genuinely shocked when he sees the loot they brought back, because these two somehow managed to collect rare drops from grass wolves along with a mountain of goblin magic stones. Bro probably expected them to come back traumatized and empty-handed, not looking like they completed a hidden farming route. When it's time to cash everything in, Istolfa nearly short-circuits after hearing the total payout, 48,000 yen. My boy was staring at the money like he just discovered infinite money glitches are real. Kyle meanwhile acts way calmer and says it's a fair amount considering how many goblins they folded today. The manager tells them to keep up the good work, although honestly these two already cause more chaos in one day than most rookies do in a month. Kyle then brings up the homecoming pearl information they discovered earlier, hoping to sell it to the guild. Unfortunately, the manager looks completely unimpressed after hearing the details. Apparently, tons of adventurers already reported similar information before, but most dropped item reports are unreliable because people either lie, exaggerate, or straight up hallucinate after getting smacked around in the dungeon. At this point, the guild only accepts confirmed reports from staff members or officially designated adventurers. Kyle gets annoyed hearing that because from his perspective, people ruining the system with fake reports is insanely lame. The manager actually agrees, although it still means they're not getting rewarded for their discovery. Kyle feels bad for accidentally giving Istolfa false hope, but Istolfa honestly doesn't care because he's just happy they both made it out alive. Bro already secured friendship, loot, and emotional development in one run. He's winning regardless. Though as they leave the guild, the manager warns them to be careful around Craftsman Street at night because several people have recently been attacked and robbed there. The second they arrive, the place already looks suspicious as hell. Every light is off, the streets are empty, and the atmosphere screams you are about to get jumped by side characters with criminal records. Kyle points out that it's the perfect place for rogues to hide. Then Istolfa asks where he's staying, and Kyle reveals he's at the same inn as Stella. Literally moments later, both of them suddenly stop because they notice movement around them. Sure enough, a group of shady dudes surrounds them and demands they hand over all their valuables if they want to leave safely. The second that happens, Istolfa feels old fear crawling back into his chest. It reminds him of when everything was taken from him before, and for a moment, he freezes up again. But Kyle immediately tells him not to panic. They literally survived the dungeon today, so there's no universe where they lose to these bargain bin thugs. Bro basically said, "We beat wolves and goblin bosses for XP. These dudes are not the final boss." Hearing that snaps Istolfa out of his fear, and he starts regaining confidence. The hooligans get irritated watching them whisper to each other instead of panicking properly, so they threaten them with their swords. When intimidation doesn't work, they finally charge in. Kyle instantly uses Mega Vortex to trap and subdue them, and when Istolfa asks why he didn't just blast them harder, Kyle reminds him his magic isn't strong enough to kill people anyway. Bro really built his entire mage setup around mild inconvenience. One of the thugs still manages to rush Istolfa, but this time things are different. Kyle reminds him that these guys aren't stronger than him because there's a difference in determination. Suddenly Istolfa realizes he isn't scared anymore. Back then he only wanted to survive. Now he actually has people, goals, and a future he wants to protect. So instead of shrinking back, he slams the rogue to the ground and tells him to stop getting in his way because he wants to move forward. Honestly, my guy finally unlocked character development buffs. Soon after, the city guards finally arrive to arrest the hooligans. One of them even praises the kids for holding their own so well, but Kyle instantly snaps at them for showing up late and being terrible at their jobs. Bro really started arguing with law enforcement right after surviving a robbery attempt. The guard surprisingly stays calm and asks where they're headed. When Istolfa says they're returning to the inn, the guard offers to escort them as an apology. Kyle immediately refuses because according to him, those losers were no match for them anyway. My boy is walking around with max confidence after one successful dungeon run. Then karma activates instantly. Kyle stomps off dramatically, only to walk straight into someone and fall over. Standing there is Stella, who says she came outside after hearing the commotion and happily welcomes Istolfa back safely. She then asks if Kyle is his friend. Kyle introduces himself while getting up, then asks if Stella is Istolfa's master. Stella explains she's more like his teacher right now, although Kyle immediately notices her equipment isn't ordinary. The gear looks insanely expensive and clearly wasn't made by humans. Not only that, but it's equipment specifically meant for high-ranking light elves. Bro instantly switched from goofy mage mode to fantasy Sherlock Holmes. Both Stella praises him for having sharp eyes and asks if he also comes from some wealthy background. The second their eyes meet, the atmosphere gets weirdly intense. Sparks are basically flying while these two silently size each other up like rival anime characters meeting for the first time. Meanwhile, Istolfa is standing there completely clueless, wondering why his two companions suddenly entered competitive aura mode. They explain they're just establishing their positions and making strong first impressions. Stella then examines Kyle more carefully and says he's still inexperienced, but he'll definitely grow into an incredibly skilled mage someday. Kyle gets annoyed because he hates being analyzed without permission, although Stella just giggles and apologizes casually like she didn't just read his entire stat sheet. Kyle then asks Istolfa if he's seriously okay hanging around someone with Stella's personality. Istolfa immediately defends her and says she's actually kind. Then he proudly tells her he's planning to explore the dungeon with Kyle from now on. Istolfa says she doesn't mind at all because she already told him she wouldn't always accompany him herself. That doesn't mean he has to adventure alone forever. The Capellan, she tells Kyle she hopes he'll continue getting along with Istolfa even though she has no clue who he really is or where he comes from. Istolfa simply says Kyle is his friend, and Istolfa decides that answer is good enough for her. Honestly, that's probably the first time somebody trusted Kyle without demanding his entire backstory first. When they finally arrive at the inn, Kyle says they should talk about tomorrow's plans later before heading to his room. Stella watches him leave while clearly thinking about something. Then she casually reveals that she knows exactly who he is. Apparently, Kyle is actually Kylas Fillard, the fourth prince of the Fillard Kingdom. He was famous as a child genius, although people looked down on him because his mana levels turned out to be below average. Stella even finds it amusing that Kyle is apparently just the nickname he uses with people close to him. Bro really pulled up to the dungeon disguised as fantasy royalty DLC. Kyle, when Istolfa asks why she's smiling, Stella simply says Kyle is naive in a very different way from him, which is exactly why the two of them will probably get along really well. And honestly, after everything they survived together today, she's already looking forward to seeing what kind of chaos tomorrow brings. Merchants are setting up shops, adventurers are already moving around, and the whole place feels way more alive than the depressing life he used to have. Bro is just standing there buffering peacefully until Stella finally wakes up. Istolfa apologizes for accidentally waking her, but Stella doesn't mind because it's already time for her to get up anyway. The second she looks at him, she can instantly tell he's itching to jump back into the dungeon today. My boy got one successful dungeon run, and now he's addicted to the grind. Stella points out that he looks way happier than before and even reminds him that he and Kyle managed to defeat actual rogues last night. Istolfa still can't fully believe it himself, which honestly makes sense because a few days ago he probably would have folded under pressure instantly. Stella asks if he feels accomplished, then says she's excited to watch him keep growing stronger. Before Istolfa can even answer properly, someone suddenly starts banging on the door like the building is on fire. And of course it's Kyle. Bro is standing outside bright and early yelling at them to hurry up because they've got multiple errands before entering the dungeon again. This man already transformed into the friend who treats every outing like a military operation. According to Kyle, the first thing they need to do is replace Istolfa's busted equipment because after yesterday's fights, his armor is basically holding itself together through prayers and emotional support. The group heads over to Fleet's shop and greets both him and Kay. Istolfa notices Fleet moving weapons indoors and asks if he's closing up already, but Fleet explains that some thieves used stolen weapons from the shop during the robberies last night. Because of that, the guards warned everyone not to leave weapons on display anymore. Bro's whole business got hit with accidental bad PR. Fleet also warns them to be careful outside, although Kyle casually mentions they already got attacked last night and fought the robbers off themselves. Fleet is instantly shocked and praises Istolfa like he just survived a side quest way above his level. Then he notices the absolutely destroyed state of Istolfa's armor and assumes they came for repairs. That's when Kyle steps forward and announces they're actually here to buy new equipment instead. Fleet immediately warns them that quality gear isn't cheap or easy to replace because weapons depend heavily on timing and availability. Kyle points out that Istolfa's current gear can barely handle first-floor goblins, and they're already trying to challenge the second floor. Hearing that makes Fleet genuinely surprised because these kids speedran progression harder than expected. Istolfa explains that while fighting stronger enemies, there were tons of moments where he barely survived. One mistake could have killed him instantly, and since even stronger monsters are waiting deeper inside the dungeon, he realizes better equipment is necessary if he wants to keep moving forward. Kyle also casually adds that if Istolfa can't protect him properly, then he's probably doomed too. Bro really said upgrade your gear because my survival depends on your build. Fleet finally asks about their budget and Istolfa proudly reveals the 48,000 yen he earned yesterday. Fleet excuses himself for a moment while Kyle and Stella start discussing armor ideas. Kyle thinks metal armor might suit Istolfa, but Stella immediately shuts that down. According to her, heavy armor is useless if the wearer can't move properly afterward. She basically says turning Istolfa into a slow-moving tank build would be terrible for his fighting style. Instead, Stella recommends durable hard leather armor because it balances defense and mobility better. Right after that, Fleet returns carrying exactly that kind of armor. The moment he places it on the table, both Stella and Kyle notice something strange about it. The armor is giving off faint magical energy. So Stella instantly guesses it's made from beast leather, and Fleet confirms it. Apparently, beast leather is lighter than metal, but still durable enough to block archer goblin arrows, and even withstand attacks from the guardian goblin. Basically, this thing is rare loot with actual stats instead of rookie trash gear. Istolfa immediately gets impressed, but before Fleet can continue, Kane storms over and smacks him in the head. She asks what he's doing because this armor is the famous unsellable cursed armor nobody wants. Bro really tried sneaking Haunted Drip into the inventory without context. Feeble finally explains the backstory. The armor was custom-made for a nobleman's child, but the child died before production was completed. Because of that tragedy, rumors spread claiming the beast leather itself was cursed. Kyle immediately warns Istolfa not to touch it because curses in fantasy worlds are not something you gamble with casually. Meanwhile, Stella grabs the armor without hesitation and says it's completely normal. No curse, no weird energy, just unfortunate rumors. Fleet agrees, but explains that adventurers are insanely superstitious, so nobody wants equipment associated with bad luck. Honestly, fantasy adventurers really operate on athlete superstition logic. Then comes the emotional damage. Istolfa asks the price, and Fleet casually drops 70,000 yen. My boy gets hit harder than he did by the goblin punches. Kyle instantly starts yelling at Fleet for even showing them something that expensive in the first place. Fleet defends himself by saying this is already the cheapest possible deal. Anywhere else, armor of this quality would cost double. Even Stella admits they can't realistically afford it right now. Still, Fleet offers to reserve the armor for Istolfa if he wants it. Since he already earned 48,000 in one dungeon trip, reaching 70,000 shouldn't take too long. Kyle also reassures him that there's no rush to challenge the second floor immediately. They can keep grinding the first floor, improve their teamwork, and save money safely first. Istolfa thanks Kyle, then Fleet asks one last time if he's really okay trusting armor, rumored to bring bad luck. After thinking quietly for a moment, Istolfa says something that genuinely surprises Fleet. He admits Fleet talks a lot sometimes, but he always carefully considers what equipment is best for people. So rather than believing in luck, Istolfa says he believes in Fleet himself. Bro accidentally hit him with emotional critical damage. Fleet genuinely looks caught off guard hearing that. For now, he sells Istolfa a smaller set of protective gear with light armor pieces for 10,000 yen. Stella says the equipment suits him nicely, while Kyle says it should at least stop him from instantly exploding during combat now. Both of them say they're counting on each other again before doing their friendship fist bump ritual like two shonen protagonists who just unlocked co-op mode. Doofy, Lash, and Stella watch them smiling in the background because honestly, these two are already acting inseparable after knowing each other for like one day. After leaving the shop, Kyle says they should stop by the guild next. Stella explains that if they're officially adventuring together now, Kyle needs to be registered as part of Istolfa's party. Kyle agrees, although he says he also wants to recruit one more person for the team. Right now, their setup is basically pure offense and questionable survival instincts, so they desperately need support, specifically a healer who can use recovery magic. Istolfa immediately doubts anyone would even want to join their rookie party, but Kyle tells him to stop saying pessimistic stuff out loud because bro is killing the team morale before the squad even exists. Meanwhile, near the main entrance of the labyrinth, a new person arrives in the city for the very first time. They quietly think that exploring the dungeon with trustworthy companions sounds reassuring, although they aren't planning to accept just anybody as allies. Still, they leave it up to fate and whatever the gods have planned. At the Adventurers Guild, Istolfa and Kyle are trying to recruit new party members, but the whole thing goes absolutely nowhere. The second people see their beginner-level gear and rookie status, they instantly lose interest. Bro can even finish introducing himself before getting hit with the fantasy equivalent of "will let you know." The stronger adventurers especially want nothing to do with them, and the healers are even worse because most healers prefer teams with reliable offense and defense instead of two dudes surviving entirely on vibes and friendship rituals. Eventually, Kyle and Istolfa give up on specifically looking for a healer and decide they'd rather find someone trustworthy instead. Honestly valid because some of these guild people look like they'd steal your loot mid-fight and call it resource management. Istolfa quietly thinks they probably should have asked Stella for advice from the start, and naturally, the moment he thinks about her, Stella appears out of nowhere like she has protagonist radar. She tells them the party registration paperwork is already finished and says she's heading off first. Before leaving, she mentions she actually has someone she could recommend as a teammate. Istolfa immediately gets hopeful, but Kyle jumps in and rejects the idea before she can even explain. Bro blocked the recommendation like a spam call. Istolfa asks why he refused so fast, and Kyle explains that while Istolfa is trustworthy, finding somebody you can genuinely be friends with is a different issue entirely. According to him, adventuring together means trusting someone with your life, so they need a friend, not just another pawn filling a party slot. Honestly, my guy started sounding like a motivational anime speech generator. Istolfa agrees with him, so the two decide they'll find their third member through their own efforts. Unfortunately, after getting rejected repeatedly for hours, it becomes painfully obvious nobody wants to join their starter pack squad. In the end, they decide to just continue exploring together and focus on getting stronger first. Once they arrive near the dungeon entrance, though, they notice a huge commotion happening nearby. Apparently, some Dark Elf healer is arguing with the guards. The Dark Elf suddenly gets frustrated, turns around, and immediately locks eyes with Istolfa. Bro stares at him for a solid few seconds like he just found a rare Pokemon spawn. Then out of nowhere, the Dark Elf grabs Istolfa's hand and introduces himself as Dorma, while asking for his name in return. Istolfa is completely caught off guard, especially because Dorma's voice is way higher than expected. My boy was expecting edgy Dark Elf final boss energy, and got dramatic theater kid instead. But without even letting go of his hand, Dorma suddenly asks Istolfa to explore the dungeon with him. Both Kyle and Istolfa freeze in shock because this random dude just speedran party recruitment in under 10 seconds. Dorma proudly claims he's actually strong despite being a healer, and immediately starts dragging Istolfa toward the dungeon like he already signed a contract. Kyle instantly pulls them apart and tells everybody to slow down for 5 seconds. Dorma gets offended and complains Kyle is rude for not introducing himself first, which is hilarious considering he's the one kidnapping strangers into dungeon parties. Still, Kyle introduces himself as Istolfa's current party member, although Dorma clearly does not care whatsoever. Now Istolfa has to awkwardly explain that Kyle is his actual official teammate, so he can't just abandon him. Dorma pauses for a moment, then starts intensely examining Kyle before casually saying he looks like the type who gets excited thinking, wow, this place is so magical. Bro really judged this man's entire personality in 2 seconds flat. Eventually, Dorma decides Kyle can tag along too, although Kyle absolutely hates his attitude already. Dorma proudly tells the guards that these two are his party members now, and after finally getting permission, all three enter the dungeon together. Istolfa is still panicking over how insanely fast everything happened, but Kyle tells him to calm down and observe for now. Aside from Dorma's aggressively weird personality, he doesn't actually seem dangerous. Plus, having a healer is already huge for them. Maybe this chaotic little goblin is secretly decent after all. Once they step inside the dungeon, Dorma stretches dramatically and celebrates finally being allowed in. Apparently, healers aren't permitted to enter dungeons alone because it's considered suicidal. Dorma keeps complaining about how unfair and discriminatory that is, acting like he just lost a legal court case against dungeon regulations. Istolfa admits he didn't even know healers couldn't enter solo, so Kyle explains that a healer wandering into a dungeon alone is basically just a free kill for monsters. Kyle then asks Dorma why he'd even want to attempt something that reckless. Dorma explains that the second he arrived in the underground city earlier that morning, he immediately tried forming parties, but everyone rejected him because he's a dark elf. Kyle instantly says that no, people probably rejected him because his personality is weird as hell. And just like that, the two begin arguing immediately. Meanwhile, Istolfa quietly realizes these two are actually kind of similar. Both are prideful, dramatic, and one bad sentence away from starting verbal warfare at all times. Dorma eventually admits having both of them around is useful, so he tells them to hurry up already. Before moving deeper inside though, Kyle suddenly asks Dorma which god he worships, completely out of nowhere. Istolfa has no clue what's happening, so Kyle explains that healers in this world receive their powers from gods. Depending on which deity chooses them, their healing and support magic changes completely. Some healers specialize in healing and buffs, while others get weird niche abilities that are either broken or completely useless. Kyle looks at Dorma's expression and instantly concludes he probably belongs to the questionable build choices category. Bro basically called him a meme class healer to his face. Dorma insists he can use strengthening magic, but Kyle pressures him to explain exactly what kind. Istolfa tries telling Kyle not to interrogate the newcomer like this, but Kyle immediately tells him to stay quiet because this information is important for party coordination. Dorma looks uncomfortable, and Istolfa understands that feeling way too well, so he steps in front of him and reminds Kyle that everybody has things they don't want to share immediately. He points out that Kyle himself once said friendship doesn't require knowing every single detail about somebody. Istolfa still doesn't fully understand Kyle's magic either, yet they became friends anyway. Since they wanted allies instead of pawns, this situation shouldn't be any different. Bonus Kyle clicks his tongue dramatically but eventually admits Istolfa is right. He apologizes to Dorma for pushing too hard, although he says they'll naturally understand each other better once they fight together. Dorma gets genuinely touched by this and thanks Istolfa before deciding to reveal the god he worships after all. He says his god is Nil Shante, the god of underground armor. The moment those words leave his mouth, both Kyle and Istolfa freeze completely. Even Kyle looks genuinely stunned, which surprises Istolfa because this man usually acts like he knows everything. Kyle explains that gods related to armor usually grant extremely specialized and dangerous abilities, although he struggles to explain the details properly. Bro is trying to avoid spoilers like this is a seasonal anime reveal. Kyle finally tells Dorma to support Istolfa carefully from now on, and Dorma happily agrees. Meanwhile, Istolfa is still standing there wondering what kind of absolutely cracked healer build they accidentally recruited. As they continue deeper into the dungeon, they notice something strange. There are no monsters anywhere. Even Istolfa ran into goblins almost immediately yesterday, so the silence feels suspicious. Dorma starts complaining that Kyle's overcautious attitude is probably unnecessary, but Kyle warns him not to relax because enemies could easily be hiding nearby. The second he says that, a beast suddenly appears behind Istolfa and leaps straight toward Kyle. Before Istolfa can even react, Dorma instantly moves. He shoves Kyle toward Istolfa to get him out of danger, then absolutely demolishes the monster with the weapon in his hand. The hit is so brutal that both Istolfa and Kyle are left completely speechless afterward. Meanwhile, Dorma just stares at them confused and asks what's wrong. After all, they were the ones who said he looked strong earlier. Dorma absolutely demolishes the beast with the weapon in his hand, and honestly, at this point both Istolfa and Kyle are wondering if this is just normal dark elf behavior, or if Bro is secretly built different. These two are completely stunned because Dorma just soloed a whole grass wolf like it was a random side quest mob. Then Dorma suddenly goes ouch, and Istolfa instantly rushes over apologizing for not protecting him properly. Meanwhile, Dorma is standing there confused because according to him, Istolfa literally has a job to do as the frontliner. He explains that the basics of combat are simple. The advanced guard handles enemy attacks and protects the backline. That's the whole point of the role. And if it's only a grass wolf, Dorma says he can handle that by himself anyway, so everyone just needs to do what they're supposed to. Istolfa immediately starts admiring how dependable Dorma is, but Kyle shuts that down real quick and tells him not to expect too much, because if Dorma actually fought a grass wolf alone for long enough, he'd absolutely get packed up. Dorma fires back instantly and says Kyle is the real burden here. Kyle proudly responds that he's the brain of the journey, so him being physically weak doesn't matter. Bro really assigned himself the strategist role after smacking goblins with a stick yesterday. Dorma asks if Kyle has been acting like this since the beginning, and Istolfa honestly says yes, he's always been this dramatic. Kyle immediately asks if Dorma has a problem with that, but Dorma just stares at him with pure pity and says he assumed Kyle at least had friends. That hits theoretically. Kyle instantly gets offended and asks if Dorma even has any friends himself, but Dorma refuses to answer, which is basically the loudest no imaginable. Kyle starts teasing him, saying Dorma obviously wants to be his friend, and Dorma immediately runs behind Istolfa for emotional backup. Meanwhile, our wholesome cinnamon roll Istolfa says that if Dorma becomes friends with both of them, he'd genuinely be really happy. Kyle smirks because he knows he already won the argument, and after awkwardly pausing for a moment, Dorma quietly agrees to be friends with them. Dro got adopted into the squad against his will, As they continue exploring, Dorma learns that Istolfa's desperately farming magic stones to afford better armor because his current setup is basically held together by prayers and determination. Dorma says he also wants to level up and eventually reach the second floor, so joining them works perfectly for him too. Istolfa feels relieved hearing that, although he still worries about depending too much on others. Dorma immediately tells him to rely on him freely because they're friends now. He also says Istolfa needs to stop talking so formally around him all the time. Istolfa honestly doesn't know how to process that because he grew up believing relying on other people was a bad thing. My boy is still recovering from years of emotional damage and trust issues. Right then, monsters finally start appearing again, and the group immediately gets into formation. This time, it's a goblin fighter and a goblin swordsman. Istolfa recognizes both types from yesterday's battles, and even though they aren't insanely high-level enemies, they're still dangerous enough to ruin somebody's day if they mess up. Istolfa starts overthinking how they're supposed to fight both at once, but Dorma confidently steps forward and says he'll handle the goblin swordsman himself. He tells Istolfa to focus on the fighter because there's no way he can handle that massive thing. Kyle also joins in, saying he'll use magic first to pin them down and create an opening. Bro really started assigning roles like this turned into ranked team gameplay. The battle begins immediately. Kyle casts magic to hold the goblins in place, giving Dorma and Istolfa their chance to attack. Istolfa charges forward, wondering if the goblin fighter will really go down that easily. But then he suddenly notices movement behind him and barely dodges another attack at the last second. A goblin magician had been hiding nearby the entire time. The little gremlin starts preparing another spell, but before it can attack, Kyle fires magic first and interrupts it. Kyle yells at Istolfa not to get distracted because he isn't fighting alone anymore. That line hits hard for Istolfa because he finally realizes this battle isn't just about him surviving anymore. His friends are fighting alongside him too. As he charges forward again, Istolfa understands what relying on others truly means. They combine their strength together to win. He can push farther than before because his friends are beside him now, and for their sake, he can't stop moving forward. Bro is unlocking the power of friendship buffs in real time. With that realization, Istolfa lands the finishing blow on the goblin fighter while basically telling it to stop bothering them. Once the monsters are defeated, the whole squad celebrates because together they're actually becoming strong enough to go farther into the dungeon. They collect the magic stones from both goblins, although Kyle complains that today's drops are kinda mid. Bro is hoping for actual useful battle items instead of endless goblin rocks. That's when Dorma casually reveals he learned a new spell from the fight earlier. The spell is called Heavy Weapon, and it increases the weight of weapons. Kyle immediately looks disappointed at first because that sounds unbelievably random, but then his brain suddenly activates. He realizes making his weapon heavier could actually become useful somehow. Istolfa and Dorma have absolutely no clue what kind of weird strategy Kyle is cooking up now, but Kyle says they should keep hunting goblins while testing things out. Unfortunately, after that battle, no more goblins appear anywhere. Kyle points out they'll need to kill at least 10 or 20 more goblins if they seriously want enough money for Istolfa's new armor. While thinking quietly, Dorma suddenly says their expectations probably won't come true because goblins tend to gather together somewhere instead of endlessly spawning around randomly. But Istolfa gets nervous hearing that, although Kyle agrees it makes sense. Wandering around carelessly probably just increases the chance of accidentally walking into a goblin gathering spot. Basically fantasy equivalent of entering the wrong neighborhood at 2 a.m. Istolfa immediately says that sounds insanely dangerous, but Kyle argues it would be a waste to retreat halfway through the expedition now. He starts talking about using a homecoming pearl if things get too bad, although Istolfa asks if they can even escape safely from a goblin swarm in the first place. Kyle responds that they'll simply run away at the correct timing, which honestly sounds like famous last words. But wait, the argument is still going when suddenly an adventurer appears out of nowhere and collapses right beside them. Istolfa immediately rushes over while asking Dorma to heal him. Kyle quickly checks the injuries and realizes they came from fighting goblins. The injured adventurer desperately explains that the goblin they fought earlier had abnormal strength and completely wiped out his entire party, and now he's begging Istolfa's group for help. The absolutely destroyed adventurer who collapsed in front of them finally catches his breath and explains that a goblin with completely abnormal power showed up and wiped out his entire party. The whole gang gets stunned hearing that because regular goblins are already annoying enough. Now they're hearing rumors about a goblin running around with main character stats. Brogan Dorma immediately tells the guy to calm down and explain things properly instead of speedrunning a panic attack. The adventurer introduces himself as Marison, a healer, and explains that earlier his party was heading toward the second hierarchy when they got ambushed by a goblin carrying a sword. According to him, the thing attacked with completely insane strength. His wizard teammate got obliterated in a single hit like bro accidentally loaded into New Game Plus difficulty. Kyle and Istolfa both think of Goblin Swordsman immediately, but the description sounds way stronger than anything they've seen before. Kyle quickly concludes the goblin must be using some kind of special weapon. Marison says his warrior friend is still back there desperately fighting the monster alone, so he begs the group to help him before it's too late. Istolfa immediately wants to help because this man physically cannot ignore somebody in trouble. Dorma agrees too, saying helping people is literally part of his duty as a priest. Bro says it like he's filing customer service tickets for suffering civilians. He tells Marison to guide them there immediately. Bro Kyle, however, does not look convinced. He warns everybody that there are tons of rookie adventurers like Marison around, so this could easily be a trap. And honestly, with how cursed this dungeon already is, that paranoia is completely fair. Still, even Kyle admits the situation sounds serious, because if the story is true, then they're dealing with a monster strong enough to destroy an entire party by itself. Kyle asks Astolfa if he really wants to risk this knowing all that. Astolfa hesitates for a moment, but says he can't just abandon Marison after hearing everything. Kyle lets out the most exhausted sigh imaginable before finally agreeing, although he warns them that if things get too dangerous, they need to run away immediately. Astolfa agrees because this isn't just about him anymore. If something happens, he's the only one capable of protecting Dorma and Kyle properly. My boy is carrying emotional responsibility buffs on top of physical damage now. Soon they arrive at the ambush site, and the atmosphere instantly becomes horrifying. Blood is splattered everywhere, and lying nearby is the dead body of Marison's wizard teammate. The vibe goes from dungeon grinding to fantasy horror movie immediately. Kyle is about to ask where Marison's warrior friend is, but then they see him. Blooded Goblin is standing over an adventurer with a sword raised high, ready to finish him off. The second they notice its guard is down, Kyle instantly fires Volt Magic at it, but the goblin dodges the spell effortlessly. Kyle's face immediately changes because bro just realized they're not fighting normal Goblin DLC anymore. Marison quickly casts Speed Assist magic on Astolfa, making his body feel lighter. The group tells Marison to drag his injured friend away and heal him while the three of them engage the monster directly. The strange sword in the goblin's hand clearly seems to be the source of its abnormal power, so somehow they need to separate the weapon from it. Astolfa rushes in first, but the goblin dodges his attack just as easily as it dodged Kyle's magic earlier. At this point, Astolfa genuinely starts wondering if this thing is reading their movements in advance because its reactions are absolutely cracked. On top of that, its physical strength is leagues above any goblin they've fought before. While Astolfa's distracted thinking about all this, the goblin suddenly attacks him. Thankfully, Dorma intercepts just in time and saves him while yelling at him for zoning out during combat. Ironically, Dorma gets so busy scolding him that the goblin almost attacks him next, but Kyle saves him with Volt Magic again. Bro is fighting for his life while babysitting two emotionally unstable teammates. But Kyle tells everybody to focus and get back into formation while wondering what kind of monstrosity they're even dealing with. Dorma stares at the goblin more carefully before suddenly saying it might actually be a goblin hero. The entire atmosphere changes instantly. Dorma explains that according to rumors, goblin heroes are extremely rare special individuals that normally only appear on the second floor or higher. There's only been one recorded sighting of one on the first level before, which basically means these three accidentally encountered a hidden boss while still running rookie gear. At that point, they all realize stealing the goblin's sword isn't going to be simple at all. Astolfa doesn't fully understand what they mean yet, because before he can process it, the goblin suddenly raises its sword intentionally. The blade starts glowing while ancient writing appears across it. Dorma manages to read the words, "Cut all their ties." The second he reads that aloud, he screams a warning to his friends, but it's already too late. The goblin swings its sword and slices through Astolfa's arm. Everything freezes. Astolfa watches in horror as his arm literally detaches from his body. Bro just got hit with the most traumatic combat tutorial imaginable. Dorma and Kyle instantly rush to help him while Dorma smashes the goblin with heavy weapon magic, cracking it directly in the head. The goblin shrieks in pain before violently throwing Dorma away. Dorma realizes the goblin is desperately trying to recover its sword, so they need to finish this now before it gets another clean hit in. Kyle steps forward and starts blasting it with Gigavolt magic repeatedly, but even that isn't enough to stop it completely. Dorma Kyle keeps yelling at Astolfa to stay conscious, but meanwhile, Astolfa is drowning in despair. He starts wondering if Kyle was right earlier, and if they really should have run away. He feels like he failed again while watching his friends desperately fight without him. But then another thought hits him harder. He doesn't want to lose them. He needs to protect them. Maybe now is finally the time to use the power. Meanwhile, Kyle continues attacking the goblin with Gigavolt, but the monster has already memorized the spell's trajectory. Dorma starts panicking, but Kyle yells at him to shut up because he's trying to think. Then suddenly Kyle notices something behind the goblin and starts smiling. Bro just activated strategist mode again. The second the goblin charges toward him, Kyle gives a signal to Astolfa. And despite everything, Astolfa moves. Using the goblin's own opening against it, he slashes the monster down with its own weapon. At last, the abnormal goblin finally falls. The battle is over, but Astolfa is completely wrecked physically. Kyle and Dorma immediately rush over trying to heal him, but even while fading out, Astolfa only feels relieved that both of his friends are safe. He's happy he managed to defeat the abnormal goblin through his own strength instead of running away. Then my boy finally passes out from exhaustion. Kyle and Dorma decide to let him rest because after everything that just happened, he absolutely earned it. Honestly, this rookie squad just fought a secret mini-boss way above their pay grade and somehow survived through pure friendship, panic, and unhealed trauma. The squad reports back to the Adventurers Guild and casually drops the absolutely insane news that they defeated a goblin hero. The guild workers instantly stop functioning for a second because rookie adventurers are not supposed to come back saying stuff like that. One of the workers asks how they even know it was really a goblin hero, and Dorma proudly steps forward admitting he bought some illegal dungeon information before, so he recognized it immediately. Bro really said, "Trust me, I read the forbidden PDFs." The guild worker examines the sword they brought back and confirms that it perfectly matches the records about goblin hero weapons. At that point, there's no doubt anymore. The guild happily accepts the information and purchases it as officially verified data. Basically, these three accidentally became the fantasy equivalent of bug testers, who discovered a hidden boss before everybody else. Suddenly, some older adventurer grabs all three of them in a giant hug while loudly praising them for beating a goblin hero. The entire guild starts hyping them up afterward. Other adventurers gather around congratulating them, and somebody even tells Istolfa he almost ranked up to bronze already. That absolutely fries Istolfa's brain. The guild worker explains that promotions don't normally happen that quickly, but if they successfully conquer the second floor soon, reaching bronze rank is completely possible. Istolfa is stunned because bronze rank is considered professional adventurer territory. My boy showed up here looking like emotionally damaged starter pack DLC, and now people are talking about him becoming pro rank already. After surviving a whole wave of praise and attention, the gang finally escapes the guild building before Istolfa combusts from social overload. While walking outside, Istolfa asks if it's really okay for them to keep the goblin hero sword instead of giving it back to Marison's party. Kyle immediately says it's fine, because Marison and his friends almost died, and they were just grateful to survive in the first place. Honestly, those guys probably saw the sword and said, "Nah, you keep that cursed nonsense." Dorma then asks how Istolfa's arm is doing after literally getting severed earlier. Istolfa says he's completely fine thanks to Dorma and Marison's healing magic. Although Dorma points out his armor and clothes are still completely wrecked. Dorma looks like he got dragged through a fantasy car accident. Because of that, the squad decides to head back to the equipment shop. They also still need to sell the goblin hero sword, and considering all the dungeon loot they already earned, they're finally close to affording the beast leather armor. While walking there, Dorma asks about Fleet, and Istolfa happily explains that Fleet has been helping them since the beginning and always gives good advice even when he talks too much. Once they arrive, they immediately see Fleet arguing with another adventurer who keeps demanding the strongest weapon in the shop. Bro walked in acting like a JRPG protagonist, trying to skip straight to endgame loot. Liakri notices Istolfa first, but when Fleet looks over, he gets completely shocked seeing how destroyed Istolfa already looks after only a few hours. My guy's equipment durability is genuinely tragic. Once inside, Fleet examines the goblin hero sword carefully and explains that it's a degraded version of the hero sword ability called Cut All Their Ties. Apparently, that ability line is considered insanely powerful among special weapons. Istolfa asks if other weapons like this exist, and Fleet explains that some abilities are ranged attacks, some create barriers, and some are complete garbage that do nothing except glow. Imagine risking your life for legendary loot only to unlock flashlight mode. Fleet then asks if Istolfa is really sure he wants to sell such a powerful sword. Since Istolfa can't properly use it anyway, Fleet offers him 110,000 yen for it. Everybody freezes. Istolfa almost ascends spiritually hearing that number. Green went from "I can barely afford armor repairs" to touching 6 figures in like 3 dungeon runs. Fleet casually says the ability combination is incredible, so the sword is naturally worth a fortune. The second Istolfa receives the money, he instantly calculates everything and asks Fleet to sell him the beast leather armor for 70,000 yen. Fleet already expected this outcome because apparently this man knows Istolfa's decisions before Istolfa himself does. He already adjusted the armor beforehand so it can fit immediately. Once Istolfa changes into it, he asks Dorma and Kyle how it looks. Both immediately agree the armor suits him perfectly, and even makes him look way more dependable now. Bro finally upgraded from rookie getting bullied by goblins to actual frontline adventurer. Fleet asks how the armor feels, and Istolfa says it honestly feels like his strength naturally increased. He even says that if he fought a goblin guard now, he genuinely feels like he wouldn't lose anymore. That confidence boost alone is probably worth half the price. Istolfa thanks Fleet sincerely, but Fleet just shrugs it off and says he only offered the best equipment possible within the budget they had. Honestly, this dude acts grumpy, but secretly supports these kids harder than half the guild. Fleet then asks what they're planning next, but before anybody can answer, Dorma's stomach growls loud enough to interrupt the entire conversation. Bra's hunger meter started screaming mid-cutscene. Dorma immediately defends himself, saying it's not his fault because they literally haven't eaten anything all day. Kyle agrees too, pointing out they've been running around since morning and definitely shouldn't keep fighting on empty stomachs. So the group finally decides to rest and grab food before doing anything else. As they leave the shop, Istolfa quietly touches his new armor while smiling to himself. There was a time when he genuinely believed he'd never be able to afford something this amazing, so realizing their hard work actually paid off feels unreal to him. Unfortunately, reality hits immediately afterward, because after spending most of his money on the armor, Istolfa is basically broke again. Meanwhile, his two rich-taste gremlins of friends somehow locate the fanciest restaurant imaginable and immediately decide they're eating there. The second Istolfa sees the place, he tries refusing. Because bro already knows one plate, that probably costs half his remaining funds. Kyle completely ignores him and drags him inside anyway. My boy really escaped dungeon death multiple times just to get kidnapped into financial ruin by his own party members. Istolfa still refuses to eat at the restaurant because bro is genuinely used to starving. Growing up broke had him so accustomed to empty stomachs that going days without food felt normal to him. Kyle and Dorma are absolutely horrified hearing this because my guy is treating malnutrition like it's a personality trait. The two immediately start lecturing him, explaining that as he gets stronger, his body is going to need way more food than before. But Istolfa keeps worrying about money and says eating properly would just drain all the cash he worked so hard to earn. That's when both Kyle and Dorma straight up call him an idiot. Honestly deserved. Look, they tell him he should use that as motivation to keep making more money instead of settling for being hungry all the time. Bro has been grinding for survival while these two are trying to teach him the revolutionary concept of please eat actual meals. Hearing their words genuinely motivates Istolfa though, and eventually he finally agrees to go inside. Right as they're about to start eating, Stella suddenly joins them too. She introduces herself properly to Dorma, although the second these two meet, it instantly becomes obvious they probably aren't going to get along smoothly either. The squad is slowly turning into a group of strong personalities competing for most difficult person to deal with. Stella mentions that everyone at the guild is already talking about the boys defeating a goblin hero. Bro's rookie squad accidentally became local celebrities overnight. The boys then mention something strange they noticed before the goblin hero fight. There were barely any goblins around beforehand, which felt unnatural. Stella explains that weaker goblins were probably hiding because the goblin hero was nearby. Even monsters know when an area's top OP has entered the lobby. Those goblins were not trying to get caught lacking near that thing. Still, Stella warns them not to get overconfident just because they defeated one powerful enemy. According to her, there are monsters way scarier than the goblin hero deeper in the dungeon, so lowering their guard now would be unbelievably stupid. Basically, she hits them with the classic congratulations on surviving the tutorial boss speech. Then she suddenly rewards Istolfa for surviving by pulling his face directly into her tiny slice of heaven. My boy instantly enters critical emotional damage territory while Kyle and Dorma stand there looking spiritually devastated that it wasn't them. Instead, these two were staring at Istolfa like bro just won a lottery nobody else even got tickets for. Absolute generational jealousy moment. Dorma dinner, Istolfa officially invites Dorma to join their party permanently. Dorma happily accepts and says he's looking forward to fighting beside Istolfa from now on. The second he says that, Kyle immediately starts acting salty because bro heard special bond and instantly got friendship rivalry debuffs. Luckily for everyone's wallets, Stella decides to pay for the entire meal as a reward for defeating the goblin hero. Honestly, thank God, because Istolfa was probably calculating menu prices with tears in his eyes already. Then after dinner, the group heads back for the evening. On the way, Stella quietly hands Dorma a letter proving she approves of him joining the team. With that recommendation, the guild should let him officially register with Istolfa and Kyle's party without any issues. But as they continue walking, the boys start discussing their next big objective, defeating the goblin guard and finally advancing to the second floor. The atmosphere feels different now because they're no longer just random struggling rookies anymore. They're an actual party, and deep down, Istolfa realizes how grateful he is for this strange gift called friendship. For the first time in forever, he has people beside him that genuinely care about him and rely on him too. Because of that, he quietly promises himself that he has to become someone his friends can depend on no matter what. The squad is back in the dungeon once again, and this time there's only one thing standing between them and the second floor, the goblin guard. No pressure or anything. Fully locked in, the boys march into the spooky area again. Although Kyle immediately gets a bad feeling the second he hears strange grunts echoing nearby. And boom, the goblin guard appears like the world's ugliest gatekeeper. Everybody looks nervous for a second, but Kyle quickly tells them not to panic because they literally defeated a goblin hero already. Compared to that nightmare, this guy should be manageable. Bro is out here giving motivational speeches while staring at fantasy Darth Vader. Kyle reminds Istolfa that all he has to do is stick to the plan. Last time they lost because the goblin guard's armor was made from iron, making it insanely difficult to damage with weak weapons. But now Dorma's mace is made of steel, which works way better against iron armor. And on top of that, Dorma can cast heavy weapon magic to make the mace even stronger. Basically, they finally unlocked the correct damage type for the boss fight. The strategy is simple. Kyle and Dorma distract the goblin guard while Istolfa goes for weak points in the armor. The fight starts immediately. Kyle blasts the goblin guard with bolt magic, stunning it long enough for Istolfa to rush in and strike one of the weaker sections of its armor. The attack actually works, but they quickly realize one hit isn't enough. Unfortunately, right after that, more goblins suddenly start flooding into the spooky room. Looks like the goblin guard called backup bro really activated the summon the squad mechanic. Kyle refuses to get intimidated just because a bunch of extra goblins pulled up though. He tells Istolfa to focus entirely on the goblin guard while he and Dorma handle the smaller enemies. Istolfa agrees and charges the guard again. This time he lands a direct hit on a critical part of the armor, finally bringing the monster down for good. And just like that, the first floor is officially cleared. Honestly, huge moment for the boys. They started out getting bullied by regular goblins, and now they're speedrunning floor bosses with teamwork and trauma. Dorma hands the goblin guard's magic stone to Istolfa for safekeeping because it's official proof they conquered the first floor. Now all they have to do is head down the stairs to reach the second level. Without wasting time, the gang starts descending deeper into the spooky passageway. Istolfa wonders what kind of place the second floor will be. The monsters are definitely stronger, but he feels confident because now he has real friends fighting beside him. My boy finally unlocked the power of friendship but actually useful buff. The creepy staircase eventually leads them into some kind of strange hut filled with exhausted-looking adventurers. Sitting in the corner is a black orb, and at first the gang thinks it's another homecoming orb. But one of the adventurers explains it's actually an orb of progress. Once touched, it records which floor an adventurer has reached. Yon the adventurer can instantly tell these three are newbies because they don't even know basic second floor mechanics yet. He welcomes them to the second floor, known as the Forest of Gluttony, and warns them that compared to this place, the first floor was basically tutorial mode. The Forfa asks about the hut they're standing in, and the adventurer explains it's the only safe zone on the entire floor. Dorma assumes everybody there is trying to challenge deeper levels, but the adventurer says most of them already gave up on progressing. Apparently the monsters here are on an entirely different level. Not only are they stronger, but navigating the floor itself is insanely difficult too. Dorma asks why they stay there if they already gave up, and the adventurer explains that even if they can't progress farther, the second floor is still profitable. Tons of adventurers stay behind farming materials and loot to sell instead. Basically, they became dungeon wage workers after realizing the boss fights were not worth it. Kyle instantly calls all this pathetic because bro has zero respect for quitter mentality. He says he didn't come all the way here just to listen to NPCs talk about giving up. Then he tells the boys they're leaving already. Meanwhile, wholesome Istolfa bows politely to the adventurer and thanks him for teaching them so much about the second floor. Even the adventurer looks surprised because apparently respectful rookies are basically extinct these days. Before they leave, the adventurer suddenly warns them about beetles. According to him, their shells are absurdly hard, making direct attacks nearly useless. He straight up advises them to run immediately if they see one, because careless adventurers end up dead really fast against those things. Istolfa thanks him again, before the group finally leaves the hut. Once outside, the boys finally see the Forest of Gluttony properly, and honestly, the vibe shift is insane. Every dungeon floor really feels like a completely different game genre. The entire forest is filled with fruit trees, and the air smells unbelievably sweet and fresh. Perfect-looking fruit hangs everywhere, looking so delicious it feels suspicious. The place is basically fantasy Costco produce section, mixed with psychological horror. Dorma immediately asks if the fruit is edible, but Kyle shuts that idea down instantly. Bro reminds them they're still inside a dungeon, so touching random magical fruit is exactly how people end up cursed, poisoned, or transformed into side quest material. Since they don't know enough about this place yet, they decide to just observe for now instead of interacting with anything. Kyle admits that if this forest wasn't inside a death dungeon, these fruits would actually make him insanely hungry. Then he realizes that's probably why this place is called the Forest of Gluttony in the first place. While exploring, Istolfa asks Dorma if he can borrow his mace again. Dorma casually agrees because if the frontline fighter is carrying stronger weapons, everyone survives longer. But then he casually adds one very important detail. The mace costs 300,000 yen. Istolfa almost dies hearing that number alone. Bro immediately starts holding the weapon like it's a newborn child made of glass. One wrong swing and he'd probably spend the next 50 years paying off debt. As they continue deeper into the forest, Istolfa wonders what exactly the adventurer meant about the beetles. Dorma jokes that maybe they just need to watch out for bugs in general. Although ironically, they haven't seen a single insect anywhere yet. Still, the entire place feels wrong. Kyle notices even the forest paths look unnatural, almost like somebody intentionally planted the trees in perfect rows. The fruits also look suspiciously tempting, like they're waiting for somebody dumb enough to touch them. Kyle says it honestly feels like some inhuman force is controlling the entire area. He's been unusually quiet for a while, so Istolfa asks if he's okay. Dorma immediately jumps in with peak tsundere energy and tells Kyle to take things seriously, because if something bad happens, he'll probably be the first one to die. Brom really cares but absolutely refuses to say it normally. Suddenly they hear rustling nearby. Instantly the entire squad forms up because the thick leaves make visibility terrible. They have no idea where an attack could come from. Then out of nowhere, something slams directly into Istolfa. He barely blocks the attack using his arm guard, but the impact still sends him sliding backward. The boys finally get a good look at the attacker and immediately realize these are the beetles the adventurer warned them about, and these things are way stronger than expected. The gang suddenly finds themselves surrounded by giant flying beetles the size of literal heads, and to make things worse, there's a whole swarm of them. The second Astolfo sees that, he instantly remembers the adventurer's warning about never fighting these things head-on. So instead of trying to act tough, he immediately tells the boys to run, because standing together in one spot is basically begging to get folded. As they sprint through the forest, the beetles aggressively chase after them while attacking non-stop. One of them slams directly into Astolfo, and if he didn't have his upgraded armor on, bro would have gotten turned into a human kebab instantly. He tries swinging back at them, but the beetles are way too fast to hit properly. At this point, he's basically getting bullied by airborne tanks. Dorma asks Kyle if he can use magic, but Kyle complains there's barely enough time to aim because these things move like caffeinated drones. Even so, Kyle suddenly casts Ice Storm directly toward both the beetles and Astolfo. Dorma immediately panics because it looks like Kyle just friendly fired the front line again. But Kyle calmly explains his spell isn't powerful enough to seriously hurt them anyway. The beetles immediately switch targets and start buzzing toward Kyle instead, but Kyle activates Heat Web to slow them down. Bro suddenly reveals he had a science class moment mid-fight, and realized that no matter how tough their shells are, rapid temperature changes should still mess them up. And somehow it works. The beetles slow down long enough for Astolfo to smash them directly into nearby trees, finally taking them out. The boys genuinely can't believe they survived because those beetles were absurdly strong. Honestly, the second floor is already proving it's built different. Kyle immediately starts complaining too, because if every enemy on this floor is like this, the whole place is going to be unbelievably annoying. Life's one mistake against those beetles, and the fight basically ends before you can even defend yourself properly. The gang realizes they got attacked before they could even gather enough information to create a strategy for the floor. Their original let's explore carefully first plan basically got speedrun into disaster instantly. While Astolfo and Dorma start collecting the beetles' magic stones, Kyle takes time to look around and think. He realizes the adventurers at the hut were probably talking about these fruits when they mentioned the floor being profitable. Those people must spend their days farming fruit while constantly fighting off beetles, which means even the quitters at the hut are still strong enough to survive this nightmare floor. That makes Kyle suspicious. Either the profits here are insanely worth it, or there's another reason those adventurers refuse to move deeper. How suddenly Astolfo calls Kyle over in frustration. Turns out the beetle shells are so ridiculously hard that he can't even properly cut into them. He immediately realizes that without borrowing Dorma's mace earlier, they probably would have died. Kyle agrees and says Astolfo's current dagger is way too weak for the second floor. At minimum, they need to get him a weapon, one rank higher. Sir Pasfa sadly agrees, although everybody knows stronger weapons cost ridiculous amounts of money. Then Dorma suddenly suggests something unexpected. Instead of buying a whole new weapon, why not evolve the dagger itself? Kyle reminds him that upgrading dungeon weapons normally takes forever, because they had to destroy an entire army of goblins just to repair one tiny scratch earlier. But then Dorma casually reveals he learned another new spell during all their recent battles, the magic stone synthesis. Instead of smashing magic stones into weapons physically, the spell directly fuses their energy into the weapon without wasting mana. That means the dagger can evolve way faster than before. Rada accidentally unlocked fantasy weapon modding. Dorma insists this method is far more efficient than wasting money on completely new equipment, and honestly, it's worth trying. Kyle immediately agrees and dumps every magic stone they collected from the first floor onto the ground. Astolfo gets nervous and asks if they're really okay spending all that profit on his weapon specifically. Both Kyle and Dorma immediately tell him to stop worrying because helping him get stronger helps the entire team. They're all party members now, so naturally they support each other. My boy is still emotionally shocked every time people willingly help him instead of using him. After gathering all the stones together, Dorma casts magic stone synthesis. But at first, Kyle doubts anything dramatic will happen, but suddenly, all the magic stones start glowing and fuse directly into the dagger with a giant flash of light. Once it's over, Dorma hands the dagger back to Astolfo, and bro is absolutely stunned. The weapon barely even looks like the same dagger anymore. You can tell just from looking at it that it's become much stronger. Dorma explains the transformation happened so quickly because beetle magic stones are naturally way stronger than goblin ones. Just today's haul alone massively upgraded the weapon. Deuce Leif gets insanely excited and thanks Dorma repeatedly, while Dorma proudly declares they should gather even more stones to keep evolving it further. Kyle still thinks the entire dungeon weapon system is weird though. The idea that weapons literally grow stronger by absorbing monster magic feels suspiciously game-like. Dorma points out that nobody truly understands the dungeon anyway, so weird mechanics are basically normal at this point. Kyle sums it all up perfectly by saying expect the unexpected, because nobody knows why the dungeon exists or what kind of beings created it in the first place. According to him, exploring this place feels like wandering through a bottomless swamp full of mysteries. Unfortunately, that explanation is way too nerdy for Astolfo and Dorma. Both immediately decide there's no point overthinking dungeon lore right now because their only priority is conquering this floor. Kyle sighs dramatically but agrees. Since their weapon problem is temporarily solved, they should focus on building a proper strategy next. But before they can continue discussing plans, something suddenly snorts loudly inside the bushes. This massive armored boar bursts out in front of them. Dorma instantly notices its outer shell looks almost like hardened armor plating, but before he can even finish thinking about it, another boar appears behind them too. The second Dorma recognizes them properly. He immediately starts running while dragging the other two with him. Tadil Stolfa desperately asks why they're fleeing so fast, and Dorma explains these monsters are armor boars, also known as the berserkers of the jungle. They're infamous among adventurers because their charge attacks are horrifyingly destructive. And right on cue, one of the boars slams into a nearby tree. The tree basically explodes. At that moment, the boys instantly realize if that thing hit them directly, they'd become red paste immediately. Dorma even says he once watched a fully armored adventurer get flattened by one right in front of him. Bro saw somebody wearing full gold copper armor get turned into a pancake firsthand. Traumatizing stuff. So for now, their only strategy is run for your lives. The gang immediately remembers the hut is supposed to be a safe haven, so they sprint toward it as fast as possible. By the time they finally reach the hut, everybody is completely exhausted. Kyle especially looks done. My boy collapses on the floor wheezing like his lungs filed a resignation letter. At this point, they all realize exploring deeper today is impossible, so they decide not to overdo things and continue tomorrow instead. Later that night, back at the inn, Stella immediately starts laughing after hearing they got chased by armor boars. Kyle snaps at her instantly because these kids were almost turned into fantasy roadkill, and she's over here giggling about it. Stella apologizes, although she admits she genuinely couldn't help laughing. Still, she explains that while armor boars are terrifying, they're not unbeatable. According to her, the boys got overwhelmed by fear the moment they saw them and completely stopped paying attention to their actual behavior. She advises them to properly observe the boars next time instead of instantly panicking. Istolfa seriously takes her advice to heart, so Stella rewards him with another important hint. She explains that every floor in the dungeon operates according to its own unique rules. The first floor had hidden dangers inside an open grassland, so naturally the second floor also has its own specific gimmick. Done. Then she asks if they noticed all the fruit growing throughout the forest of gluttony. The boys nod. Stella then casually drops the most suspicious information imaginable. As long as somebody keeps eating the fruit, the monsters on the second floor won't attack them. The entire squad freezes. Kyle immediately realizes that's why all those adventurers at the hut stay there farming fruit comfortably instead of progressing deeper. But when Istolfa asks if they should eat the fruit too, Stella instantly says absolutely not. She warns them not to even think about eating those fruits if they want to survive and continue progressing through the dungeon. The boys are completely shocked, and when they ask why, Stella refuses to explain directly. Instead, she simply tells them to observe their surroundings carefully, because not everything inside the dungeon is what it seems. The gang heads back into the dungeon once again, but this time the black orb of progress instantly teleports them straight to the second floor. Honestly, huge quality of life upgrade because nobody wanted to replay the entire first floor every single time like some grindy RPG side quest. The weird part though is that the hut on the second floor is completely empty today. The boys assume everybody's probably outside somewhere, and Kyle honestly seems relieved because finally they get some peace and quiet to discuss strategy without random quitters trauma dumping in the background. While they're talking, Istolfa notices Dorma carrying a shield he hasn't seen before and asks where he got it. Dorma proudly explains it was specially made for defending against forest enemies. The shield strengthens rear defense so Istolfa can focus entirely on frontline combat instead of constantly worrying about getting jumped from behind. The Shilfa immediately apologizes for not being strong enough yet, and surprisingly even Kyle apologizes too for forcing Dorma to work overtime protecting his physically fragile mage build. Dorma shuts both of them down immediately though, saying improving defenses is everybody's responsibility, not just his. Meanwhile, Istolfa gets distracted wondering if Dorma is actually a boy or a girl because bro genuinely still cannot figure it out. Dorma instantly notices the suspicious stare and asks what he's thinking about, causing Istolfa to mentally blue screen for a second. To change the subject, they start talking about how much stronger everybody's gotten already. Kyle admits his magic has become way more reliable lately. The spells still aren't overwhelmingly powerful, but now he can properly support fights instead of just throwing emotional support fireworks everywhere. Dorma immediately teases him about still having terrible physical strength though. Kyle fires back saying he'll surpass Dorma soon enough, which honestly sounds impossible considering Dorma casually swings around 300,000 yen weapons like it's nothing. To calm the chaos, Istolfa suggests discussing strategy instead. According to guild information, the guardian of the second floor is called the Man-Eater. And of course, Dorma immediately knows exactly what that is, because this dude secretly studies dungeon lore like it's his favorite anime wiki. Hello? He explains the Man-Eater is basically a gigantic carnivorous plant monster covered in creepy vines and bright red flowers. Bro sounds like a botanical nightmare DLC boss. Dorma also mentions there's another dangerous monster on this floor they need to watch out for too, so everybody pays close attention while discussing survival plans. After the strategy meeting ends, Istolfa asks Kyle if he learned anything else about those fruits Stella warned them about. Kyle says the only confirmed thing is that monsters stop attacking people who eat the fruit. Beyond that, they still don't understand why it works. The boys wonder if the fruits naturally repel monsters somehow, But they know they won't figure things out just by hiding in the hut forever, so they head back into the forest for more exploration and combat. After fighting several monsters, one thing becomes painfully obvious. Everything on this floor is weird as hell. Every monster perfectly matches the creepy forest vibe, like the dungeon itself hired a full-time aesthetic designer. After a while, Kyle starts running low on stamina, and the group realizes they need to head back before they can't safely return anymore. Unfortunately, that's exactly when an armor boar appears again. The second Kyle and Dorma see it, both instantly start running on instinct. Meanwhile, Istolfa just stands there staring directly at the charging monster like bro is having a character development flashback. He remembers Stella's advice. The armor boar's charge is dangerous, but not unbeatable. And if Stella said it could be overcome, then it has to be possible somehow. So instead of panicking, Istella forces himself to calm down and carefully observe the boar's movements. The boar charges at full speed and completely slams him into the ground. Dorma immediately rushes over in panic, but Istolfo suddenly says he finally understands the trick. He realized it yesterday too, but once the boar starts charging, it can only move straight forward. On top of that, after charging, it freezes for a split second before regaining control again. Basically, the armor boar is all gas and zero steering. Armor boar's brain starts processing like he just downloaded a new combat patch. Then he confidently tells the boys to leave this one to him. Kyle literally steps forward and yells, "Hey pig, come at me." Even Dorma thinks that insult was unbelievably cheap. But somehow it works. The armor boar gets offended enough to charge directly toward Kyle. That's exactly what Kyle wanted. The second the boar commits to the charge, Kyle casts Freeze Shot and traps its legs with ice magic. As the boar struggles, it loses balance and completely faceplants. Dorma is shocked by how simple the solution ended up being, but Kyle smugly explains it's basically the same concept as tripping somebody with a rope trap. The only difference is he used magic instead of rope. Even if the ice spell itself is weak, it only needs to immobilize the legs for a split second to completely ruin the boar's momentum. And just like that, the terrifying armor boar gets folded by physics. Kyle proudly presents his genius strategy, and honestly, the boys can't even roast him this time because it genuinely worked. They successfully defeat the armor boar and immediately start collecting the magic stones afterward. While doing that, they notice something strange. As long as they're physically touching a dead monster, the body doesn't disappear. That realization completely changes everything because this whole time they thought monsters vanished instantly unless you grab the magic stones fast enough, which means there are probably tons of dungeon mechanics they've misunderstood already. Hearing the word misunderstood suddenly reminds Kyle about Stella's warning that things aren't always what they seem. Bro is still mad about how cryptic she sounded earlier too. He keeps thinking about it because he knows there's some bigger meaning hiding underneath all this weird dungeon logic. Before he can fully process it though, another adventurer suddenly appears and compliments them for defeating an armor boar. The squad immediately goes on guard, but the adventurer casually complains that this is no way to greet an elder. He explains he was inside the hut yesterday when they first arrived, so he already recognizes them as rookies from the first floor. He says he's heading back to the hut and offers to answer any questions they have about the second floor along the way. The boys quietly debate whether they should trust him, but Kyle decides the man seems knowledgeable enough to be useful. Besides, if something shady happens, the three of them can probably handle it together. So they agree and start following him back toward the hut. While walking, Kyle notices the adventurer's equipment looks surprisingly light and asks about it. The man casually explains he doesn't need heavy gear because monsters don't attack him anymore. Dorma immediately asks if he ate the fruits too. The adventurer confirms it. According to him, eating the fruit allows people to move freely around the second floor without monsters bothering them. And honestly, he seems completely relaxed about it too. He says as long as they don't try progressing to the next floor, there's nothing to fear. Istolfa asks what exactly he means by that. The adventurer explains that on the second floor, humans normally exist as prey inside the ecosystem. Monsters hunt people naturally because that's the law of the forest of gluttony. But eating the fruit changes the hierarchy completely. Once somebody eats the fruit, monsters start treating them as equals instead of prey. Sounds great at first, except for one horrifying catch. People who eat the fruit can no longer challenge the floor guardian because the guardian now exists above them in the hierarchy, meaning they permanently lose the ability to progress deeper into the dungeon. The boys go completely silent hearing that. Often, Astolfa asks if the adventurer is really okay living like that forever, but the man calmly says constantly chasing higher goals only leads to endless suffering. Here, he never has to worry about starving again, and that's enough for him. Kyle immediately calls that mindset boring. According to him, living without trying to move forward is basically the same thing as already being dead. And while saying that, Kyle suddenly realizes something important. If what this adventurer said is true, then Stella's warning doesn't fully match up with it. The others realize it too. Kyle suddenly stops walking and says they need to return to the hut immediately because there's something else they need to confirm. But before they can move, a horrifying scream echoes out from inside the hut. How everybody freezes. Their first thought is monster attack, but monsters shouldn't attack people who've eaten the fruit. Then the boys suddenly remember Stella's exact words. Most monsters won't attack you. Not all monsters. And most importantly, if you want to live, don't even think about eating the fruit. The hut door slowly creaks open and the squad instantly locks in. Everybody immediately takes combat positions because after everything they've seen on this floor, nobody's trusting creepy noises anymore. Istolfa asks Kyle how much stamina he has left, and Kyle admits he recovered a little, but bro is still running on low battery mode. Dorma suddenly warns them that something's coming, and then they see it. A figure slowly steps out of the darkness. At first they can't even tell if it's a monster because none of the information they learned mentioned anything that looked like this. The thing standing before them gives off a ridiculously ominous aura, like the dungeon itself accidentally spawned a nightmare build. Before Istolfa can even process what he's looking at, the monster instantly appears right in front of him. No footsteps, no warning, just speed. Istolfa desperately tries to keep up with its movements, but it's moving so fast he barely even realizes where it is before it's already attacking. Bro genuinely feels like he's fighting lag itself. Then he looks directly into its eyes and suddenly his body freezes completely. Pure fear. It's like his instincts themselves stop functioning. The monster is about to finish him right there, but Kyle barely manages to hit it with magic, interrupting it for a split second. That tiny opening is enough for the boys to escape the lake, and they run. The gang barely manages to get away for now, but nobody feels safe because there's absolutely no way they can actually defeat that thing in a normal fight. It's only a matter of time before it tracks them down again. The boys try to figure out what just happened. They already learned eating the fruit stops most monsters from attacking, so this thing must be one of the exceptions to the second floor's rules. Basically, the dungeon still said you thought you found an exploit. Lol, nope. Tio. Kyle asks Istolfa what it felt like fighting the monster, and Istolfa explains it was unbelievably fast and gave off an overwhelming ominous feeling. Worse yet, he's convinced the monster wasn't even showing its full power yet. Dorma immediately asks if they should just retreat entirely because if Istolfa can't keep up with it, none of them stand a chance. But then another horrifying realization hits them. They probably can't even run from it. The thing is so fast it could easily catch them while they're climbing back toward the stairs. Kyle says he might still have enough mana left for one small slowing spell, but nowhere near enough for prolonged combat. For once, even the brain of the squad has no clue what to do. The more Kyle thinks about the situation, the worse their chances seem. But then Istolfa and Dorma remind him not to fry his brain overthinking everything because the three of them always fight best together. Honestly, these boys have reached the stage where emotional support is literally part of combat strategy now. Kyle calms down and starts thinking again. Then he asks an important question. If they can somehow deal with the monster's speed, would that be enough to beat it? Kyle admits he doesn't know any magic that fully restricts movement, but he does know another type of spell that might work. Soon after, Kyle and Dorma hide themselves inside nearby bushes while waiting for the monster to appear again. Sure enough, the creature finds them almost instantly and attacks. But right as it moves in, Istolfa suddenly charges from behind and catches it off guard. Thanks to Dorma's light weapon spell, Istolfa can move much more freely now. The sword feels lighter and easier to control, although he realizes he can't rely entirely on the weapon's weight to win fights anymore. Bro is finally developing actual skill instead of just unga-bunga swinging. The attack works. Istolfa manages to slice off the monster's arm along with the weapon it was holding. Massive opening. He immediately prepares to finish it off. But the second the monster looks directly at him again, his body freezes. Completely. Kyle instantly realizes something's wrong, and Dorma identifies it as a curse affecting Istolfa's body. The monster then kicks him away so hard he can barely breathe. If they don't stop it now, the fight is over. Kyle immediately casts Freeze Shot to halt the monster for a moment while Dorma starts trying to break the curse somehow. Thinking quickly, Dorma throws his shield directly at the monster, and somehow it works. The curse breaks for just long enough for Istolfa to move again. Without hesitating, he delivers the final blow and kills the monster once and for all. The boys finally did it, but they don't even celebrate, because they know lingering around here is suicidal. More monsters could appear at any moment, so they immediately prepare to leave. Before running though, Dorma quietly watches the body disappear completely, which confirms something horrifying. That thing really was considered a monster. After a brutal walk all the way back, the gang finally escapes the dungeon looking completely exhausted. Kyle especially looks finished beyond repair because after fighting non-stop and walking the entire way back, Bra physically cannot move anymore. Dorma immediately suggests bringing return orbs next time because nobody wants to repeat this marathon from hell again. Right then, Stella suddenly appears out of nowhere and starts laughing at them. Kyle instantly snaps at her because these kids almost got murdered by cursed speed demons and she's standing there giggling like it's comedy hour. Stella apologizes, but she admits they genuinely look ridiculous right now. Still, she asks about their adventure. Istolfa proudly explains they defeated the armor boar by carefully observing its movements instead of panicking. Stella immediately praises him and rewards him with another hug while Kyle complains that they're literally standing in the middle of the street. Kyle gets serious again and finally asks Stella what she really meant earlier when she warned them not to eat the fruit if they wanted to survive. Stella glances at the robe Dorma is carrying from the monster they defeated and casually explains that if the owner of that robe had been stronger, the boys probably would have died instantly if they'd eaten the fruit. Or that was what she meant. Bluff, she really turned a life-threatening warning into the most cryptic riddle imaginable for no reason. Otolfa says the old adventurer they met earlier must have gotten lucky somehow because there's no way somebody with equipment like his could survive against a monster like that. Stella gets curious hearing this, so the boys explain everything about the adventurer at the hut and how they couldn't find his body afterward. Noak and they assumed he escaped because the hut was supposed to be a safe haven. Stella immediately questions that logic. If the monster attacked inside the hut, then how could the hut actually be safe in the first place? The question completely breaks the boys' brains. She then asks who even told them the hut was safe to begin with. Kyle slowly realizes the adventurers themselves believed it was safe and they simply accepted that as truth without questioning it. Stella explains the hut is actually called the Forest Watchman's Hut. Then she asks something terrifying. Did they really think the Forest Watchman would allow arrogant adventurers to endlessly steal fruit from the forest without consequences? Dorma points out they never found any bodies though, and that's when Stella drops the horrifying realization. Eating the fruit places humans on the same level as monsters. So what happens when monsters die? They vanish, just like the bodies inside the hut vanished. The boys go completely silent, realizing the truth. According to Stella, this is only her own theory based on observations, but honestly, it makes terrifying sense. Then she reminds them of the most important thing of all. A dungeon exists specifically to test adventurers, so why would there ever be a truly safe haven inside one? At that moment, the second floor suddenly feels way more horrifying than any monster they've fought so far. Istolfa is completely solo today, and Bro genuinely has no clue what to do with himself. Dorma is finally enjoying his first day off and forever by wandering around town like a tourist NPC, while Kyle is locked in his room grinding magic studies like finals are tomorrow. Earlier, Istolfa brought his absolutely cooked armor back to Fleet and apologized since the man literally just sold it to him not that long ago. Fleet has been wanting to say this for a minute, and now seems like the perfect time. He tells him that yeah, the gear is beginner stuff, but it's still high quality. Unless Istolfa is out there moving like he's trying to speedrun his own funeral, there's no reason the armor should already look this wrecked. At this rate, Bro is not surviving long enough to see endgame content. After hearing him out, Fleet tells him to leave the armor there for a few days so he can repair it, and he straight up bans Istolfa from entering the dungeon until it's fixed. Istolfa is stunned, but Fleet tells him to stop whining and take an actual break for once. Istolfa feels bad about burdening Kyle and Dorma, but the two of them genuinely don't care. They point out that ever since becoming an adventurer, he has literally never taken a day off. Bro has been on that non-stop grind set 24/7. So they decide to report today's stuff to the Adventurers Guild themselves and tell him to just go enjoy life for one day. Then they clown on him for trying to stress about money while being handed a free vacation. Istolfa decides it's probably better to go outside, but then realizes he has absolutely no idea how to spend money like a normal person. Since he promised not to worry about money, he can't even go hang around the guild, and while he's standing there buffering like a lagging internet connection, Kay suddenly walks by and calls out to him. He explains that he doesn't know how to spend a day off because his entire life has basically been survival mode and trying not to go broke. Kali thinks about it for a bit and says she's going shopping anyway so he can tag along if he wants. Maybe he'll find something he likes. Istolfa asks if he can really come with her, and Kali happily agrees. Because the streets are crowded, Kali wants to hold hands so they don't lose each other in the crowd, and honestly, Bro is getting premium boyfriend DLC without even realizing it. She drags him around from place to place until she overhears someone roasting how raggedy Istolfa looks. Looking at his torn-up clothes, she suggests they go buy him some new ones. Istolfa argues that his current clothes still work fine, but Kadal tells him there's more to clothing than just functionality. Basically, she's telling him to stop dressing like a side quest goblin. So they stop by the shops adventurers usually use. And then Istolfa tries on a bunch of clothes that honestly look pretty good on him. But then the shop owner starts teasing Kiki, saying she probably just wants her boyfriend to stop dressing like he lost a fight with poverty because going on a date dressed like that must have been embarrassing. Kiki instantly gets flustered and denies it being a date, while Istolfa internally starts tweaking because now he thinks his clothes embarrassed her this whole time. When Kay notices he's acting weird and asks what's wrong, he admits he hasn't really been paying attention, and asks if she can keep shopping with him a bit longer, because there's still so much he wants to learn. The day flies by like that, and eventually they decide to grab food. Istolfa says he's hungry enough to eat an entire horse, so Kay tells him she knows a cheap but insanely good spot. Apparently it's mostly for locals and kinda hidden away, but she and her dad go there all the time. On the way there, Istolfa thanks her for today because she showed him all these normal everyday things outside of adventuring, and it honestly changed the way he looks at life. At first, Key tries to brush it off like it's nothing special, but then she says maybe this could become his normal life too. After all, he's changed from how he used to be, so maybe he doesn't even need to stay an adventurer anymore. The second those words leave her mouth, she realizes she probably shouldn't have said that. She apologizes and immediately runs off in embarrassment. Istolfa stands there wondering if he really has changed. Originally, he only wanted to become an adventurer to make money and get stronger so he could escape the awful situation he was stuck in. So why is he chasing the dream of becoming a top-class adventurer now? Before he can think too deeply about it though, he suddenly hears Kay yelling and rushes toward the sound. He finds two adventurers harassing her, while sarcastically apologizing for ruining their date. They recognize Istolfa as the rookie everyone at the guild keeps talking about. Their logic is completely cooked. They think if more talented people join the guild, there will be fewer quests left for everyone else, so they want to solve the problem early. Actual loser behavior is Tolfa immediately realizes these guys are newbie hunters, but they threaten to hurt Kates if he tries anything. He hesitates for a second out of worry for her, and one of the guys instantly clocks him in the face. Meanwhile, the other guy tells his partner to hurry because the sound barrier spell he put up isn't perfect. Even after getting punched, Istolfa gets back up, manages to trip one of them, grabs Kay and starts running away with her. Unfortunately, the other dude is a mage, so he starts launching attacks at them while they're escaping. Right then, Istolfa desperately wishes he were stronger so he could actually protect Kay. More than anything, he wants power. Suddenly, the mage's spell disappears out of nowhere, leaving him shocked. Then Stella steps in. She noticed the suspicious barrier earlier and came to investigate. The second she realizes some random clown is bullying her former apprentice, she gets genuinely pissed. She immediately heals both Istolfa and Kaeun and tells them to rest for now. The mage starts panicking and screaming at her to stay back, flexing that he's silver rank and nobody around can rival his magical abilities. Stella literally folds this man with a single kick. She says the guy isn't even worth talking about. Anybody can become stronger if they train hard enough, so strength has no real limit. After checking Istolfa's injuries, she assures him that dumbass is never showing his face around here again, so they can leave while she cleans things up. As they walk away, Istolfa thanks her for saving them. Hearing Stolfa say there's no limit to strength lights a fire inside him. If he keeps working hard, maybe someday he really can become strong enough to protect people the same way Stella does. With that determination locked in, he tells Kay that he doesn't want a normal life after all because he wants to become a top-class adventurer. Kay understands, but she asks him one thing. She doesn't want him to become strong and lose the kind person he is now, because that side of him is what she likes the most. Hearing that, Istolfa promises her that he'll become truly strong. Later on, Stella reads a letter before walking over to the sleeping Istolfa. Watching him, she quietly thinks about how fast time moves because it looks like he'll be clearing the second floor soon. Honestly, she's convinced there's nothing this kid can't overcome, even on his own. The gang is going up against the Guardian of the Forests, and this thing is literally a giant living tree. Actual Elden Ring boss energy. Kyle tells the other two to back off for a second before dropping a massive flame blast that completely torches the monster into ashes. Just like that, the man-eater is finished, meaning they have officially conquered the second floor. Honestly, they've come insanely far since the first time they met. Back then, regular goblins had them fighting for their lives, and now they're out here smoking forest bosses like it's another Tuesday grind session. Even so, Istolfa says he still wants to become stronger. Hearing that, Kyle and Dorma notice how much he's changed lately, and point out that he's gotten way calmer compared to before. Still, now they can finally say goodbye to this depressing forest biome and pray the next floor isn't another dark, musty nightmare. Everyone starts getting hype, wondering what the next area will look like, and even Kyle admits it's probably better to stay optimistic. Meanwhile, Istolfa looks at the two of them and realizes he genuinely feels like he can go anywhere with this party. Bro is starting to believe the power of friendship might actually be cracked. Bro, fast forward only 3 months later, and the Adventurers Guild is already congratulating them for clearing the 5th floor. The staff hands over their rewards while praising Team Gladio, and even the other adventurers are impressed, saying they'll probably hit bronze class any day now. Kyle immediately dips out of the guild because apparently these people still act exactly the same no matter what happens. Some things never change. They're about to head back to the dungeon when Istolfa says he wants to report the good news to Stella first. Turns out, he doesn't even need to search for her, because Stella suddenly appears out of nowhere and immediately starts hugging and praising him for clearing the 5th floor so quickly. She proudly says she's happy as his teacher, while Kyle points out that she always spawns out of thin air like some overpowered event NPC. He asks if she had business at the guild, but Stella casually says she actually came for Istolfa before straight up kidnapping him on the spot. Kyle is stunned, but she disappears before he can even complain properly. This woman genuinely lives to annoy him. Stella drags Istolfa over to Fleet's shop because she thinks it's finally time for him to upgrade his gear. Plus, she wants to celebrate his progress with a present. Istolfa immediately tries to refuse because Bro still hasn't beaten the "I don't deserve nice things" allegations, but Stella pulls the ultimate trump card and hits him with the teacher's orders line. At that point, it's Raps Compleon. Fleet joins the conversation and explains that while short swords are great beginner weapons, they have limits. They're simple and reliable, but they lack finesse and versatility. As Istolfa keeps climbing floors, Fleet thinks he should start experimenting with stronger weapons instead of staying in his comfort zone forever. Istolfa worries he won't be able to handle something different, but Fleet reassures him that he's not a beginner anymore. No matter what weapon he chooses, he's already skilled enough to make it work. Since the self-esteem issue gets packed up immediately, Istolfa tells Fleet to bring out something strong and worthy of him. Fleet proudly starts flexing his weapon collection like a sneakerhead, showing off rare Jordans. Eventually, he points out a falchion that Istolfa is holding and says it's a really solid choice. The sword has a single-edged blade designed for chopping attacks, and depending on how it's used, it can even cut through armored enemies. Stella asks if it feels too heavy, but Istolfa says it actually feels surprisingly natural in his hands. Hearing that, Stella instantly buys it for him. Istolfa thanks her like the polite golden retriever boy he is, but Stella tells him the sword is just another tool to help him overcome the next floor. He should use it however he wants. She compares it to the coin she gave him before, explaining that everything he's achieved until now came from his own decisions. Because of that, no matter what path he chooses, she believes he'll eventually reach the goal he's aiming for. While all this wholesome mentor stuff is happening, Istolfa hears voices outside and discovers Kyle and Dorma waiting for him. The second they find out he got a new sword, they immediately decide to head into the dungeon to test it out, because these dudes genuinely cannot sit still for 5 minutes. Istolfa says goodbye to Stella, while Fleet and Stella both agree that the three of them really are a perfect party. The gang then enters the 6th floor, known as the Phantom City of Memories. The place looks weirdly similar to the city above, but at the same time it feels completely off. Every sign is written in some language they can't understand, and the atmosphere is low-key uncanny. Kyle, being the walking Wikipedia page of the group, explains that the writing belongs to an ancient language nobody uses anymore. Based on the architecture, he thinks this city might actually be a recreation of the ancient mercenary kingdom of Suradia, though he admits he can't be completely sure since that kingdom disappeared thousands of years ago. Though he does know is how the floor works. Apparently, to progress further, they need to find special keys hidden throughout the city, and somehow each individual person can uniquely recognize their own key. Nobody fully understands what that means, but it's the only clue available, so their only option is to start searching. They enter one of the houses, but while looking around, something suddenly attacks them. Istolfa instantly saves Dorma, while Kyle explains that the creature is called a phantom, one of the monsters native to this floor. The phantom screams that Istolfa is a thief before charging him. But honestly, this dude gets folded immediately because the monster itself isn't very strong. After defeating it, Kyle starts thinking out loud and realizes that if the phantom appeared inside this house, then the house probably used to belong to it when it was alive. They'll live with their seed as they continue exploring, they notice something disturbing. All the monsters on this floor are humanoid. They look like ordinary people who once lived and worked in these buildings and shops. Even though they're monsters now, traces of their old lives still remain everywhere. The houses still feel warm and lived in, almost like someone just finished cooking dinner there yesterday. It's creepy in the saddest way possible. Istolfa starts realizing what this might mean, and says that if the dungeon recreated an ancient city, then these phantoms may have once been real people. Kyle immediately cuts him off and tells him not to think too deeply about it. Right now, they're monsters, and the fact they leave behind magic stones proves that much. If they start getting emotional or distracted, they'll hesitate during fights, and hesitation in a dungeon is basically a death speedrun. So for now, they need to focus on finding the keys. They keep searching house after house until Dorma completely loses track of how many buildings they've checked. Unfortunately, things never go smoothly because every single house comes with another phantom fight attached to it. Kyle especially starts running low on stamina from constantly dealing with them. Then out of nowhere, the entire area suddenly goes dark. Nighttime arrives way too quickly. Kyle instantly realizes something is wrong and urgently tells the other two to hide. They try asking questions, but he immediately shushes them as they watch another adventurer get jumped by monsters outside. Kyle explains that nighttime is when the truly dangerous phantoms appear. These aren't regular townspeople anymore. These are the spirits of robbers, criminals, and other evil people, and they're way stronger than the daytime monsters. Walking around carelessly at night is basically asking to get packed up. The problem is they're too far from the exit to safely escape now. Since they can't stay exposed outside either, Istolfa suggests hiding inside a church nearby. The others agree, and the group rushes inside. Surprisingly, there don't seem to be any phantoms there, so they decide to spend the night and continue searching for keys in the morning. While they're still talking, a voice suddenly tells them to keep quiet because they're inside a church. The gang instantly goes on guard, but the mysterious person comments that it's pretty rude to greet another human like that. Istolfa quickly realizes the stranger is actually human, but before anyone can relax, the man casually takes down a lingering phantom hiding nearby. Bro moves insanely fast. After dealing with it, the newcomer wonders if he should introduce himself, though before that, he wants to hear their names first. The new guy immediately starts acting smug, and says that usually when you visit someone's home, you introduce yourself first before demanding other people's names. Bro really pulled the "Where are your manners" card inside a haunted church. Istolfa looks at him and realizes he's probably around their age and also an adventurer, so he politely introduces himself along with Kyle and Dorma. Kyle instantly scolds him for casually dropping all their personal info to some random sketchy dude they met 5 seconds ago. But Istolfa, being the human equivalent of sunshine and kindness, points out that the guy literally helped them earlier. Even the stranger laughs, saying it's funny how Istolfa introduced himself first even though he was the one asking all the questions. Turns out he was just trolling them a little. Then he smiles and introduces himself as Noetz. When they ask what he's doing in the church, Noetz casually says it's nothing special because adventurers praying in churches isn't exactly rare. He guesses they ran in here while escaping those violent nighttime phantoms, and Istolfa confirms they're planning to stay until morning. Neitz looks the group over for a second before bluntly saying that besides Estolfa, the other two don't really look impressive. Then this man goes full-ranked lobby toxicity and straight up says Kyle and Dorma don't look like they've worked out a single day in their lives. Kyle gets instantly offended, but Neitz keeps going. According to him, the only reason they made it this far is because Estolfa has been carrying the whole squad on his back. Bro looked at them one time and started dropping stat analysis like a sports commentator. He says he can't stand people who rely on others to drag them through everything. That comment leaves Kyle and Dorma completely speechless, but Estolfa immediately steps in front of them and tells Neitz he's completely wrong. He explains that there are tons of things he can't do that Kyle and Dorma can, and without them he never would have made it this far. There's nobody else in the dungeon he trusts more than those two. Dorma and Kyle genuinely get touched hearing that. Estolfa really does have that emotional support protagonist aura. Norma admits he misunderstood them, but then immediately says that doesn't mean he's apologizing because he doesn't bow his head to anyone. Kyle finds this dude unbelievably annoying and says they should just leave already, since he's feeling better now. Neitz reminds them they planned on staying until morning, but Kyle makes it very clear that he refuses to spend another minute around someone this irritating. That's when Neitz offers to help them. Since they're struggling with the 6th floor, he figures things would go easier with an extra person around. Kyle still doesn't trust him at all and asks for his real motive, but Neitz surprisingly answers honestly without dodging the question. He says he got interested in Estolfa the moment he saw him. Kyle is literally one sentence away from crashing out, but Neitz quickly explains he means because they use similar weapons and fighting styles. He thinks the two of them would get along well. Also, there's apparently something Neitz is searching for on this floor, and he can't obtain it by himself, so he wants to team up with them. The group discusses it for a bit and decides he probably isn't a bad person. Dorma especially says he doesn't feel like Neitz is lying at all. Still, they wonder what exactly this guy can do. Before anyone can ask further, Neitz casually walks to the front of the church where a priest phantom suddenly appears. The gang warns him to watch out, but this man stays completely relaxed and instantly kills the phantom with a single strike. One hit. That's it. The group completely freaks out, wondering how he just did that, while Neitz casually explains he used a technique called Deathblade. Apparently, all of his sword attacks can eliminate enemies in one hit. Actual anime nonsense. Estolfa is amazed because he didn't even notice Neitz activating anything at all. Neitz once again says he and Estolfa are very alike, so he's sure Estolfa could eventually learn the technique too someday. Estolfa immediately says that's impossible because he doesn't have mana, but Neitz reveals he can't use magic either. He says swords are the only thing he has. Sure, not being able to use magic is a weakness, but because of that weakness, he developed abilities that compensate for it. Basically, bro dumped all his stat points into swordsmanship and locked in. He even offers to teach Estolfa personally. Meanwhile, Dorma notices Kyle looking weirdly irritated and teases him for not seeming very happy that Estolfa and Neitz became besties in like 15 minutes. Kyle grumbles that he doesn't know anything about swords anyway. Blah till is low-key feeling left out but refuses to admit it. While they're talking, Kyle tells everyone to focus on planning their next move instead of bonding over weapon nerd stuff, but suddenly something starts approaching the church. Neitz actually looks excited and says more friends decided to join the party. He estimates there are about 5 or 6 enemies surrounding them. Sure enough, the church gets surrounded from all sides. Dorma sighs that he should have known robbers wouldn't care about the sanctity of a church while everyone immediately prepares for battle. Neitz fights like an absolute menace, but Estolfa perfectly covers his blind spots while supporting him. Dorma swings his heavy weapon around too, though one of the phantoms blocks his attack and almost counters him. Right before things go bad, Kyle saves him with a fireball spell. Kyle immediately rushes over asking if Dorma is okay, and after confirming his friend isn't dead, he notices Estolfa and Neitz already finished their side too. In the end, they manage to wipe out all the nighttime phantoms, although everyone agrees those monsters are on a completely different level compared to the daytime ones. Neitz doesn't miss the opportunity to clown on Kyle afterward, saying he looks like he's about to collapse from exhaustion. Kyle is fighting for his life while this man keeps talking trash mid-breathing session. Still, Dorma can't stop replaying Noitz's earlier words in his head. It looks like you only made it this far because Estolfa carried you. The thought genuinely starts eating at him. Compared to Estolfa and Kyle, he feels like he doesn't really bring much to the party. He doesn't have Kyle's magic or Istolfa's insane growth. If he keeps going like this, eventually he's just going to hold them back. Even now, Estolfa keeps getting stronger every single day, so if Dorma doesn't improve too, he'll eventually get left behind. While he's quietly spiraling, Neitz suddenly calls out to him and confirms that he's a priest. Neitz says he watched Dorma fight earlier and honestly thinks he moves really well. With those physical abilities, he believes there might actually be another class or job that suits Dorma better. Even Kyle admits he's never heard of a priest who fights with giant weapons before. Neitz then casually says Dorma is probably stronger than Kyle physically, which immediately starts another argument because apparently this guy physically cannot survive without provoking Kyle every 10 minutes. Since nowhere feels safe anymore, the group decides they should move somewhere else, but Neitz confidently says he can protect them if anything happens. Kyle instantly shuts that down because there's absolutely no way he trusts this dude enough to put his life in his hands yet. Right then, Dorma quietly raises his hand and asks if they can use the Orb of Return to head back to the surface first, because there's something he wants to try. There are some feelings Dorma hasn't really been able to put into words until now. The next morning, Istolfa meets him in the middle of the city and asks if he slept well. He notices Kyle isn't around yet, but Dorma explains that Kyle had something he wanted to investigate by himself. Meanwhile, Now it said he'd wait for them on the 6th floor, so hopefully he's doing fine. Honestly, with how cracked that guy is, they doubt anything could actually happen to him, but they still want to head back as soon as possible. Yaman. Then Istolfa remembers Dorma saying he wanted to try something. Dorma asks if he can come with him for a bit, and the two head over to Fleet's armory. Fleet isn't surprised to see them at all and casually says he already prepared everything exactly how Dorma requested last night. Istolfa asks if Dorma bought a new weapon or something, but Dorma just says he's planning to change and asks him to wait a little. After a short while, Dorma finally steps out wearing mithril woven gloves and boots, thanking Fleet for making them exactly the way he asked. Fleet brushes it off because Dorma paid for everything anyway, although even he looks confused why a priest suddenly seems ready to throw hands professionally. Dorma says he'll show them soon enough and asks if they can use Fleet's backlot for a test run. Dorma's. Once Fleet gives permission, they head outside, and Istolfa is shocked because he had no idea there was a huge training area behind the shop. Fleet casually explains it's meant for testing weapons, although using it costs extra because bro never misses a chance to secure the bag. Dorma's. That's when Dorma suddenly asks Istolfa for a duel. He explains that until now, he's always acted as the rear guard because he thought that role was what the party needed most. But deep down, he's constantly wondered if that was really the right choice for him. Still, thinking about what-ifs forever won't change anything. Istolfa immediately tells him he already sees him as a strong and reliable teammate, but Dorma thanks him and admits that hearing praise alone isn't enough anymore. He doesn't want to just support the party from the background, but he wants to become strong enough to truly protect everyone. Dorma reveals he learned a new skill before they entered the 6th floor, but at first he thought it was way too powerful for him to handle safely, so he avoided using it. Now though, he thinks maybe it was a sign from Nola Chanter all along. Then he activates his new ability, Fighter's Crest. The moment the skill activates, Istolfa is stunned because Dorma literally looks different now. Bro went from peaceful priest vibes to hidden boss phase 2. Dorma tells Istolfa to attack him if he really considers him a good teammate. Fleet tosses Istolfa a training sword, telling him it's specially made for sparring. Istolfa catches it and thanks him before facing Dorma seriously. Dorma he understands exactly what Dorma is trying to do here. Dorma wants to grow stronger, and as both his teammate and friend, it's Istolfa's responsibility to help him reach that goal. Dorma watches instantly. Dorma rushes him head-on, and even though Istolfa blocks the attack, he's shocked by how heavy and powerful the blow feels. Dorma charges again, forcing Istolfa several steps backward before knocking the sword clean out of his hands. Then suddenly Dorma disappears from his sight completely. Istolfa trips and crashes onto the ground because he literally cannot keep up with Dorma's movements at all. Dorma explains that Fighter's Crest lets him enhance his physical strength using mana. Even though he always had the stamina and determination, his body lacked raw muscle strength. Back then, just swinging a heavy weapon would make his arms go numb. Because of that weakness, he compensated using magic to support his fighting style. But now, with this skill boosting his body directly, he can fully unleash that strength. In simple terms, bro can now slam the ground hard enough to crack it open like an anime tank character. Till then, Dorma tells Istolfa to pick his sword back up because he can still keep fighting. Istolfa is honestly amazed. Dorma improves so fast it doesn't even feel real anymore. He agrees to continue the duel seriously this time because what Dorma achieved is something he never could have imagined before. After their intense sparring match finally ends, both of them are completely exhausted. Istolfa admits he's never fought like that before in his life, while Dorma quietly says he still needs even more training. Then he nervously asks if his new power actually seems strong. Istolfa immediately tells him he always thought Dorma was strong, but today he felt even stronger than ever before. That answer genuinely means everything to Dorma. Istolfa clearly trusts his strength and believes he can support the team properly, so now Dorma feels like he absolutely has to live up to that trust. The two decide to rest for the night before returning to the 6th floor tomorrow, since Notes is probably already getting impatient waiting for them. The next day, back on the 6th floor, Notes and Istolfa fight side by side against phantoms and completely destroy them. The monsters barely even have time to react before getting folded. Honestly, it's almost unfair since they're clearing enemies so fast, the group decides to hurry up and search for keys before more phantoms appear. They enter a bar to search around, although Kyle is already getting irritated because Notice is barely helping look for clues at all. Then suddenly Dorma calls everyone over because he found something. The gang rushes to him, only to realize that apparently only the person who discovers a key can actually see it. Weird dungeon mechanics are back at it again. Still, they finally found their first key. Then as they leave the building, Istolfa thanks Noetz for helping them, and even Kyle admits they probably wouldn't have found the first key without him around. Noetz casually shrugs it off and says he's not helping for Kyle's sake anyway. Kyle gets immediately annoyed again because apparently this man physically cannot accept compliments like a normal human being. Dorma comments that those two really don't get along at all, but Istolfa points out it was pretty much the same when he first met them too. Honestly, Kyle and Dorma still argue constantly even now. That's just the party dynamic at this point. While walking through the city, Kyle admits he still doesn't understand this dungeon. Recreating an entire ancient town just to make people search for hidden keys feels unbelievably excessive. The group says it almost seems like something only a god could do. The second they mention God, Notes suddenly curses at the idea. Everyone instantly freezes because Bro switched moods so fast it gave emotional whiplash. Notes angrily says recreating an entire dead city and bringing all its people back as monsters is disgusting. Reviving the dead like this doesn't feel like something a god should ever do. He questions whether the phantoms can even still be considered human anymore. Dorma gently reminds him that the phantoms are just monsters created by the dungeon. But Noitz admits that even if that's true, the fact they still look like people makes him hate this floor and the dungeon that created it. Before the mood can get even heavier, Noitz tells everyone to keep moving before night falls again. But right then, Kyle notices something around a nearby corner. When he checks it out, he finds the fresh dead bodies of adventurers lying there. The group immediately realizes something is wrong. The bodies are recent, but it's still daytime. So what killed them? Istolfa asks if the information Kyle bought mentioned anything dangerous like this, and Kyle suddenly realizes what it probably is. According to the old records, Saradia once had 8 legendary warriors who served as the kingdom's strongest fighters aside from the mercenary kings themselves. These warriors were so powerful that even trained military squads would get completely annihilated fighting them. The group starts wondering if those warriors might still exist somewhere on this floor. Notes, meanwhile, looks weirdly excited. He says that instead of waiting around to get ambushed later, they should actively hunt the warriors down first and face them while they still have the advantage. Then he grins at Istolfa and says he's about to show him a very interesting monster. Everyone is absolutely stunned that Noens wants to actively go hunt down the 8 warriors of Saradia, but the guy calmly explains that the moment the gang stepped into this area, they basically marked themselves as targets already. Those warriors are going to come after them eventually no matter what, so in his mind, they might as well run the fade first instead of waiting to get jumped later. Kyle instantly suggests they just leave the area completely, but Noens looks at him like he just said the dumbest thing imaginable, and asks if they seriously plan on running away every time they meet a strong enemy. If that's their mindset, then clearing this floor is basically copium and delusion at this point. But Kyle is not buying into Noens' motivational anime speech though. He points out that Noens hasn't even been helping search for the keys properly, which clearly means the guy doesn't actually care about clearing the dungeon at all. Istolfa tries to calm Kyle down before another argument starts, but surprisingly Noens admits the mage is right. He straight up says he has his own reasons for being here and never intended to interfere with the group's goals. The reason that answer somehow makes Kyle trust him even less. Kyle points out that Noens is obviously way stronger than the monsters on this floor already, so there's no logical reason for him to be teaming up with them in the first place. Noens is about to explain further when somebody literally crashes into the scene like a surprise boss encounter. Plus one of the 8 warriors suddenly appears, the Narcius of the Holy Realm, a swordsman whose skills are absolutely cracked beyond reason. Istolfa instantly gets ready to fight, but Noens steps forward and says he wants to handle this warrior himself. Istolfa tries to stop him, but Noens tells him to shut up and carefully watch his sword movements because this is basically going to be a live Deathblade tutorial. Apparently nobody until now has ever been able to copy Noens' ability, but for some reason he genuinely believes Istolfa has the potential to master it. Istolfa is still trying to process that statement while Noens is already clashing swords with Arceus. The fight instantly becomes so fast and insane that nobody can even properly see what's happening anymore. Even the others are struggling to keep up visually, but Noens still looks unimpressed while casually telling Istolfa to keep watching carefully. He explains that Istolfa is thinking too hard about technique and form. Instead, he needs to let instinct guide his movements naturally. Deathblade isn't about forcing perfect swordsmanship. It's about moving without letting reality limit your actions, using your blade as naturally and viciously as a beast using its fangs. Basically, Bro is telling him to stop overthinking and let the inner demon cook. Then Noens charges the warrior again, and even after getting threatened directly, this lunatic just gets even more hyped and swings harder. Dude fights like every battle personally offended him. At that moment, something finally clicks inside Istolfa's head. He suddenly realizes he understands how Noens moves. He excitedly tells the others that he finally sees it now and knows what he needs to do. Unfortunately, somebody else hears him too. Before anyone can react, another warrior attacks them out of nowhere. Istolfa tries blocking the hit, but the impact sends him flying straight into a pile of crates. Kyle immediately fires off a fireball spell, but it barely does anything. Switching into full nerd analysis mode, he explains they're facing Datan the Fortress. This warrior specializes in heavy combat, making him the absolute worst matchup possible for lightweight fighters like Istolfa. Bro basically cued into his hard counter. When Datan swings again, Istolfa barely manages to block the attack. Dorma instantly tries rushing in to help him, but Kyle suddenly stops him. Even then, Noens confidently says Istolfa can handle it himself. Kyle and Dorma immediately yell at Noens to help already, but Noens refuses. He says Istolfa needs to handle this with Deathblade on his own. Kyle completely loses it at that point, but Noens just starts cursing at them and tells them to stop panicking and actually watch what happens. Noens fully understands how dangerous this is, but despite that, he still believes in Istolfa completely. Then, with the most emotionless dead-eyed stare imaginable, he quietly says Istolfa better not disappoint him. It's apparently been an absolutely insane number of years since Noens started searching for someone worthy enough to inherit Deathblade. Bro has basically been on the world's longest recruitment arc. Out of everyone he's met, he believes Istolfa is the only one capable of truly mastering it because Istolfa constantly chases strength and never stops trying to improve himself. Noens admits he's never seen anybody this similar to him before, so now he's fully betting everything on Istolfa finally showing him the completed Deathblade. Unfortunately, things immediately go downhill when Istolfa gets slammed by Daton's brutal attack and crashes to the ground. Even though he was this close to understanding the technique completely, his body won't move anymore. The only thing repeating inside his mind is the desire to become stronger. Daton slowly walks forward, preparing the finishing blow. Dorma and Kyle instantly rush in to save him, but Noens just watches with disappointment in his eyes. He already knows the other two have basically zero chance of beating Daton head-on. So for the first time, he actually decides to step in himself for the sake of the companionship they built together. But then suddenly, his entire body shudders. It's like his lifelong wish is finally about to come true. Sure enough, Istolfa stands back up, only now, his eyes look completely different. Just like Noets, the light inside them is gone. Noets immediately starts yapping like an excited gremlin, pointing out that all of Istolfa's doubts and distractions disappeared. Right now, the only thing that matters to him is killing the enemy standing in front of him. Noet starts grinning like a complete maniac because Istolfa has finally become one with his inner beast. And then our boy straight up deletes Daton in a single strike. One hit, doll me packed up. Istolfa immediately snaps out of that weird mental state after defeating the warrior and looks confused as hell about what just happened. Meanwhile, Noens absolutely launches himself at him in excitement, happier than a kid getting a PS6 early. He starts congratulating Istolfa for finally learning Deathblade and squeezes him tightly while praising him for becoming so strong. Meanwhile, Istolfa stays humble as always and gives all the credit to Noens for teaching him everything up until now. Kyle finally reaches his limit watching the skinship and physically pulls the two apart while yelling at Noens for doing something so reckless in the first place. Noens apologizes for scaring them, but this psycho still insists his method wasn't wrong. Dorma admits he's still worried about Noets, while Kyle bluntly says the guy was obviously just using them to accomplish his own goals. Still, even Kyle can tell the aura and pressure they felt earlier wasn't normal at all, and he really hopes nothing crazier happens now, which is basically the biggest anime death flag sentence imaginable. Then suddenly, Istolfa notices the second key. Apparently Daton had been holding it this entire time. That means there's only one key left now. Kyle immediately gets hyped because he finally wants some action too, but literally 1 second later, all his excitement evaporates after realizing the last key was sitting in the exact place where they stopped earlier to rest. Bro got robbed of his protagonist moment instantly. Now the only thing left is finding the entrance to the 7th floor. Noens explains that the path forward is located inside the castle at the center of town. Since the group helped him achieve his objective, he offers to guide them there personally. On the way, Istolfa asks Noens to just continue traveling with them since he already accomplished what he wanted here anyway. That way he can move on to the 7th floor together with the party. Kyle instantly shuts that idea down, because apparently inviting random battle junkies who traumatized you into the party is not a good strategy. But Istolfa points out that thanks to all of Noeds' messing around, he managed to learn an entirely new ability. Dorma starts laughing at Istolfa's logic, while Noeds smiles and admits traveling together honestly does sound fun. Unfortunately, he says he can't leave yet because there's still one more thing he has to do here. Eventually, the party reaches the giant door leading to the 7th floor and uses all 3 keys to unlock it. Surprisingly, there's no guardian waiting for them. Kyle explains that unlike the previous floors, the 6th floor doesn't actually have a boss monster. The only requirement to clear it is finding all the keys. As the group prepares to head through the entrance, Istolfa says goodbye to Noeds, but then Noeds suddenly draws his sword. Everybody freezes. Istolfa is completely confused and asks why he suddenly wants to fight now when there's literally no reason to. Noeds calmly says he'll give him one, and then he summons the 8 warriors of Saradia. Dorma immediately realizes what's happening. The 8 warriors were the strongest mercenaries in the entire kingdom, and there was only one person they ever bowed to, their king. That's when the truth finally drops. Noens reveals that Noens was simply the name people called him when he was a child. His real name is Wodan, the first and last king of Saradia, a kingdom that was destroyed through the evil schemes of mages. And now if the party wants to reach the next floor, they have to defeat him. Noens finally introduces himself properly as the king of Saradia and tells Istolfa to draw his blade. Naturally, everybody is completely stunned because bro just dropped the biggest lore bomb imaginable. Seeing their reactions, Noens explains that the reason he's appearing in this younger form is because his real body was way too overpowered for this floor to handle. In the end, he's still just a monster created by the dungeon, and his role here is to kill challengers. Istolfa genuinely can't process that information because Noens has been helping them this entire time. Not only that, he literally taught him Deathblade. Even Kyle admits this doesn't make sense because Noens is nothing like the other phantoms they've encountered. Every phantom on this floor moved like empty NPCs following preset commands, but Noens clearly had his own goals and personality from the start. Noens agrees it's strange. Ever since he manifested on this floor, he's always had one clear purpose in mind, and now that he's finally reached this moment, he understands why he existed in the first place. The dungeon created him so he could pass Deathblade onto Istolfa. He couldn't allow his swordsmanship to disappear and be forgotten by time. Even then, Istolfa still doesn't understand why they have to fight now. Noens calmly explains that he's nothing more than a ghost from the past with no real reason to continue existing anymore. On top of that, he finally gets the chance to cross blades with someone capable of matching his skill. Back when he was alive, he never found anyone like Istolfa. So honestly, Istolfa should feel honored for being the chosen one. At that point, Istolfa finally understands what Noens truly wanted this whole time. This fight was always his final wish, so Istolfa decides he'll fulfill it. Noens warns him that he has absolutely no intention of losing, so Istolfa better stop holding back. This is no longer just a duel. It's become a battle between two Deathblades, and the winner will be decided in a single strike. The two rush toward each other. One clash. That's all it takes. Istolfa's sword shatters apart, and he staggers from the impact. Kyle and Dorma immediately panic and run toward him, thinking he lost, but then they realize something shocking. Noens is the one who falls over. Istolfa instantly rushes to his side, but even while dying, Noens still finds time to lecture him about breaking another sword. Bro really stayed in mentor mode until the very end. He reassures Istolfa that he's happy now, but Istolfa starts crying anyway because he wanted to keep learning from him and continue getting stronger together. Noens apologizes for leaving some things unfinished, but once again says he's completely satisfied with how things turned out. Then he notices the short sword hanging at Istolfa's waist and quietly tells him to show him how far that sword can go and all the places it will reach in the future. And just like that, Noens disappears. In his place remains a massive magic stone, way bigger and stronger than anything the party has ever seen before. Kyle remembers Noens' final words and decides they should take it with them. Then Dorma suggests using the stone to strengthen Istolfa's short sword. With everyone agreeing, he activates his magic. Suddenly, the sword starts glowing insanely bright, completely blinding the group for a moment. Once the light fades, they see the blue jewel from the magic stone fused directly into the weapon itself, almost like Noens is still watching over them through the sword. After everything that happened, the group decides to call it a day and return to the surface. Even though the experience hurt, it also brought the three of them closer together than ever before. Later on, Stella asks Istolfa about the 6th floor because she already knew it was completely different from the previous floors. Istolfa apologizes for breaking another sword yet again, but Stella just tells him he can use his weapon however he wants as long as he achieves something meaningful with it. Then she asks him if he finally reached the place he was aiming for. Istolfa thinks about everything that happened before, promising that he'll keep getting stronger. He wants to make every single person who helped him along this journey proud. Stella loves that answer and even jokes that she better be careful if she doesn't want him surpassing her someday. Finally, she leans in and asks him to tell her absolutely everything because she can already smell drama and tea brewing from a mile away. Stella is low-key the guild's biggest gossip collector. The next day, Dorma and Kyle come looking for Istolfa and ask if he's recovered enough to visit the guild and gather information about the 7th floor. Istolfa says he's ready to go, although he wants to stop by Fleet's shop first to repair his sword again. Before they can leave though, Stella suddenly stops them and says a letter arrived for all three of them. Apparently, the seal on it belongs to the royal palace. The group gets invited directly by the king himself. Stella explains that the way they defeated the forest watchman and obtained the robe ended up being valued extremely highly, so their achievements were reported all the way to the palace. Now the king personally wants to meet this promising young party face to face. Dharma immediately points out that plenty of adventurer parties defeat rare monsters all the time, so why exactly is the king suddenly interested in them specifically? Looks like Mr. Prince already senses there's something suspicious cooking behind the scenes. Lemel Fleet takes one look at the sword and instantly starts crashing out, yelling at Istolfa for somehow managing to destroy every single sword he touches. Bro really has negative weapon durability at this point. Then he notices the short sword with King's magic stone stuck inside it. King gets curious too, but Fleet immediately hits her with the "don't touch that" treatment. Turns out the weapon is now a full-on magic eater, sucking the mana out of anyone who touches it like some cursed Wi-Fi vampire. Istolfa low-key freezes up and tells Fleet nothing has happened to him so far. Fleet explains that Istolfa literally has 0 mana to begin with, so the sword is actually perfect for him even though it's basically a death trap for normal people. Hearing that makes Istolfa think about Noens again, and our boy starts feeling emotional all over again. Fleet casually asks what their plans are next, and the second Istolfa mentions they got invited by the king, Fleet almost short-circuits. He immediately starts shoving him out the shop, telling him to stop wasting time. Istolfa says goodbye while Fleet secretly feels proud that the little street rat he used to know is now heading off to meet the king himself. Honestly, bro is having a proud dad moment. Istolfa meets up with the rest of the squad and tells them he'll explain the short sword situation later. Stella tells everyone there's already a carriage waiting for them, and the trip to the capital will take around 2 or 3 days. She's also tagging along since she's part of the party too. A man politely greets Stella and comments about her party being summoned to the palace. Stella instantly tells him to stop being nosy, making the poor guy fold immediately as he rushes to escort them properly. Istolfa is honestly impressed by how much aura Stella has, but Kyle explains that the royal family keeps a close eye on her because she's a light elf. Apparently there isn't a single kingdom out there that wouldn't want someone like her on their side. Dorma also points out that the royal family is probably only interested in the party because of Stella, and Kyle agrees with him. Dorma the trip, Kyle starts acting kinda weird, so Istolfa asks what's up with him. Kyle brushes it off, but Istolfa reminds him that they're a team now, which actually catches Kyle off guard for a second. Dorma tries to lighten the mood by joking that Kyle's probably nervous because he's about to meet the king while having the world's biggest mouth. Kyle finally cracks a smile and admits he does feel out of place, but says nothing is going to change the way he acts. The others keep poking him for more info, but Kyle just says they'll understand once they arrive. Bro is being mad mysterious for no reason. When they finally reach the castle, Istolfa's jaw practically hits the floor after seeing how gigantic the palace is. He says he's never seen a building this huge before, but Kyle reminds him they literally saw a castle on the 6th floor of the dungeon already. Istolfa really got hit with the bro we've been through this reminder. A guard comes to greet them and tells them to follow him to the throne room. The whole squad gets escorted inside and everything looks ridiculously flashy and expensive, like rich people really cannot chill for 1 second. Stella suddenly disappears, supposedly going for a walk, so the others decide to head into the throne room without her. Stella walks inside and comes face to face with the king himself. The king greets them politely, introduces himself, and says he's heard a lot about them, and he wanted to meet such promising adventurers personally. Kyle instantly calls Cap right to his face and reveals that the king has been spying on them the whole time because the king is actually his father. The king casually greets his son, while Istolfa stands there completely lost. Then Kyle casually drops the nuclear reveal that he's the 4th prince of Filard. Yeah, bro was royalty this whole time and nobody knew. The king looks surprised that Kyle even accepted the invitation, since he hates the royal family. Kyle points out that it felt less like an invitation and more like a forced summon, so he didn't really have much choice. He asks why they were called here, but the king stays quiet and instead tells them to follow him somewhere more comfortable to sit and talk. So after everyone sits down, the king tells them to relax and just think of him as Kyle's father. He asks about Kyle's training, but Kyle immediately points out that the king already knows everything because of all the scouts following them around. Even so, the king praises him for defeating the forest watchman. Kyle quickly says he didn't beat the monster alone and couldn't have done it without his friends. The others notice he's blushing and immediately start clowning him for it because bro really got hit with the power of friendship speech. But the king finally turns his attention toward Istolfa and Dorma. He says he wants to support his son's party, however he can, and offers them money and equipment, but both of them refuse immediately, saying they don't want special treatment just because they're friends with Kyle. They became friends with him because he's Kyle, not because he's a prince. The only thing they want from the king is for Kyle to keep hanging out with them. That answer honestly catches the king off guard, and he praises Kyle for finding such genuine friends. After that, the king lets everyone rest and sends them to their rooms. Kyle is relaxing in his room later when Dorma shows up to check out his massive collection of books. Dorma admits Kyle always gave off noble vibes anyway, and even jokingly calls him Your Highness. Kyle immediately warns him that using titles like that could ruin their friendship, but Dorma fires back by saying hiding stuff from your boys can ruin friendships too. Fair point, honestly. When Dorma asks why Kyle still seems upset, Kyle admits he's worried because his father never cared about him before, but now suddenly he's acting like some wholesome family man out of nowhere. Dorma thinks that sounds like a good thing, but Kyle still feels suspicious about why they were invited to the palace in the first place. Dorma, a maid suddenly arrives with tea, so both of them grab a cup. The second Kyle tastes it, his instincts start screaming. He urgently tells Dorma not to drink because the tea is poisoned. Kyle immediately looks around for the maid, but she's already disappeared. At that moment, he realizes someone inside the palace is trying to kill them. Then his brain instantly jumps to Istolfa, because there is absolutely no way that innocent dude isn't in danger right now. Kyle bursts into Istolfa's room looking stressed out of his mind, leaving Istolfa confused as hell. Bro is just standing there like a lost duck while Kyle instantly notices the tea in his hand and urgently asks if he drank any of it. Istolfa casually admits he already drank some and even complains that the tea tasted weird. A doctor checks it and immediately confirms the tea was poisoned, and not just a little either. This stuff is strong enough to straight up kill someone. The crazy part is that Istolfa feels completely fine. The doctor explains that his body has an insanely high resistance to poison now, probably because the dungeon boosted his physical abilities. Istolfa also figures that since he can't use magic at all, his body probably got buffed instead to make up for it. Bro really got the all stats into physical resistance build. Dorma is relieved his boy is okay, but now he wants smoke with whoever tried to poison them. Istolfa suggests tracking down the maid who served the tea, but Kyle points out that changing appearances with magic is easy, so finding her won't be simple. The doctor tells them they should report everything to the king so security can be tightened, but Kyle wants absolutely nothing to do with this palace anymore. Bro is already mentally packing his bags. He immediately heads off to look for Stella while the others chase after him, reminding him that he finally came home after all this time and should at least talk to his father properly. Kyle stays quiet the whole time, clearly tweaking internally. Then out of nowhere, guards suddenly start dropping from above like NPCs after a boss fight. Everyone panics, wondering if the castle is under attack, but it turns out Stella is out there absolutely farming a bunch of dudes by herself. She casually says she's still annoyed with them while beating them empty-handed. The guards desperately try convincing her to support their lord in the battle for the throne, promising rewards and status once he becomes king. But Stella instantly folds the guy mid-speech. Bro got rejected and knocked out in the same combo. She finally notices the others staring at her in shock after she soloed all those guards with no weapon. Istolfa explains that a bunch of rookie clowns tried pressuring her into joining their faction in the succession war. She already told everyone she left the capital because the whole place disgusts her. Kyle says they're leaving immediately, which leads them to explain the poisoning situation to her. Kyle says they already did what they came here to do, so there's no reason to stay in this palace any longer. But Stolfa immediately tells him leaving now is actually the worst idea possible. Suddenly, all those guards trying to recruit her start making sense. The reason they were so desperate is because Kyle himself is technically part of the royal succession too. Kyle is completely thrown off and argues that this has nothing to do with him, but Stella tells him not everyone else sees it that way. People are paying attention to him now because he came back after becoming a successful adventurer, basically pulling off the world's biggest return arc. Because of that, some people want him gone before he becomes a problem. Kyle argues his magic isn't even strong enough to matter, and he has zero supporters in the palace, so targeting him makes no sense. But Stella asks him what would happen if someone in the castle discovered a way to make up for his weak magic. Suddenly things would change real fast because Kyle would instantly become one of the strongest candidates for the throne. Istolfa says even if they escape the palace, assassins would keep chasing him anyway, and as a royal, Kyle should understand that better than anyone. But Kyle finally realizes he completely overlooked all of this and apologizes to the party for dragging them into such a dangerous mess. Dorma and Istolfa immediately tell him to stop worrying about them and honestly start wondering what happened to the usual blunt, arrogant Kyle. Istolfa reminds him that he was the one who said they're a team that relies on each other. That means if Kyle is in trouble, they'll deal with it together. Bro really hit him with the friendship speech DLC again. That means they remind him they still have to conquer the rest of the dungeon together anyway, so there's no way they're backing out now. Kyle remembers his father saying he found good friends, and for once he genuinely agrees. He thanks them and says he's counting on them from here on out. Later that night, Kyle tells everyone to get some rest, but instead of relaxing, he suddenly orders Istolfa to study etiquette because they'll have to deal with other royals while investigating the conspiracy. Bro really assigned homework in the middle of an assassination plot. Even Dorma backs him up, saying proper manners actually matter in the long run. Dorma spots a book covering the topic and hands it to Istolfa, but the book turns out to be about Hess's mercenary kingdom instead. Even Kyle recognizes it immediately and says it's basically a children's fairy tale. The story talks about a handsome boy blessed with insane sword talent and a strong sense of justice. He marries the woman he loves and creates a mercenary kingdom dedicated to protecting justice. Istolfa cannot believe this legendary Giga Chad is somehow the same notes they met, and honestly, Dorma can't picture it either. Kyle explains the story is based on legends and secondhand accounts because nobody from that era is still alive to confirm what really happened. Dorma Stella lets out the biggest bored sigh imaginable and decides to drag Istolfa outside for a walk. Kyle tries stopping them, but Stella instantly shuts him down by saying he'll never understand women if he keeps acting like this. Bro gets emotionally comboed and says nothing after that. Once they leave, Dorma casually comments that Stella and Istolfa are basically engaged already, while Kyle just sits there completely unable to process her logic. While walking around, Stella explains that elves live so long that old human history feels recent to them, like remembering something from last week instead of centuries ago. That naturally includes the story of the mercenary kingdom, so she asks Istolfa if he wants to hear the real version. She tells him about Notes, a boy born without even knowing his father. He had nothing to his name but dreamed bigger than anyone else. He eventually joined a group of mercenaries doing odd jobs and slowly stood out from the crowd. Over time, he gathered people who shared his ideals and eventually built his own mercenary kingdom. But because of where he came from, the elite mages of that era started hating him badly. They couldn't stand the fact that someone they considered beneath them was leading people better than they ever could, so they came up with a horrifying plan. They used fire magic to trigger the volcano near Saradia and caused a massive eruption that swallowed the entire kingdom whole, erasing Saradia from history itself. Istolfa is horrified hearing this, but Stella tells him there will always be people who hate talent and success, just like the people targeting Kyle now. She explains that she brought Istolfa to the palace because she wanted him to see what this side of the world really looks like. According to her, the palace itself is basically a museum of evil. The newbie hunter who attacked Istolfa before honestly looks like a decent guy compared to the people here. That is how rotten this place is. Istolfa quietly admits the palace is terrifying, and Stella warns him to keep his eyes open from now on so he doesn't get killed by the people targeting him. At that moment, Istolfa finally understands what she's trying to teach him. Neither of them realize someone nearby has been secretly listening to their entire conversation. Istolfa suddenly gets that somebody's lurking feeling and starts looking around, telling Stella that someone was straight up watching them. The party keeps eating together, and while Dorma and Istolfa are basically ascending from how good the food tastes, Kyle just shrugs and says it's pretty normal. Dorma instantly clowns him, saying that just proves Kyle's a prince who's never touched grass outside the palace, but Kyle tells him to look him dead in the eyes and repeat that. Istolfa is still low-key tweaking about the poison situation, although Kyle assures him there's no shot anyone sneaking in here with security this stacked, and if somebody did poison the tea, it would have to be one of these two goofballs sitting with him. Even then, Dorma says they still shouldn't drop their guard because people can pull sneaky attacks in other ways too. Kyle decides he needs to figure out the current vibe of the palace since a ton changed while he was gone. Dorma and Istolfa suggest talking to guards and maids, but Kyle instantly shuts that down because if those professional gossip farmers actually knew anything useful, Stella wouldn't have gotten attacked in the first place. The only people who can spill info about the royal family are royals themselves, so they need to find someone with royal blood willing to help. Dorma suggests somebody outside the faction drama, but Kyle can't even think of a single person like that. Right then, some lady tells them to move because they're literally blocking the hallway like NPCs. Then she casually calls Kyle her brother and asks if he finally decided to come back to the palace. Everybody freezes and Kyle explains that the girl is Brigitte, the fourth princess of Filard and his younger half-sister. Istolfa tries greeting her politely, but she immediately cooks him by calling him a filthy commoner. She even starts roasting Kyle for dragging back a pair of filthy commoners and tells him to start acting like a prince already. Kyle fires back and tells her to act like a princess instead of being so arrogant all the time. Just when Kyle's about to leave, Brigitte casually drops, asking why they look so tense and if someone poisoned their tea or something. The trio instantly locks in because there's no way she says that without knowing something. Istolfa suddenly remembers seeing her from behind the previous night before she dipped before he could say anything. At first he thought she was just checking the situation, but now bro's realizing there's definitely more going on. Dorma tells Kyle there's something seriously sus about his sister. Kyle gets what he means, but explains that even though Brigitte is royalty, her status is so low she's barely considered part of the succession race. She has zero reason to target him. Dorma thinks maybe she just doesn't want Kyle becoming king, but Kyle doubts she hates him enough to straight up delete him from existence. Still, Dorma warns him to stay careful. A maid suddenly walks in asking for a brown-haired adventurer. Apparently, Princess Brigitte wants to speak with him alone. Kyle is caught off guard, but Istolfa decides to go meet her anyway. The others instantly protest because this whole setup screams bad decision speedrun, but Istolfa says he wants to hear her motives directly. When he worries about leaving Kyle alone, Stella assures him she'll keep watch and tells him to judge Brigitte for himself before deciding what to do. Istolfa gets fired up and follows the maid while Kyle glares at Stella. Of course, Stella refuses to admit she's interested in palace politics and claims she's just turning this into a training exercise for Istolfa. Kyle thinks only Stella could turn royal family drama into homework. Istolfa stands in front of the princess, and Brigitte immediately calls him a filthy commoner again like it's literally part of her daily routine. When he introduces himself, she tells him to stop yapping and sit down already. He asks what she wants to discuss, and Brigitte casually mentions that he was with the light elf last night. Istolfa instantly calls her out for spying on them, but she scolds him for being rude instead. Absolute royalty behavior. But, after coughing dramatically for effect, she explains that she actually wants to talk about the mercenary king. Istolfa is surprised she means no Ikis, but Brigitte doubles down on him for casually using the mercenary king's childhood nickname like they're gaming buddies. Istolfa explains that they are friends and tells her everything that happened in the dungeon. Brigitte is genuinely impressed hearing the story and asks about the sword containing Notes' magic stone. She already knows the weapon is a mana eater, and once Istolfa confirms it, she says there's no way that's the full story. In her opinion, the sword definitely has hidden abilities waiting to get unlocked because ain't no way it's just some regular mana-eating blade. Istolfa finally realizes the tension between them was mostly just a misunderstanding. He tells her to drink her tea, but Brigitte casually points out there's poison in it. Istolfa nearly blue screens hearing that, while Brigitte calmly uses her ring to analyze the tea and confirms the poison dose is lethal. Turns out she's an alchemist, so identifying poisons is baby mode for her. She even casually mentions that her enemies never stop trying anyway. Istolfa is shocked somebody's trying to pack her up too and asks if she ever investigated who's behind it. Brigitte says that would only ease her anxiety for a little while because if she moves recklessly, she'll just attract more attention to herself. According to her, the only way to survive in this palace is knowing your place and acting accordingly. Istolfa explains they're already hunting for the culprit and suggests teaming up if the assassination attempts are connected. But Brigitte refuses at first because she doesn't want to throw herself into even more danger when she has no allies to rely on. Istolfa remembers Stella telling him to decide for himself, so he tells Brigitte she can rely on him for protection. She's surprised because he's Kyle's friend and assumes he'd rather stay with him. However, Istolfa explains that Dorma and Stella can handle protecting Kyle, while he's actually perfect for guarding her because poison barely affects him anymore. Plus, his Mana Eater sword would be clutch if the enemy turns out to be a magic user. Brigitte thinks it over for a moment before finally accepting the deal. She tells him to make himself useful because it's up to him whether her story ends up as some tragic royal history lore or a legendary heroic tale. Basically, she's putting her whole life in his hands now. Istolfa stares at her for a second before saying she kinda reminds him of Kyle. Brigitte instantly rejects that comparison and tells him to hurry up already because they're going to meet the culprit. Yui, just as they're about to leave, Brigitte hands Istolfa his sword back. He immediately wonders if it's even okay to walk around the palace strapped like that, but Brigitte reminds him they're literally about to walk straight into enemy territory, so showing up unprepared would be beyond stupid. As they head out, she instantly snaps at him for not walking through the doors first, and tells him he's actually terrible at this whole bodyguard thing. Bro is getting employee evaluations in real time. While they walk, Istolfa asks who she thinks the culprit is. Brigitte explains that she has her suspicions and believes it's someone higher in the succession line than both her and Kyle. Apparently there were originally 4 people competing hard for the throne, but now all of them except one mysteriously disappeared. She admits she can't fully prove the remaining person is behind everything, but the current setup leaves that person completely uncontested. According to her, the culprit is Prince Joseph, second in line for the throne and a certified snake. She says a coward like him would absolutely poison his own siblings just to climb higher. Right as she says that, Joseph suddenly appears out of nowhere like the final boss hearing his name mentioned. He says she's being pretty rude and claims he's been so worried about their missing siblings too. Istolfa looks at Joseph, but Joseph immediately starts acting disgusted and questions why there's a peasant wandering around the palace. Istolfa introduces himself, but Joseph cuts him off because bro does not care. Brigitte explains that Istolfa is her bodyguard, though Joseph instantly laughs at her and tells her to raise her standards because this lineup is not it. Then Joseph flexes his own bodyguard, Galahad, a gold-rank adventurer who instantly radiates, "Yeah, this guy folds people for a living" energy. The moment Joseph gives the order, Galahad pulls his sword on Istolfa without hesitation. Joseph straight up says he wants the commoner punished for entering the palace. Brigitte tries stopping him, but Joseph just says he'll do whatever he wants, which is exactly how he climbed this far already. Istolfa instantly realizes Joseph is the type who abuses power and violence to bully everybody around him. Istolfa glares at him, which somehow offends Joseph enough for him to order Galahad to finish the job. Luckily, Kyle arrives right on time and stops everything before Istolfa gets packed up in the hallway. Kyle reminds Joseph that Istolfa was personally invited by the king himself and asks if Joseph really wants to explain attacking the king's guest. Then Joseph watches the siblings standing together and immediately starts grinding his teeth like he just lost ranked points. As he turns to leave, Joseph threatens Brigitte and says he's about to inspect her little laboratory because he suspects she's storing dangerous chemicals. Brigitte argues that she already got official approval for everything in there, but Joseph says if she wants to oppose him, she'll have to settle it through a duel. After he leaves, Kyle sighs and says Joseph is somehow still just as awful as ever, which honestly feels impressive at this point. Meanwhile, Stella and Dorma wait outside while the others continue discussing things inside the room. When Istolfa asks what Kyle found out, Kyle explains he investigated and confirmed Joseph is most likely behind everything. Still, he can't believe Joseph would target Brigitte too. Brigitte points out that things only got worse after Kyle came back and jokingly blames him for bringing chaos with him. Kyle acts offended, although he explains the only thing they really have in common is being close in age and both having zero interest in taking the throne. Then he points out Joseph targeted Brigitte specifically and asks if there's some reason for it. Brigitte says she doesn't know, although she suddenly goes quiet like she just connected some dots in her head and absolutely did not like the answer she got. Istolfa asks about the duel, so Kyle explains it's a traditional royal method for settling disputes. Basically, the royals make their bodyguards throw hands for them, and the winner gets their way. Honestly, palace politics really said settle this in the arena, bro. When Istolfa asks why Joseph wants the lab so badly, Kyle guesses Joseph is trying to weaken Brigitte's influence to make sure she can't interfere with his plans. Kyle also suspects she's hiding something important, but Brigitte stays silent and visibly nervous. Istolfa gently tells her the lab clearly means a lot to her. That finally gets through to her, and she explains that the laboratory originally belonged to her mother. Her mother was an incredible alchemist who created medicines and tools that helped the entire country, and before she died, she left the lab to Brigitte. To Brigitte, that place is irreplaceable. It's not just a room full of chemicals and books, it's basically the last connection she has to her mother. She says protecting the lab is her responsibility now. Hearing that, Istolfa decides on the spot that he's going to protect it by accepting the duel. Brigitte immediately doubts him because Galahad is built different and already nearly smoked him earlier. Istolfa admits the guy is insanely strong but says he already has an idea for how to fight him this time. He explains he got caught off guard before, but now he understands the situation better. More than anything, Istolfa says he hates how Joseph uses violence to force his way through everything, so he wants to help Brigitte protect what matters most to her. Brigitte thinks it over for a while before finally admitting she appreciates it. While outside the room, Stella suddenly hears the footsteps of a massive rat nearby. Dorma instantly suspects an assassin and wants to warn everyone immediately, but Stella casually tells him to leave it alone for now because she's more interested in seeing how Brigitte handles herself first. Stella really treats every dangerous situation like it's an advanced placement exam. Brigitte sits alone in her room, overthinking so hard she's practically fighting demons internally. After a long pause, she finally opens a hidden compartment and pulls out a mysterious box like she's about to start the forbidden side quest. Meanwhile, Istolfa is in his room stressing over the duel because Brigitte's future is literally riding on his shoulders now. Then he hears a knock at the door and opens it to find Brigitte standing there. Once they sit down, he asks if everything's all right. She reminds him that he promised to protect her and asks if he's really sure he won't let her down. Istolfa responds with absolute confidence, no hesitation whatsoever, so Brigitte finally decides to trust him. She hands him the box and says this thing is the real reason behind all the chaos happening right now. Istolfa opens the box and finds a massive mana stone inside. Brigitte explains that it looks similar to one, but it's actually something called a fragment, basically a man-made magic stone. Long ago, these things supposedly gave their users an insane amount of mana, and the one sitting in front of him only exists because she somehow created it herself. She found ancient records about it hidden inside a library book. Apparently, these fragments were considered way too dangerous for humanity to control, so the knowledge of making them got sealed away and secretly passed down through alchemist bloodlines only. The moment Brigitte read about them, she became obsessed with trying to make one herself. She says creating this fragment was basically a miracle, and there's no way she could replicate it again. The problem is that now that it exists, she can't just throw it away either. Istolfa wonders if somebody like him could finally use magic with it, but Brigitte shuts that idea down immediately. She explains it by comparing magic to pouring water into a cup. If somebody doesn't even have a cup to begin with, then no amount of water matters. In other words, Istolfa's body simply can't process mana at all. However, for people who do have the ability to use magic, the fragment can basically provide infinite mana. Hearing that instantly reminds Istolfa of what Stella once said about Kyle's weakness, so he brings up the idea of giving it to him. Brigitte confirms that if Kyle used the fragment, he'd gain a completely ridiculous amount of mana and erase the biggest flaw holding him back. Suddenly, everything clicks into place. Joseph probably found out about the fragment and assumed Brigitte planned to hand it over to Kyle, which would instantly make him terrifyingly powerful. That's why Brigitte wants Istolfa to hold onto it for now. Joseph doesn't know where the fragment actually is yet, so it's safer if she stops carrying it herself. Istolfa suggests explaining everything to the king and asking for help, but the moment he says that, Brigitte visibly stiffens up. She's about to explain why when somebody knocks at the door and says Kyle is looking for Istolfa. Istolfa opens the door, only to immediately get attacked by a masked man waiting outside. Bro really said delivery for you and pulled out murder instead. Istolfa dodges and stumbles back while the assassin pushes into the room demanding the fragment. At this point, it's painfully obvious Joseph hired someone to do the dirty work. The assassin calmly explains that he already placed a barrier around the room, meaning nobody can come save them. Istolfa tells Brigitte to stay back while blocking another attack, but the assassin overpowers him and slams him against the wall. Istolfa realizes the guy's strategy too late, and before he can react properly, the assassin slices him with ninja blades that leave him unable to walk. The assassin then turns toward Brigitte and starts talking like a whole anime villain monologue DLC pack. He says after years of oppression, this is the moment he's been waiting for. Then he actually acts sympathetic toward her before deciding to kill her anyway. Certified crash-out behavior. Istolfa grits his teeth because there's no way he's letting her die here. Suddenly, his sword starts moving by itself and launches straight toward the assassin, stabbing through the guy's arm out of nowhere. Even the sword itself said, "Nah, we not losing this one." Taking advantage of the opening, Istolfa lands a punch so hard it completely knocks the assassin unconscious. He's shocked that the sword moved on its own, although he immediately checks on Brigitte first to make sure she's safe. Right then, Dorma rushes into the room because he sensed the barrier. Turns out the barrier disappeared the moment the caster got folded. Dorma is stunned that somebody would go as far as hiring assassins against their own family, and wonders what the king would even think about all this. Brigitte drops the bombshell that the king already knows everything and simply allows it to happen because, to him, the only thing that matters is finding a worthy heir for the throne. According to her, failures don't have a place in the royal family. The king views them less as his children and more like chess pieces for the kingdom. She reveals that even when the princes started killing each other and disappearing, the king never stepped in. That's why she's never trusted anyone and has always been completely alone. Istolfa looks at her and immediately says the king isn't like that at all. Brigitte tries arguing back, but Istolfa says even though he only met the king once, there's no way someone who truly didn't care about his children would smile the way he did. He admits he doesn't know all the history behind the family drama, but he's certain the king genuinely cares about both Kyle and Brigitte. He wants her to believe that too. Istolfa also promises that he's fully on her side now. Brigitte instantly points out that he's Kyle's friend first, but Istolfa admits that while Kyle is important to him, right now he's standing here as her champion. He swears he won't let anything happen to her, and promises he'll fight for her sake. Honestly, bro, hit the full night arc right there. Elsewhere, Dorma and Kyle discuss the fragment while wondering where Stella disappeared to, especially after she promised to stay near Kyle. Dorma notices Kyle changed outfits, and Kyle explains he has to wear proper royal clothes for formal ceremonies. Then Istolfa walks in looking genuinely cool as hell, fully dripped out like an actual knight now. Dorma gets insanely hyped seeing him, though Kyle instantly complains that nobody reacted this hard to his outfit upgrade. Bro is fighting for aura points. Brigitte asks Istolfa if he's really planning to use the same sword after it literally started moving on its own last night. Istolfa doesn't see the issue because the blade feels right in his hands. Right then a maid arrives to summon them, which becomes their signal to head toward the final showdown. Istolfa takes Brogitte's hand and together they walk off toward the finale like the last cutscene before the boss fight. Istolfa steps into the arena and immediately gets hit with the Yui this place is actually insane realization, because he never expected a full-on coliseum to exist inside the castle. Kyle explains that this arena is normally only used for the most important ceremonies, and only members of the royal family plus high-ranking government people are even allowed inside. Dorma instantly starts worrying about whether he's even supposed to be there, but Kyle assures him he's fine since he's officially a guest of the royal family now. Bro got VIP access unlocked. Joseph eventually walks over looking smug as ever, acting surprised that Brigitte even survived long enough to make it here. Brigitte immediately calls him out and says she already knows he's behind the assassination attempts and the disappearances of everyone else in the succession race. Joseph doesn't even bother denying it anymore because this man genuinely thinks he's untouchable. He casually says that even the king refuses to interfere in royal matters like this. According to him, Brigitte can't do anything now except become another stepping stone on his glorious path to the throne. Certified Villain Speech DLC. Brigitte fires back and says she'll never hand over the fragment or let him continue hurting people anymore. Joseph just laughs though, asking her to struggle all she wants because there's absolutely no universe where some random kid beats Galahad. The disrespect is crazy. Shintan, as the duel preparations begin, Brigitte quietly calls Istolfa over and asks him to kneel in front of her. She performs a small ritual and explains it's basically a prayer for good luck before battle. Since she can't actually use magic herself, the ritual is mostly symbolic. Then she gets unusually honest and admits that at first she only saw Istolfa as a useful tool, partly because of her rivalry with Kyle. But now she genuinely means it when she says she's entrusting her life to him. Istolfa promises he'll do everything he can because the last thing he wants is to let her down. Honestly, bro is locked in beyond human levels now. The king then steps forward holding a glowing magic orb and officially announces the duel. He explains that the fight only ends when one champion admits defeat and the other accepts it. With that royal referee speech finished, the match finally starts. Galahad immediately takes the first move, coating his sword in flames. Everybody watching loses it because the blade he's carrying is supposedly forged by a literal fire god. Some people even believe the fire god itself transformed into the sword. Nobody expected some hired mercenary to casually walk around with a legendary weapon like that. The moment Galahad attacks, Istolfa instantly realizes this guy is terrifyingly fast. He can barely even track his movements and knows he has to stay focused because one mistake could end the entire match. Kyle warns everyone about the sword, but even he didn't expect the blade itself to use fire magic too. Everybody thinks Istolfa is cooked, but right before the flames hit him, his Mana Eater sword absorbs the fire completely. Joseph gets confused watching the flames vanish, while Kyle immediately gets hyped because the Mana Eater perfectly counters magic attacks. For a second, it actually feels like they might have a chance. Unfortunately, Galahad calmly says the sword's abilities don't matter, and honestly, bro starts proving it immediately. The Mana Eater reaches its limit and can't absorb anymore while Galahad's pure physical attacks start overpowering Istolfa anyway. Turns out gold-rank adventurers are built like absolute monsters even without magic. While fighting, Istolfa asks Galahad why he's siding with someone like Joseph, a guy willing to kill his own siblings for power. Galahad just shrugs and says it doesn't matter whether somebody is royal or commoner, because stepping on other people to rise higher is simply how life works. Apparently, he's fighting for his own ambitions too. He wants the fragment because he believes Joseph will reward him with its power once he claims the throne. According to Galahad, he and Joseph are simply using each other to achieve their goals, and there's nothing wrong with the strong taking what they deserve from the weak. But Istolfa immediately rejects that mindset, saying strength gained by exploiting weaker people isn't real strength at all. That statement instantly pisses Galahad off. Galahad says Istolfa only gets to talk like that because he's protected by Stella and backed by royal support. In his eyes, Istolfa's entire existence depends on the strength of other people. Meanwhile, Galahad claims he earned everything himself with his own two hands, which makes them completely different. He even admits he got excited when he heard Istolfa was Stella's student, but now he's just disappointed. Then this man starts disrespecting the sword too. calling it a pathetic dungeon steel blade and mocking everyone for placing their hopes in something so weak. That's the exact moment Istolfa snaps. He tells Galahad to shut up immediately because insulting the sword is crossing the line. He explains that the blade carries the memories of everyone who supported him and helped him survive this far. Every scratch and crack on that sword represents the people who stood beside him. Istolfa says he doesn't care if Galahad insults him, but he refuses to let somebody disrespect the people who believed in him. Now fully fired up, Istolfa declares that he's going to defeat Galahad with this very sword. Weirdly enough, that speech only makes Galahad even more excited. Bro starts grinning like a gym villain hearing the motivational backstory. He tells Istolfa to finally show his true strength because he's going to crush those superficial memories himself. The two clash again while the entire arena watches in complete silence. Then in one brutal moment, Istolfa's blade shatters apart. Galahad looks at the broken sword and coldly calls his memories fragile. Galahad starts clowning Istolfa for talking all that big game only to get folded right after. Istolfa's friends are panicking watching him get demolished, while Joseph is straight up having the time of his life and orders Galahad to finish him off already. Galahad is more than happy to follow those orders and immediately goes back on the attack. Though Istolfa blocks whatever he can and desperately runs around trying to survive, but Galahad stays glued to him the entire time, throwing kicks and punches like he's farming combo points in a fighting game. At this point, even the audience starts realizing this fight is horribly one-sided, and our boy is about to get packed up live in 4K. Brigitte goes pale hearing everybody say that and quickly announces she's ready to admit defeat. Unfortunately, Joseph is a certified hater and refuses to accept it because he wants the entire arena to witness the downfall of arrogant fools. Kyle immediately reminds everyone that a duel only ends when both sides agree to the result. Meanwhile, down in the arena, Istolfa is receiving the beating of a lifetime. Galahad tells him to beg for mercy, because maybe Joseph would spare him if he humiliates himself enough. Bode wants Istolfa to crash out in front of all his friends for entertainment, but Istolfa refuses, so Galahad decides it's time for the final blow. Even then, Istolfa refuses to accept defeat because he can still move and still fight. He desperately wishes he had his sword back, and almost like the universe heard him locking in, the broken blade suddenly starts glowing so brightly that even Galahad freezes for a second. The next moment, light floods the entire arena, and Node steps forward, reminding Istolfa that he promised to show him how far his sword could truly reach. Aura levels instantly max out. Galahad thinks it's just some flashy light show and charges forward anyway, but the second their weapons clash he realizes something's wrong. Istolfa is suddenly holding an entirely different sword. Kyle is confused and wonders if the Mana Eater transforms somehow, while Dorma explains that the weapon is originally a dungeon blade, first, and a Mana Eater second. It probably absorbed Galahad's mana little by little throughout the fight and evolved because of it. Dorma says the weapon feels familiar somehow, and Brigitte confirms that they're looking at Runeraker, the legendary sword supposedly wielded by the mercenary king himself. It's not the actual sword, but notices mana is influencing Istolfa's blade and recreating its power. According to the records, Runeraker was also an insanely powerful mana eater. That explains why Galahad's mana is draining way faster now, but despite literally getting nerfed in real time, the guy still refuses to surrender. Tella finally joins the conversation too and explains that Istolfa has been pumping ridiculous amounts of mana into the sword this entire fight. She says mana eaters don't just absorb magic, they can also release that stored power later, and now the blade is way stronger than before. From the looks of it, Istolfa already charged it enough and just needs the right trigger for the next move. Good thing Nuts once told Istolfa to become one with his sword, because now our boy finally understands what he meant. Istolfa asks Nuts to lend him his strength, and with that he unleashes a massive attack that sends Galahad flying straight into a wall. Galahad is completely stunned, trying to process the fact that Istolfa just blasted him with his own absorbed mana. Even after getting folded into masonry, this man still refuses to admit defeat because the ego is genuinely undefeated. Joseph keeps screaming at him to stand back up, which only makes Galahad even more furious at the idea of losing to someone he sees as a naive kid. Istolfa tells him that every single one of his friends helped him become stronger, and that by himself he's honestly nothing special. The only reason he made it this far is because of the people standing beside him, and that's exactly why he needs to prove himself now. He admits he still has a long way to go and needs to become even stronger, even if it means risking his life to do it. Galahad basically says bro thinks friendship is an actual strategy, and refuses to believe in any of that motivational speech stuff. To him, pretty speeches won't help anyone survive in the real world. But Istolfa casually replies that talking is kinda the only thing he's good at anyway. That line makes Stella smile because it reminds her that Istolfa has been exactly like this since the day they first met. No matter how horrible things get, he never changes who he is, and that's the reason she trusted him with her feelings in the first place. In Stella's eyes, Istolfa is genuinely the best. Bro got the emotional support buff activated. Kyle lowers his head and thinks the match is basically over now. Even Brigitte tells Joseph she'll accept the result if he admits defeat. But Joseph turns out to be the saltiest loser imaginable and suddenly throws some weird object toward Galahad. ordering him to use it. He claims it's a piece of the fragment, so Galahad instantly smirks, realizing Joseph was hiding it the whole time, and immediately eats it without questioning anything. Istolfa instantly realizes something's off because the fragment looks absolutely nothing like that. Even Brigitte desperately warns Galahad not to use it because it isn't a fragment at all. Unfortunately, it's already too late. Galahad starts feeling a huge power boost at first and thinks he just unlocked premium DLC strength. Then things go horribly wrong. His body suddenly starts mutating and growing larger, while his armor explodes apart from the transformation. Everybody in the arena starts panicking and demands to know what's happening. Brigitte explains that Galahad just consumed a blood crystal, an artificial magic stone created from actual human bodies. The crystal is basically condensed resentment and suffering from countless victims, literally the darkest side of alchemy imaginable. And anybody who absorbs it stops being human altogether. Broda really turned himself into an Elden Ring boss for a power-up. Istolfa is suddenly standing face-to-face with a full-blown nightmare monster, and the entire audience instantly starts panicking. Stella casually explains that a normal human body can't properly handle an artificial magic stone like the blood crystal, and once somebody transforms like this, they can never go back to being a rational human again. Basically, Galahad is permanently cooked. Meanwhile, Joseph, the absolute clown that he is, gets hyped instead, and orders Galahad to flex his new power already. The monster immediately responds by swallowing its own sword whole, which somehow annoys Joseph because apparently bro expected obedience from a mutated demon creature. He even smacks the monster and complains that it's not working properly. Actual zero survival instincts detected. Stella watches all this looking completely unimpressed and explains that the monster hasn't fully adapted to its transformed body yet. Right now it's basically just a starving wild animal running on pure instinct. And just like she predicted, the monster suddenly turns around and attacks Joseph instead. Brigitte panics while Joseph keeps yelling at the creature, reminding it that he's the master and demanding obedience like some guy trying to reconnect a broken Bluetooth speaker. Obviously, the monster couldn't care less and starts straight up munching on Joseph in front of the entire arena. Everybody watches in horror while Joseph gets folded by his own terrible life decisions. After that, the monster locks onto the next closest target, which unfortunately happens to be Istolfa. Our boy struggles to keep distance because the thing is absolutely gigantic, but he already knows he's the one who has to stop it. Bro's side quests somehow always become world-ending boss fights. Meanwhile, the audience starts evacuating in complete chaos, and one soldier even tells Kyle to run too. Kyle instantly shuts him down and orders the soldiers to bring weapons instead. Dorma is confused by the sudden confidence boost, but Kyle explains that Joseph is dead now, meaning the duel is officially over. At this point, they're no longer opponents. They're a raid party trying to bring down a monster. Dorma immediately locks in with the plan and the two rush into action. However, Brigitte suddenly gets summoned to the king by royal order. Once she arrives, she asks if he seriously plans to keep watching from a safe distance while everyone else risks their lives. She says this is her fight too, and even Kyle joined the battle, so she wants to fight as well. But the king refuses because now there are barely any successors left in the royal family. He reminds her of her duty. That response finally makes Brigitte snap. She asks if the kingdom is literally the only thing he cares about. Joseph just died right in front of him, yet he didn't even flinch. She asks if none of his children are even worth shedding tears over. The king quietly responds that everybody is a pawn for the survival of the kingdom. Brigitte, Kyle, their friends, even himself. Everybody exists for that purpose. Bro really dropped the coldest king speech imaginable. Back in the arena, Istolfa keeps fighting the monster, but even his upgraded runeraker can't cut through it. It feels like the creature has invisible armor covering its entire body. The monster fires magic attacks, and while the mana eater absorbs them, the sword starts reacting strangely afterward. Before things get worse, the monster lunges directly at Istolfa, only for Kyle to blast it with Mega Bolt, while soldiers rush in to surround it. Dorma quickly heals Istolfa, while Kyle admits his strongest attacks barely scratch the thing. Istolfa warns them that even runeraker can't properly damage it, and the sword couldn't even absorb the monster's mana correctly. Dorma thinks it through and realizes the issue isn't mana, it's a curse. The monster is wrapped in cursed energy, and runeraker is actively rejecting it. Basically, the curse acts like an invisible shield around the monster's body. Kyle adds that they'd need an enormous amount of mana to break through the curse, but nobody knows where they'd even get that kind of power. Then Istolfa suddenly remembers the fragment and immediately tells the others. The monster attacks again while Kyle confirms Dorma still has the fragment. Kyle orders him to fuse it with runeraker. Dorma hesitates because they're literally talking about combining a national treasure with a legendary weapon during a boss fight. But Kyle reminds him the fragment exists to protect the kingdom and its people. If there was ever a moment to use it, this is it. Hearing that completely stuns Brigitte because she realizes something important. The idea of using the fragment for the kingdom's sake never even crossed her mind before because she was too afraid of carrying that responsibility herself. Now she starts wondering how heavy that burden must feel for her father every single day. Dorma finally takes out the fragment and begins merging it with runeraker. Everyone watches while praying this doesn't instantly explode. Then the fusion completes, and the sword transforms into a glowing blue blade radiating pure mana. The sheer energy around it makes the weapon look gigantic, like some legendary final form anime sword. Aura levels genuinely maxed out. Listolfa slowly stands back up with full determination again. The monster's attacks are growing stronger while Kyle's mana reserves are almost empty. Istolfa tells Kyle to fall back, then charges straight at the monster himself. He swings the new blade, and for the first time it actually pierces through the creature's cursed armor. The monster freezes in shock, but Istolfa doesn't stop there. He unleashes another slash and cuts the monster clean in half right in front of everybody. The entire arena witnesses the impossible happen live. Once he's finally sure the monster is defeated, Istolfa collapses onto the ground from exhaustion. Everybody rushes over to praise him, but our humble king immediately says he couldn't have done any of it without them. The soldiers are completely stunned that a group of kids just defeated a monster like that, while Stella simply smiles because she already knew he had that dog in him. Brigitte also praises Istolfa and says he's amazing, but Istolfa only says he's glad she's safe. She starts hurrying toward him, although right at that moment the monster's eyes suddenly opens again. Joseph's spirit starts ranting that he will become king before launching a massive stone directly toward Brigitte. The stone crashes into her position, and everyone freezes. But when the dust finally clears, Brigitte sees someone standing over her protecting her from the impact. It's her father. Brigitte is completely stunned, but the king quietly explains that he trained himself to always act like a king first. However, in that moment he couldn't stop himself from moving, as her father instead. The maid escorts Istolfa to meet the king, and surprisingly, the king actually thanks him for coming. Istolfa asks about his condition, and the king assures him the kingdom has plenty of insanely skilled healers handling things. Istolfa notices the king's arm though, and the king explains that the injury was way too severe for the bones to properly reconnect. Even so, he says losing an arm is a pretty small price considering everything that happened. Tadui immediately jumps in and promises she'll eventually make him an incredible prosthetic arm herself. The king smiles hearing that, but then admits he dragged all of them into the kingdom's mess. That's why he wanted to speak with them personally and explain the truth behind the palace. Apparently, the royal family has followed a brutal tradition since the kingdom was first founded. The heirs are basically forced into competition with one another, and only the strongest gets the throne in the end. The palace treats this whole system like it's completely normal, and even the current king himself had to survive it in the past. Changing the tradition isn't easy, because everybody in the palace clings to it like it's sacred DLC lore. Then the king reveals something huge. When his scouts informed him that Kyle met Stella, he saw a chance for hope. Stella's influence is so absurdly massive that entire countries can shift their political decisions based on her mood alone. Bro basically says she's built like a walking geopolitical event. The king thought that if he could bring Stella into the palace and keep her there for a while, maybe the entire rotten system could finally start changing. That's also why he ended up involving these kids in palace affairs. Borvi directly asks Istolfa if hearing all this makes him think less of him now. Istolfa thinks carefully before answering and admits that the king has hurt people, but he doesn't think the king was completely wrong either. From Istolfa's perspective, the king was desperately trying to protect both his country and his family at the same time, and he carried that burden completely alone. Istolfa says he honestly can't even imagine how hard ruling an entire nation must be. Still, he suggests the king should rely on other people more from now on, because there are definitely people out there willing to support him. Hearing such a straightforward answer completely catches the king off guard, and he actually starts laughing. He says Istolfa talks without any hidden motives or suspicion at all, which feels almost unreal inside a palace full of schemers. The king genuinely thinks Istolfa is an incredible young man. He asks about their plans for leaving. Istolfa explains that Kyle doesn't want to stay in the palace any longer, and they also want to continue exploring the dungeon. The king mentions he already knows about Istolfa's past, and Istolfa confirms he only arrived in Eltria a few years ago and has basically been living there temporarily ever since. Locked. That's when the king suddenly says he wants to give Istolfa ownership of a mansion maintained by Philard. Our boy is absolutely stunned because bro went from homeless dungeon gremlin to accidental property owner. The king explains that if Istolfa plans on seriously challenging the dungeon, he deserves a real place to settle down. The estate is pretty run down at the moment though, so the king wants it rebuilt before officially handing it over. Istolfa instantly tries to reject the offer because there's no way he can accept something so huge, but the king insists, saying it's thanks to Istolfa that he didn't lose even more of his children. He admits this gift could never fully repay him, but he still wants Istolfa to accept it as proof of his gratitude. From now on, that mansion will become a place Istolfa can truly call home. Hearing that completely breaks our boy emotionally because he never even imagined having a home of his own someday. He thanks the king sincerely and starts preparing to leave, although Brigitte stops him for a moment. She tells him he fought well during the duel and should proudly hold his head high as a knight. Istolfa thanks her, although he also apologizes for using the fragment during the battle. Brigitte tells him there's nothing to apologize for because she's actually happy he used it correctly after she trusted him with it. Istolfa notices she feels different now, and Brigitte admits the palace is still filled with dangerous people and malicious schemes. She doubts her life there will magically become easy overnight. Even so, the palace somehow feels less terrifying than before now. Astolfa asks if she's still afraid of the king, and Brigitte honestly says she doesn't really know anymore. But one thing she did learn is that nothing changes unless somebody takes the first step forward. So for now, she's decided she'll trust her father and support him from his side. Then she suddenly asks Astolfa if he'd like to officially become her champion. Astolfa feels honored hearing that, but he explains he wants to become a first-class adventurer more than anything else. When Brigitte asks why, he says he can't help admiring adventurers. More importantly, the friends fighting beside him and the people promising to show him all kinds of new sights are the reason he's able to keep moving forward. He wants to discover how far he can go together with them. Brigitte says she already figured a rough and barbaric world suits him way better anyway, which makes Astolfa instantly whine about being roasted again. Even so, she promises she'll always keep a place open beside her for him, as thanks for everything he's done. She says she's genuinely glad he was the person she trusted with her fate back then. Then she thanks him and calls him her hero. Bro really completed the palace arc with max relationship points. After saying their goodbyes, the party finally leaves the palace behind along with all its politics, schemes, and trauma farming. On the road back, Stella asks Astolfa what he thought about the royal palace. He says so much insane stuff happened that it's honestly hard to summarize. Dorma jumps in and says the whole experience was unbelievably hectic, but Kyle instantly reminds him that all he did was sit around reading books the entire time. Bro got exposed immediately. Astolfa then asks Kyle if he's really okay with leaving after finally proving himself inside the palace. Kyle says he's pretty sure the royals just wanted him gone from the party anyway. After getting lightly scolded for that comment, Kyle explains that his real goal right now is improving his magic and becoming an incredible mage someday. When Astolfa stays quiet afterward, Kyle gets annoyed and asks what's with the weird silence. Astolfa then asks whether Kyle would have accepted the fragment's power for himself if given the chance. Kyle immediately refuses. He says he wants to stand firmly on his own feet and grow stronger through his own effort and pride. Galahad forgot something that simple and ended up destroying himself chasing shortcuts. That answer makes Astolfa wonder if he might have turned out like Galahad too if he had never met Stella, since their situations weren't actually that different. Everybody immediately looks at him and says with absolute certainty that he never would have become like that. Kyle flat out says Astolfa simply isn't the kind of person capable of thinking that way. Plus, he has his party beside him now. Astolfa understands what they mean and thanks them. He admits there are still countless things he doesn't know yet, but he's genuinely happy he got to visit the palace after all. Stella quietly smiles hearing that but eventually they finally arrive back at the dungeon city of Eltria, and naturally their very first stop becomes the dungeon itself. The moment they stand in front of it again, they all realize this place honestly feels more like home than the palace ever did. Dorma and Kyle instantly get hyped about jumping back into exploration, but Astolfa notices Stella still hasn't stepped out of the carriage, because she sits there quietly lost in thought until Astolfa calls out to her. Stella looks at him for a moment and thinks to herself that it's finally about time for her to leave.